spinning like a dream. Brooklyn vibes to the world it leans. Pixel warriors gather round, controllers clicking, that's the sound. Using games to break it down, from the boroughs to the global town. Welcome to the game lounge. Welcome to the game lounge, where the players hang and the beats pound. Golden Crust and CJ in the mix, dropping heat hotter than a joystick fix. Used to roll with Ash Ketchum, the OG squad. Now CJ brings the fire, no facade. Word game sharper than a ninja's blade. Every Sunday we got the arcade made. From Twitch to the globe we taking flight. Brooklyn roots, though we shine worldwide. Press start if you're ready to vibe. The Game Lounge crew keeping it live. Gather round, no hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, no hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, no hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, go to the game lounge. Welcome to the game lounge. The game lounge. Welcome to the game lounge. To the game lounge. Welcome to the game lounge. To the game. Yo, the Sunday night we hit the screen. Golden Crust moved under the gaming king. CJ the DJ spinning like a dream. Brooklyn vibes to the world it leans. Pixel warriors gather round, controllers clicking, that's the sound. Using games to break it down, from the boroughs to the global town. Welcome to the game lounge. Welcome to the game lounge, where the players hang and the beats pound. Golden Crust and CJ in the mix, dropping heat hotter than a joystick fix. Used to roll with Ash Ketchum, the OG squad. Now CJ brings the fire, no facade. Word game sharper than a ninja's blade. Every Sunday we got the arcade made. From Twitch to the globe we taking flight. Brooklyn roots, though we shine worldwide. Press start if you're ready to vibe. The Game Lounge crew keeping it live. Gather round, no hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, no hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw. Gather round, no hit pause. For the gamers we the cause. Cheat codes, now we play raw.
Yo.
What do you do, everybody? Well, we're just visiting.
Yeah. As y'all know,
It's YN Day.
it's YN Day.
House is full of YN.
YN Day.
It's their show.
Yep.
It's their show. But welcome into the Game Lounge, everybody. Season 3, episode, what we got, 18?
18.
Episode 18.
18, damn
I
it,
am
18.
your host for the next couple minutes.
Yeah.
I am Golden Crush 200,
Yeah.
aka Mr. 200, and my man right here,
CJ the DJ.
CJ.
I'm not the co-host today. I am not. I am not the co-host today. I am only just a guest. We are guests.
We're guests.
We're guests.
We're not gonna be up here much longer.
No, not for long. We just here, just bringing in the show, starting it off, getting it together and whatnot. But Mr. Broke Nation here.
What's going on? Yeah, we in here 50 deep. 50 deep.
Mr.
Mr.
Krypton.
Krypton.
Drop a bomb for Mr. Krypton. First time chat.
Welcome to the game line, Mr. Krypton.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
You
indeed.
came on a good day. I don't know what age bracket you're in, Mr. Krypton, but it's YN day.
Yes, it's YN Day.
I'm usually the host.
Yes.
He's usually the co-host.
Yes.
Are you a YN?
Yes.
It's usually the queen of the show.
Right. For sure.
So, bro, go around the room and introduce your YNeries.
Yep.
That you got going on.
Everyone
But that's
else
not
at
our
the show.
job.
Right. Well, you don't have to introduce the queen of the show because y'all pretty much know her.
Yes,
Y'all pretty much know her.
Yes. This is our queen.
It's over.
You know?
Right.
This is the people's.
This is the YN's queen. right here. You want to say your name? You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Miss Nation. I'm Broke Nation's girlfriend.
Miss Nation.
Drop a bomb for Broke Nation. Yeah.
So if y'all wanted me, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, we got YN number 2 over
Everybody
here.
know
Sir,
why.
you know why
what
number
am I doing?
2 Fazbear Corporation. You know your boy.
Let him do his job. Let him do his job.
Muscle memory.
Yeah.
Muscle memory.
Let him do his job.
My bad.
Don't be back here talking shit. I heard just your side.
The threats of my mom, my
You
business.
was talking shit to me.
You started it.
He started
You
it.
started it.
I'm a mind my business on that one, chat. How y'all doing today?
The smart YN right here.
Yes.
So we got more people on the way. We got Mr. Ash Ketchum.
Yes, that's our guy, Cousin Ash.
Who's
Yeah?
the big brother YN team.
Right.
And he's rolling up with one of our champions of the show.
No coach,
Right.
they got me in the back.
Coach said Monet sitting in the front row because she carrying CJ Kozavius Jr. the
Jr.
third.
third.
Drop a bomb for
Yeah.
CJ Kozavius Jr. the third.
So,
First nephew.
like I said, Mr. Ash Ketchum is on the way. The YN's a big bro, and he's bringing our champion script with him.
Right.
We love when
Definitely
script
love,
pops
yeah.
up, of course.
Love when they come through. But Cousin Ash and Cousin Script.
And Cousin Script.
Yeah,
Yep.
Cousin Script, yeah.
Why am I still talking?
We doing a little beginning intro part. This is the beginning part.
Okay.
Right,
We're beginning for, so
I know
can
when
I-
to talk. I know when to talk.
We good? We good?
Hey, we just go ahead.
Sure?
y'all do
Man,
your
we're
thing.
doing that there. It's the beginning. We just want to keep everybody
You want me
informed.
pour you something?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, a little bit more,
pour
Mix it
him
up. Mix it up.
Yeah, mix it up. Pour this man a drink right here. Yeah, as you should. Here we go. Yes.
My good sir.
Pour it up. Yes.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go. You good?
Coconut cream.
Yes, sir.
Cream.
Coconut.
No, it's just coconut, no cream. No cream. No.
I ain't giving no man no cream.
Hey, yo. Heavy on that. Hey, yo. Yeah, heavy on the hey, yo. Drop a bomb, please.
Drop a bomb for the hey, yo.
Okay, so we got some current events? Or?
Yes, we do indeed.
What you got, man? What you got?
All right, so,
This
as
is
we
his
put down the
current
drinks,
events.
Yeah.
All
This
right,
is
so,
him.
Listen, I got my drink.
I'm pretty sure y'all ain't no cream donations
I'm
tonight.
switching
What are you talking about?
Alright, so what you got? Broke Nation, what you got?
So for the first current events, we're gonna pay our respects to the goat. Hold on. Wait. Stupid mouse. All right, let's pay our respects to the goat. Akira Toriyama.
Of course.
Yes, the GOAT.
He died today 2 years ago.
Wow.
2 years ago.
March 1st.
Yep.
March 1st.
Yep, the GOAT.
Matter of fact, real quick, go back to couch scene real quick. I don't mean to cut off Akira people. You know, he's definitely the GOAT in his own right, but we have to put some riz on something else too.
Okay.
We definitely just finished off Black History Month, so drop a bomb for
Of
that.
course. Yes.
We definitely finished off Black History Month.
Of course.
And it is officially today Women's History Month, so let's drop a bomb for Women's History Month.
The ladies.
Yes, indeed. For the ladies, yes. So put some riz on that. I gotta put a little bit of riz on that.
Of course.
So yeah, we can go back to the GOAT Akira now.
Yeah.
Make sure we put some riz on the Women's History
course,
Month.
of course.
You know.
Right. All right. So back to the goat. Yeah. So yeah, it's a damn shame, man. Damn, I'm sorry, man.
Sucks, man. Thank you Mr.
Yeah.
Toriyama for
Yeah.
Right, for everything.
Everything.
All about childhood. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me in my room like this, giving Goku
Yes.
energy.
Right, that's a whole fact.
Screaming, trying to turn Super Saiyan. I'm
Thank-
still trying to.
thank you
I'm
for
still
all-
trying.
I'm still
I'm still-
It doesn't stop.
I'm still.
I'm the oldest nigga here, and I'm still trying.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. But all right, so after that, let me see. Let me go in order.
He got a list.
He got a list. Huh?
Yeah, I got a list. Indeed.
He's prepared.
Indeed, I am
Yes.
prepared today. All right, so
Because said you got to be more
Got
careful.
to be more careful.
Got to be
Ain't no
more
way.
careful. Yes.
So the second current events that we're going for is Pokemon Day was actually on the 27th last week actually.
Okay, yes,
Okay.
Friday
Yes, it was.
actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Friday.
Was that the same day that
Resident Evil came out.
Friday.
Resident Evil.
So yeah, shout out to that too. Resident Evil came out. Don't know if y'all played it yet. Pretty good game.
I-
Great.
CJ plays it.
Damn.
CJ plays it on CJ the DJ.
And
I'll
you was
put
there
his
Friday
stream
night
up.
too.
I'll put
Being
his
Hell
the
stream
first
up.
one on there.
Friday night, 12 midnight, goddamn it. And when I tell you that game is amazing,
Let's put his
Woo.
stream up there if anybody interested in looking at it. It's underscore the DJ, right?
no,
Just CJ
Yep.
the DJ.
Yep.
Alright, so CJ.
this is my Twitch, yeah.
Yeah.
This is my Twitch. Yeah.
Oh my god, this mouse and stuff. All right, wait. The
The mouse
keyboard.
does not have nothing to do with that, man.
I think it's you.
No, because I'm used to a gaming keyboard. I'm used to a gaming. What the
Yeah.
fuck? You know what? I'm trying. I have a whole keyboard at the house. It's real sensitive.
We're
real
gonna
sensitive.
mind our business.
Mind our business.
Indeed. Anyway, all right. Let's get to the video.
That
CJ does it,
is
it
my
works.
Twitch, so it'd be twitch.tv/CJ the DJ. So make sure you go check that out. But like I said, Resident Evil is an amazing game. If you ask me, game of the
Youngins don't know
year.
how to use technology.
Why is Koza
Yeah,
violating
Youngin don't know how to use. You
Koza
see
in
what I'm
my
saying?
room.
You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm Galaxy Storm.
Koza,
You feel me?
look at the keyboard. Koza, look at the keyboard I'm
It's
using.
a keyboard.
It's not a YN keyboard,
It's
all
a
right?
keyboard.
It's a keyboard.
It's a keyboard.
All right, well, excuse
That's
me.
not the YN
My
keyboard.
keyboard
That
at home has 1
that
millisecond
is-
response time.
That
God
is
damn it.
that is the senior keyboard. That is the senior keyboard.
That's okay. We got a 4 millisecond response time.
That's
That's
not
fine.
that's not
Whatever,
the YN
but alright,
keyboard, though.
so-
You gotta bring in the YN keyboard now.
All right, so
It works with our fingers. Our fingers are not 1
I'm just
millisecond
saying,
fast.
I've never seen
Right.
the keyboard not work
It
before.
works with the old head
you got a
keyboard.
point. You got a point.
It works
But like I
with the
said,
old heads.
my keyboard has a 1 millisecond response time. Got RGB lighting. It's a YN keyboard. I can't work with this
See
shit.
why they pay for shit they don't need?
That's fine.
Clap it up for 1 millisecond.
1
Clap it up for
millisecond.
1
My
millisecond.
bad.
Right.
My bad.
1 millisecond is fire when you're playing video games. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's bullshit. Anyway.
It doesn't throw a Hadouken any fast.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It
I'm
doesn't.
gonna start from here. Yeah, I'm gonna start from here. But yeah, Pokemon Day was on the Friday, so they released the presents for basically the upcoming stuff that we have coming up for any game, as in Pokemon Cafe, the Switch games, TCGs you can see on the screen.
Pokemon Go too?
Yeah,
Yes.
Pokemon Go as
Okay,
well.
cool, 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 alright.
A bunch of updated stuff. So I'm gonna start from here because the whole 20 minutes is crazy.
Yeah.
That's wild work. So I'm gonna start from here. Maybe we're gonna skip it.
All right.
Bunch of upcoming shit.
Upcoming shit for the Pokemon stuff. Yeah.
You don't see me, Pikachu.
Pull that.
Mhm.
Coliseum.
Oh,
Pokemon Coliseum's coming
Yep.
back.
Gale of Darkness.
it's the same one.
Yep, same one from 64.
GameCube.
No, GameCube. Right.
GameCube.
Coliseum was it? Oh, Stadium was on.
Stadium was on 64. Yeah. 1 and 2 Stadium. Stadium. Stadium is on the Nintendo Switch 64 retro gaming shit.
All right.
Oh, I really like Pocket Turtle.
Why did capture
Pokemon's over here.
Yeah, Pokemon was good. Yeah. But they stopped it, which is so stupid. I don't know why. It was pretty good.
Loved it. Get my son to try.
It give you a chance to really like play Pokemon the right way, like fighting games style,
Right.
and not turn based.
We're done the one windpipe. I don't mean like that.
Hey,
How was
yo.
that game?
Hey, yo.
It was a drink.
But definitely give it up for
Alright,
the
so
Pokemon.
the
Yeah.
rest of this stuff is stuff that really isn't really needed. So we're just gonna skip to the newest game that's coming out, which is revelational to us, Pokemon fans and trainers out here. Which is
Yes, indeed.
which is Generation 10. We on Gen 10, y'all. For
Gen-
one.
We'd like to end our presentation today with one
I can
final
name all
video
the
for you all.
Pokemon in the back.
Of course, they all Gen 1.
Thank you for tuning
They all
in.
Gen 1, of
Exactly.
course. Of course. So, he got one more thing to say, which is this. It looks so amazing too, bro.
Ooh, you running Unreal Engine 5 for the Pokemon game?
What's this?
The newest
The
game
new
coming out for the
Pokemon
Switch.
coming out for the Switch.
Why it looks so good?
That's what I said. We running Unreal Engine 5.
Switch 2 only.
Of course, they gotta put Pikachu because it's the damn mascot.
Look at it.
Yeah.
Let's stop trying to bag.
Ooh-wee.
Nah.
We getting bikes back now?
No, this is just showing you the different things from the game. So this is Gen 5. Start from 1. Yeah, this is 6. 7, which is the Alola region, which is and this is 8, Sword and Shield, which you played.
Nice.
This is
That's
of course,
9.
which is
Wow.
And this is it.
Yeah, I'm just going
Yeah, get out the way,
You
Pikachu.
got Switch.
Yeah. I'm gonna scoot on back there right now while we.
Oh,
My guy, cousin.
Mouse! What's going on, my boy?
Oh, my man.
Scoot on back here.
Let me get
What's up, Ash?
in the
What's going
corner,
on?
Okay.
I guess.
My cousin
Yo.
Squid right here.
Yo, what's
My
going
guy,
on?
Squid, what's up?
What
All
up,
right, so
my boy?
CJ, we ready to shake up the?
Yeah, I'm going back there right now.
Okay, so let's let them know what's going on. Chat, we're gonna rearrange the
My
seating
guys,
arrangements and let
What's
them
good, Chad? What's good, man? I'm here, man. What's
let
up?
them take over.
Yeah, I got you.
Do the
Why
boot.
and take over? They need to scoot on back
I get
here.
it,
Thank you.
I know, I get it. Alright, so be right back soon, right?
It's the game now.
Wait.
All the way down. All
Jesus,
the way down.
Jesus. Alright, be right back. Alright, go. Oh shit, what the fuck? Technical difficulties. My co-host is ass.
Fuck you. No, fuck you, asshole.
In the back.
But anyway, alright. What's going on, chat? What's going on? Let me put y'all back up here. Yeah, let me put y'all back up here. Damn, you
You good?
As soon as I said it, you said it with me. Damn, alright, give me a second. Alright, chat. Damn, why is it so zoomed out? Wait a minute.
You gotta pin it to the
It's crazy.
thing first. You gotta pin it to that and then take it back down.
Alright, so then do this, bong, and then where's the other
Take
way?
chat back out.
Okay,
Alright, cool. Then take chat.
Nah, I'm good.
He said, I am good. I am
I'm
good.
Hawaiian still, you know?
He said, I am
This
still good.
nigga here.
I'm doing bad right now. All right, there we go.
All right, big bro.
All right, there we go. All right. Technical difficulties.
On your way.
Yeah, I know.
Chill.
I'm still big bro right now too. I got a couple.
Nah, I'm still Unk.
OG Triple OG and Unk.
Nah, you see, that's crazy.
OG
OG started at
triple
44,
OG.
45.
All right, so
OG triple
my
my
OG.
fault. All right, so
No,
my,
I ain't on to yet.
Yeah.
I'm only 33.
damn.
Oh my god.
All right, so chat here. All right, so it's you do this right. You do this right. All right, so it's Broke Nation. In the front we got Mrs. Broke Nation. We got YN number 2.
Fives.
We got the back panel. Y'all like to introduce
Y'all know us
yourself?
already.
Hello.
Yeah,
GK and all that.
we got somebody new.
Gotta hit the clap off.
I was got script.
Yeah, cousin Script.
He ain't new. That's the Game Live champion.
Yeah,
Right here. That's the whole champion right
Well, they didn't see his face. They just see his moves.
here. And we got Ash Ketchum.
Yeah,
Popping
yes,
Ash.
Yeah, we can't even see him.
Ash
Yeah.
like
Right, we can't even see him.
Let's do those.
You look like the family member that nobody would in there.
I said, Jesus Christ, y'all need a technician.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
First off, I'm
The
tired of you.
OG's got a technician.
I'm tired of you.
They gotta get a YN.
Yo, Galaxy Storms. We tired of
Let
you.
the YNs do their thing.
We tired
No,
of
I'm
you.
tired of you because me and you gonna have to fight now. Don't do this. Don't do this. Not today.
Let
All
me
right,
know
cool.
if we need
He said,
paintball guns.
look
Hey,
at
we need
Mr.
paintball guns
Miss
involved in this?
Peacock.
We need paintball guns?
That's up.
Do we need paintball guns in this?
The people.
Yeah, we gonna need
It's a
paintball
stream. We
guns.
talking about guns. All right, so back to the current events where we was going. We was where the fuck?
We was at Pokemon. We was at
Stop,
Pokemon.
Please stop. Don't do this to me. Not right now. Oh my god.
It's the mouse. You gotta know how to move it.
Yeah, the mouse is weird. So
CJ know
weird. I know CJ know how to do it. God damn it. I know. God damn it. I know. Oh my god. Why is it looking like that down here? Okay, I know why.
You need help?
You know what? No, I don't need
Yes,
help.
he
He
does.
said, I don't need
I got this. I am
He said,
a technician myself.
He said,
Alright, cool.
I got
Boom.
this.
Alright, we good now. We got it.
But it's okay.
We got it. What you mean? Look at the screen. The screen is cool.
Alright, cool.
The
No,
screen
it's
out of
not.
here is
Look
cool.
at that.
We still on couch scene, bro.
I got you. I know this. No, stop!
Oh my god!
You know what?
Nobody
Alright.
knows what we're looking at right now.
I know
see
that. I
TI.
know that. I seen it. Jesus Christ.
I see Naruto niggas.
Please, bro, because I'm doing bad right now. The mouse fucking up with me. The keyboard fucking with me.
How come you ain't
Give
get a
CJ the
mouse
pillow.
pad
I
yet?
think
Wait, where's the mouse pad?
Give him
Please.
the pillow. We
Give
got
him the
one.
pillow!
It's on the pillow. The pillow. Not
Give him the
freaking-
pillow!
CJ the pillow.
Just give him the pillow! God damn it!
I will get better at this. Just give me some change. Just give me some time for me. I'll be better
At this
I
point,
think we need
yo,
major
can we
help.
fire him at this point?
Bro, I don't need major help. Bro, when I'm home, I'm real quick.
Because
When I'm
You don't
here,
believe-
ass.
you
it's not the
believe
same keyboard.
We don't believe
I have
it.
nice things at home.
It's not the same keyboard. I'm used to this keyboard. I got it.
Because you ain't touch a gaming keyboard. You ain't touch a
I
gaming
know
keyboard.
what
Oh
a game
my
is.
god.
1 millisecond response time.
First
goddamn
of
it.
all, I know what a gaming keyboard
just
is
set my
compared
cup.
to
See,
a
even you
regular
messing up.
keyboard.
You should have plastic cups on your left.
Hey! What the hell? Where?
Look on the
On the
ledge.
table,
Yeah, that shit over there.
And they all the way in the back. Yeah. Oh, so it wasn't
I
me.
got. Where's the
I know it was the damn mouse. I know it was the mouse.
Somebody pass script the
I feel better.
drink.
It's working. It's just not.
It's not fast enough because it's dying.
Cause Broke Nation broke it.
Wow, yeah, blame it on the black guy, especially right after Black History Month.
Technically, we're
We
all
got-
Oh, yeah,
you
you
I
want
got Gluttony coming through with the rage.
Yeah, man.
This
Yeah,
is
man.
crazy.
I'm
I'm
driving
doing bad
something.
already.
I'm fixing everything for him, guys. Give me a
It's
second.
okay.
Yeah, I saw you on a bike.
It's a lot to
KP, that was
fix.
you, right?
Yeah, my white big ripper, right?
Yeah.
Nah, I'm not being myself. I'm just saying, you know, I'm ass at this.
Stop it.
Oh.
They got your back, so they ain't got
I was over
No,
there
I
at
got
Uber's,
it.
yeah.
No.
Nah, it's the mouse, bro. I'm telling you, it's the mouse.
Uber,
You know what?
bro. I stay getting bread, bro.
I was just
You know
about to
that
say, I was gonna give him my
fitness,
own
like-
mouse, but fucking Jason was it, so I can't even give him my own mouse.
You still didn't find that shit?
You still-
I need one of them games on hoodies, man, on the
I swear
house
I did
too.
it.
On the house?
Yeah, nigga, on the house.
Oh, you out
man.
here stealing,
The
nigga?
black
Alright,
John.
sit on.
Black one? Like what he got?
What other colors you got? Is black and white so far?
Look on the end. Let me know.
It is at the house, I'm pretty sure.
No problem, bro.
I'm letting him, you know, get time.
Not
you
the
know, break it
batteries,
out,
not the
start
AA
using it.
batteries.
Yo, what mouse is he using?
What's that?
I swear if I see my mouse, I'm blocking.
Nah, I'm trying to.
Oh, rum chop.
Yeah, rum chara.
So it wasn't me. I know it wasn't me.
Look, that's already bad enough. I was saying about 2 shots of the Jose.
That's why I was messing up.
You heard? The Jose.
I know.
That's the shit that I had. I only had 2 shots of
It's
that.
okay though.
Because when I go home
I
to
know
that,
it's
I'm
okay.
gonna be fucking.
I
Yo,
feel better
Glenn,
now.
welcome in. The YNs broke everything.
Yeah.
No, not the YNs. This YN broke everything.
Yeah, blame the black guy right after
Y'all
Black
are one
History
team.
Month.
The
Right
YNs
after
broke
Black History
everything.
Month.
No, not
that
YNs.
one.
YN. YN. This
On my side.
YN did it.
What
Hey.
we doing here?
It's
What we
okay.
doing here? No, ain't no okay now.
He's not gonna blame me for breaking his shit, and it was you.
You know what? That's crazy.
Everybody point the finger who broke it. Everybody just point the finger who broke it.
I thought it was cool.
We are cool. We are cool.
Okay. All right. Well,
That new Pokemon do look lit though. I really want to play that.
For real.
Nah,
we haven't seen the
That
rest
should
of it
come out
yet.
2027.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. We just got the 20.
Y'all just
Yo, the
exposed
year
the
just started.
year. Like, Jesus.
When it comes out, I think Scarlet and Violet is gonna be like 5 years old.
Damn.
Yeah, that's the first time that ever happened. Though. That's wild.
God damn.
Yeah. But
The
hey,
more advanced
Hey,
systems
Jack.
get, the longer games take to come out.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
They're probably giving people.
Scarlet and Violet be 5 years old?
yeah, because a lot of people don't have the Switch too. A lot of people don't
Damn, I
have.
feel so
Glenn said we
old,
just
damn.
came in, bro. Blame the YNs, bro.
Gang.
Yeah. So okay. So we're gonna finish up the Pokemon.
Yeah.
Okay, finish up the Pokemon.
Damn, I feel so old. Damn.
CJ fixed it.
Yeah, he did. I don't
CJ
think they
the
still-
technician.
Are they still, are they gonna- Okay, so those are new Pikachu forms, and then this is the real game.
It's crazy.
You fired. So this is what the real game looks like.
This only took place.
Did you see the manifest of waves? Yeah, you can. These are the trainers. Those things are made back by these hoverboards.
Lady Buzz back, really?
Yeah. Well, you don't really have to. You can play the game.
Forceful is in here?
Yes.
Really? Oh, really? So the ghost comes out only at night, not in the daytime?
That's fire.
That's
That's
every
crazy.
game.
Like,
That's crazy.
These are the new starters.
I like them.
Make like sword and shit.
Fucking Angry Bird.
I like the people.
It's an Angry Bird. The Angry Bird.
I like the little.
I like the fire type. The fire type is fire.
Rap.
Yeah, Palm Kings. Yeah, Palm and Get Up. Yeah, Get Up. With the water.
That's
What I realized is that they did different types of technology. It's not strong enough.
oh, that is
Nasty.
That's crazy. Somebody said the art
Now,
was
underwater?
started the.
Pokemon wins. Wow. You clap it up.
It's the same game, but they got different shit.
That's how they make so much money, man. I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
because niggas gonna buy both.
Right.
Yeah.
Not me though.
Wow, that is crazy.
I buy one and that's
Okay.
it.
So that was yeah, that was Winds and Waves. It's coming out
I usually
2027.
look to see what the difference is, and I'll buy
What else I
one
gotta say
of
about this thing?
Pokemon.
Like the Pokemon.
There's two new Pikachu forms. So Pikachu is now gonna be water electric and electric fairy.
Really?
So, yeah.
So is it like Sword and Shield or is it like Arceus?
It's more like Sword and Shield.
Oh yeah.
I played Sword and Shield.
That shit was actually fun. That was fun.
That's the last one I
Sword and
beat.
Shield is kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I don't like
So-
Arceus.
So
I don't like
pretty much-
Arceus.
I never
either.
played
I
Arceus.
like
Arceus
I
is
never played that
dirt.
one.
I don't
So,
like that shit.
Skip that one.
It's not lit.
Where's my phone?
He said ass-looking Pokemon. Damn.
What? Oh, the starters. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Gluttony?
I agree.
Wait,
Don't look chat.
Don't
Don't look chat. Say.
Don't look intimidating at all. They look so. They look
The
so.
starters, yeah, they didn't do no type of like.
Nah.
Scroll back up because they was talking. They was saying a whole bunch of
A
shit.
lot of hot shit. A lot of hot shit.
He
Ugly
said
ass
CJ
starters.
always to the rescue. Yes.
Yeah,
One of
yes.
the OGs.
Don't worry about
Yes,
it. Don't worry
yes,
about
here
it.
we
It's
go.
cool.
Ah, man. We in
I
the
see
bed. Yo,
I see
gluttony.
your
all this other stuff.
Boy, Dirty Dan.
Dirty Dan. What's up, besties?
Dirty Dan is in
What up, yo, 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 yo?
Did you guys clap it up for the raid?
Ah, man. That's
The
crazy.
race!
W raid.
W
Yeah,
raid.
W raid.
Did we clap that? I don't think so.
Yes, we did.
All
we
right,
did,
so
yes.
why
Pull up
is?
the
Oh,
raid.
Cliff came in.
So
Drop a
next,
bomb for Cliff.
next on my list is Mortal Kombat 2 movie trailer. Mortal Kombat 2 movie trailer.
Yeah.
I got it up already. It should be at the.
Yeah, it should be up there.
Not
Yes.
Google Drive. But
Yeah, I
Google.
got you.
No, I was just saying my full game. You're right.
All right.
You're right.
Bro, the water
Yes, bro.
type look like it's evolution about to be
Badly.
sassy for real. What? Wait.
The
Damn,
water
we got a
type
full
looks like
house.
Evolution. Gonna be sassy for real.
You changed it back.
I don't know. It's still acting crazy.
Balding.
I knew it wasn't me.
Oh, it's probably
I
yours.
knew it
So
wasn't me.
fuck
I
all the
knew
way
it
back.
wasn't me.
What the fuck is these people talking about? Like, what?
What are they saying?
Baldoni. You like what?
Yo, Baldoni.
No,
You're-
they're saying in control.
Yeah, we got a full house tonight, Baldoni.
Yeah.
The Wayne takeover.
Yeah,
Ash
everybody,
Ketchum.
Ash Ketchum. Ash Ketchum's over here.
Ash Ketchum.
Okay.
He's over here, but you know he's
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
He's here. He's here with us. He's
Right.
here with us right now. He's here with us
Here
right
ain't,
now.
here ain't young, man. I'm still young.
Went to buy cigarettes and never came back. Wow. Okay,
Damn.
Bald. Okay, Bald. We got you. We got you.
My dad's move is crazy. Damn, your dad got a special move? Damn.
Damn. Tragic.
MK2 trailer. Yeah.
Yes.
Mortal Kombat 2 trailer.
Uno mas, thanks.
You're Johnny Cage. I loved Citizen Cage when I was a kid.
That's the guy
Thanks,
that
man. I
cross-shot
appreciate it.
They should do a reboot.
Nobody wants that. Shit went out in the 90s. Johnny Cage, you have been chosen to fight my... Tell me you're not some crazy fans.
Is that Butcher?
Yes, Butcher, yeah.
How are you doing
shit.
that?
Are you coming or what?
Where the hell am I?
It's called Mortal Kombat. It's a fighting tournament. To the death.
Damn.
Who's that?
Fuck that.
No, who's that? Who's that?
Oh!
This is a war for the fate of your world.
Yes, sir.
Dickheads in or what?
Yes, sir.
I'm not some champion. I don't have transformer arms. Or shoot lightning bolts. This shit's got nothing to do with me.
Jax.
I'm
I'm
an
surprised he
actor.
did not. Oh my god, I got questions.
But you know what's weird to me though? I don't know why they
Not the
showing this now,
face.
and I think it's
Yeah, what's up? Yeah, this the baby. He's slowing down.
It's time to become the hero you were meant to be. All right, big ugly fuck. It's showtime.
Get over here!
Yo, sci-fi!
Only the strong survive.
Nigga just had an out of body experience.
How come they didn't show the main guy?
Are you kidding me? You don't have any pals?
The guy that had the
Incredibly
brain.
handsome.
Cole.
That's his name?
Cole. He was trash.
Petite.
Yeah, I hated Cole.
Becky? I like it. I like what it looks
Nah,
like.
I got a
Right.
question.
Yes,
This is
I'm
the
definitely
question I
watching
had.
that.
What's the question, sir?
Where's Liu Kang at? We didn't see him throughout the movie.
Yes, you did.
Where?
He threw the fire through the temple.
That
You
was
wasn't
Liu
watching
Kang?
it, nigga.
In the trailer, they're not gonna show you everything.
Yeah.
Liu Kang's in that. He was in the first one.
I think I'm gonna file Street
Wow.
Fighter.
Oh, he said Cole just said he think he's gonna file Street Fighter movie heavier.
Wow.
I mean,
Oh,
for real.
fucks with. He meant fucks
yeah,
with.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah.
I'm it's Street
I
Fighter.
get it. I get it.
Baldoni said, "Don't care if I have to listen to the music from my place. I'm invited wherever I want." Talking about,
They arguing or they?
I think so.
And they said, Gluttony said this movie is gonna be good. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It looks fire. It looks better than the first one.
Yeah, it
The
does.
first
It
one was
definitely
enjoyable.
does,
We got a
yeah.
first time chatter.
First time chat.
Freddie Fox, let me get a clap.
Get a clap, get a clap, get a clap, get a
I
clap.
think MP actually looks fire, but still looks cosplay fan food though. I
Yeah,
think
a little
it's meant
bit,
to look
a
a
little
little campy though.
A little bit.
It's Mortal Kombat. It's
Right.
it's
It
they
is.
got all these funky characters. He's
Right.
never not gonna look campy.
With these crazy outfits on.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah, like-
yeah.
Look, nigga, you from the medieval? All right. Next
Oh,
one.
you showing this
current
gacha
events. Yeah, I might as
Oh,
well.
What game is this?
My friend said, so whatever. All right. The next one for my current event is the 7 Deadly Sins game trailer. It's a gacha. It's an open world.
After a 1,000-year-long
Yeah.
epic battle ended, the world finally
The
regained
anime.
I know
peace.
the anime.
Basically like
However,
It's a game.
the Book of
It's a
Stars
phone game.
disrupted
No,
the
it's
flow
phone,
of
P5,
time, and a
PC.
new darkness follows.
It looked like it,
この
but
不思議なアイテム
it's for
に
P5.
何度かトリトリにくっついているみたいなんだ。このまま
Oh,
だと
get this shit off.
一体何なの？
We have to. This is a very.
言ったでしょ。これはただの冒険ではないと。
Now,
This is a very high anime.
a new destiny calls
This
to
game
No, the
us.
anime's cool.
For the new tale we are about to create,
Very huge.
together we run, bound by destiny.
Look back.
Well, the
A
reason why they
co-op
doing this.
open-world
The reason why they
RPG
doing
for
this is
everyone.
because-
The 7
That
Deadly
big
Sins.
already.
What the fuck is
It came out
this?
already. Oh.
January 28th.
I didn't know that.
It came out already. 2026. It came out
I
already.
didn't know that. All right, damn.
Yeah, figures you didn't know that.
Damn. My fault. Shit. All right,
Bringing up some shit that already came out.
I'm getting
Right.
attacked. Chat, I am getting attacked by my own. You know, get the hell off. Ash, come in.
No.
Thank you, not you. Ash, I said that Ash. You see, you.
No.
Anyway, all right.
You know, you get the hell out
Next
of here.
one. Now this.
Baldoni said pure trash.
That's fine. That's totally fine. I don't really care too much about the game that much anyway. I just did it because whatever. But next one is season 2 for Devil May Cry, the anime that's on Netflix actually. Hold on. But wait, we that's old too. No, it's not. No, they brought out another one.
What?
They brought out another trailer.
The second one for Netflix.
Look at the date.
A second what?
A Devil May Cry.
The date says 2 weeks ago.
Season
right?
2?
Oh no, 6
6
months
months.
ago. So
6
which one
months
was
ago.
2
That's
weeks
old,
ago?
bro.
That was the other one.
What other one? Go back. Because I seen one that said 2 weeks ago. I mean, maybe
That
I'm
was
tripping.
probably the other one.
Because there was another one that came out, a different trailer. That's the first look.
Right there.
4 days
4 days
ago. I'm
ago,
sorry, my
Japanese.
fault. Wrong one. My fault, chat. Wrong one.
I think it's Ebony.
Those are two fine ladies.
It's the same one.
That's the sneak peek, though. That's the sneak peek.
Well, it's still a trailer.
Oh, that's
Ebony and
It's still a
Ivory.
trailer.
I based their portraits off of my own. Can't
Bro,
you
not
tell?
looking at the dates.
That's my fault. Damn.
I appreciate your Rin.
Watch this shit though. Watch this shit though. I had to show this.
John Wick shit.
Right.
Wow. Y'all take it busy.
Literally.
I think I can work with these.
I didn't even see season 1. I gotta watch it.
Tony Redgrave.
Alias.
That's the
It's
same
the
bro.
most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me.
I don't watch season 1.
May 12th.
That's season 2,
Anybody
right?
finish
Yep,
season
season
2?
2.
Season 2, y'all.
Actually, finish season
I've
1.
seen a few
Yeah.
episodes. I got turned
All
off.
right, that's everything. Yeah, that's everything. So most of the shit was, obviously came out. That's my fault, y'all.
Kenna?
I picked the right one.
Kenna Scars of Cremosha? What is this?
I mean, y'all want to show that, then fine. But
up to you.
it's a new game. It's a new
Oh.
game that's coming out. It has like really good looking graphics. It's called Kenna Scars of Cosmora. It's like a open world type of thing.
It's part
It looks
2.
like a ripoff from what's it called? Horizon Zero Dawn. Okay, a little bit. Okay, fair enough.
See what it looks like.
No, I want to see it. Ripple. That's a little.
What a ripoff? More like a
One of those types of games.
like a copy.
I sense suffering here, spirit.
Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah.
Do you need help?
This one, first one.
Oh, there's a first one?
Oh, there is. Oh.
A spirit guide?
What's her name?
It's been a long time since we've had one of your kind in Cosmora.
It looks.
I'm glad you're here.
But this is a movie.
That temple has been sealed as long as I can remember. Dangerous corruption was locked inside, along with the secrets of a forgotten practice. Spirit guides here once used alchemy to cleanse corruption. Maybe you can do the same.
It's giving Monster Hunter. Yeah, it's giving Monster Hunter vibes.
You see it, right? You see it now.
Wow! Oh, and crystals are wow! Oh, and crystals? What?
Fear will bind you, gripping to the present, which must always pass. Regret will bind you, longing for the past you cannot change.
It's giving me like the Maya and the dragon. The Maya and the dragon.
Love will bind you, yearning for a future you will not see. Unbound, may you depart in peace.
Nah, that shit look fire. It's just not for me.
Yep,
I know
that was a Cosmo.
I think with that fuck water.
Alright, so
No, yeah, that Thursday and Friday, I'm taking it.
Crazy.
No, that Friday and Saturday, I'm taking it. I might do a
My jacket
24-hour
got me
stream on that motherfucker.
My jacket got me hot.
All
Alright, so that was all of.
I think it's made by Capcom, right? So it's coming out April
That was
24th.
all for current events. Alright, so
That dude, and she's on his back.
how everybody feel about the trailers? The trailers is dope, man. Trailers is dope. Give it up for the YN trailers. Give it up for the YN trailers. The YN trailers is lit. I like the Devil May Cry one. I'm ready for that.
I'm ready for season 2 of Devil May Cry. I'm ready for that.
He gets to see
I
his
didn't
brother.
finish season 1.
And whoop his ass.
I can explain why.
Wow.
It's not a hot take. I just have what is it,
lady?
started out good. The way they was working with Dante was beautiful. They took a sudden shift
To lady.
to lady.
Yeah.
I didn't like that.
I see it.
It's not her show. It's his show.
Yeah, because she was going to fight
And
the bad
she's a
guy.
fire character. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah.
But you're not Dante.
Right.
If
Let
you
him
was the
cook.
star, then fine.
Right.
But they took a real sudden shift
Uh,
to following her.
right.
And she was doing shit. I'm like, how are you keeping up with Dante?
Right.
Get the fuck out of here. Like, this
feel
shit
like he
kind
was
of turned
holding
me
back
off
a
a
little.
little bit. Like, I didn't like that.
He was probably holding back.
I watched up until I think it got to her part a little bit when it started to be a little bit more in depth with her part. And I was just like, okay.
And the funny thing
Oh,
is,
get back to
I do
flashback,
like
flashback,
the
right?
character.
Yeah.
I don't dislike the character. She's kind of
You
fire.
want to see Dante though? You want to see Dante?
I want to see a gunslinging, sword swinging, you know.
Bro, they try to make her look like she's his
She,
equal.
Kitty
You are
said
not.
she did in the game. Hey, Kitty.
You're not the equal.
Kitty!
Yes.
Let's get to
I
the
forgot
chat.
Kitty. I forgot Kitty's a big Devil May Cry fan.
Yeah. Kitty
She
knows
love
shit.
Devil May Cry.
Have you guys already commented on this
He-Man game?
He-Man? I
He-Man
didn't know that.
game?
You want to click
He-Man
on
got
that?
a game?
Yeah, go ahead.
He-Man got a game?
It makes up for one of my shits that I fucked up. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you should have clicked it. You should have clicked it. It should pop up.
It's gonna take it to not Google Chrome, bro. Oh, what was it gonna use Safari? That's a Safari. Is it Safari? No.
Oh, when I stream, I just
Bing,
click it.
some
It pops
stupid
up.
shit.
No, it'll take it to
Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
It's gonna take one to Internet Explorer. Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer.
Let's check out this clip from Gluttony.
Yeah. Oh, He-Man. Okay.
Okay.
Oh.
Now. I love that though. Play that.
Hold on. Give me a second.
Wait a second.
Let me run it back real quick.
It's giving a vibe of Golden Axe a little bit.
I see the Golden Axe.
Yeah, oh my god.
Yeah, I see the Golden Axe.
Villain. Whoa. See.
Every time I see He-Man,
Yo, what you talking about? We on this?
It looks like something cool will play.
Yup.
pretty much.
Yup.
Bison.
We on this?
Yeah, Golden Axe. He's giving Golden Axe.
Skeletor.
Remember. The combos? The jumps? Really?
28th, yeah. Wow.
Oh, April 28th.
I saw He-Man was on TV. It was like Cartoon Network.
I remember I used to watch He-Man on like
Boomerang. Late at night.
I don't see myself really playing it, but it looks
Shit, I would.
nice.
I kind of like
It
it.
looks decent. It looks decent. Okay then. This jacket got me out.
Nah, that shit look fire. Appreciate that, Glut.
Can we catch up
I'm
for
drinking.
Can we catch
Right,
up for
right.
chat?
The drink.
Catch up for
Right,
chat
the
real
drink.
quick.
I mean, got me feeling right.
I'm gonna warm myself. Turn the fan on right in the middle right there.
Yeah, catch up for chat real
Tell me I
quick.
gotta get up and get that.
Let's see what chat talking about.
Nah, what you talking about me? I gotta get up and get that. I'm on sound control.
Why do I see Naruto throwing it back? What happened here?
That's the dumpers.
That's dumpers.
Wow. So
Back
that's
it up and dump it.
Naruto. Wow. So we saying Naruto got the dumpers now. Okay.
Yeah, back it up and dump it.
Just read this game last
And
night.
this should shout it out since y'all bring it up. Kitty makes those.
That was Baldoni's clip. Not Gluttony's clip.
Oh, Baldoni. Oh, okay, there you go.
yeah.
Appreciate that, Baldoni.
Yeah.
I mean, He-Man is not really my thing.
Shout out to
Yeah, now they gonna drop all the dumpers. Drop the dumpers. The Kitty make one.
Look at this, the Patrick.
Yeah, shout out to Kitty because she makes all the dumpers. She makes all the good emotes.
Yo,
I want a
Patrick,
specific.
what's going
And she
on?
hand draws these. Though.
Oh,
She
shit.
hands draw them?
Period.
Wow.
That's
So,
crazy.
Kitty, we gotta have a conversation about a little bison dumper, maybe.
No.
Bison dumper would be crazy.
All right, so
Dictator dumper.
What we got next,
my
number
thoughts on
one?
the trailer. It's like every time I see He-Man, I be thinking he like supposed to be running with the Thundercats.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that
That's
too.
what I'm saying.
I'm thinking about that too. Yeah.
He what?
He's like basically what he is.
Like every time I see him, I'm like, yo, is one of your girls the Thundercats, nigga? Like, God.
Rose the human lion.
Yeah, you got a point. All right, so
I want to point out though, we don't be back here often. You know what I'm saying?
We're not.
I haven't got a chance to look out the window. I'm like, yo, all right, it's that shit right here. It's good, guys. It's
Naruto, don't fall out that window, man.
No, I'm ready. I'm good.
It's the penthouse
Don't
suite.
fall out the
disappear. All you
window,
see, all you hear is a breeze.
She said, I've been telling you the
Keys,
DM.
I'm done with you. I've been telling. Yeah, you're right. She has.
Clap
She
those
has been telling me.
Yeah.
Baldy. That was
And I actually have
whoa.
emotes
That's
to
crazy.
get up there.
That is-
Yeah.
Hey yo.
Yeah,
That was Cut those Naruto cheeks. That's yo, boy. You gotta get up out of here. Get up out of here. Get up out of here.
My guy. He knows what's up.
All right, so I guess we get into the games.
Y'all
I
getting
guess.
into y'all shenanigans?
Yeah, we're gonna get into the shenanigans.
All right.
All right, so
What
let's
we
start
got?
the first
YNs, what we
Well,
got?
here go the
Let's start
YN
the first one.
takeover. Here we go
Yeah,
now.
here we
Yeah.
go.
Hold
It's time to start y'all shit.
up. Gluttony, what the fuck?
Shit.
All right.
Alright, so what's the game we about to play?
So
YN,
we
go
can
ahead.
do.
YN shenanigans.
Let's focus our head. Off the rip. Pokemon Who's Not.
Gotta be
Pokemon
the age
who's
range of
not?
YN. How old are you?
25.
Oh damn, you on one?
Hold up.
I know who that is. It's always Kitty.
It's always Kitty.
It's always Kitty.
To drop in with it. Let me see.
Was it Kitty?
It was Baldoni.
Oh,
Baldoni.
Baldoni trying to start the
Wait,
party.
this ain't Bam Baldoni.
That's crazy.
Whoa.
They
what's
tried
up, that's what's up,
to
that's what's up.
violate the homie? Like, yo, why they doing
Yeah, Baldoni
that?
trying to swoop in and take Kitty
Yeah,
down.
Baldoni's like, I'm here.
All right, so starting off with the bullshit and fuck with y'all head and boy y'all head.
Hold
you know what I'm
on. But let Melanator they come back first
Oh
before
yeah,
it started.
come on
Yeah.
back. Come on back. Let her come on back. Come on in here, Wesley. Come on.
You got away with an AO.
Give us some
just now.
space. Give us some space.
Yeah, you're right.
You
You're
got
right.
away with an AO.
Yeah. I thought about it. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. You're right.
Nigga say, you got away with it.
You got away with it.
Hey, yo, yes, he did. He did.
You
He
got to be more careful.
Keep your voice down. Keep your voice down.
He said, shh.
Keep your voice down. Keep your voice down.
Got to be more careful.
Okay, so starting it up. Since it was Black History Month, more black people from Pokemon. You know
There we go. That's what's up.
More black
Of course.
gym leaders.
And with it being Women's History Month, you got the women's in the front.
There you go.
I forgot, but yeah, they up there.
It's not said that part.
Yo, you stupid.
You're right.
Threw you a bone.
Yeah. Listen. I just put the people up there, gang. It's not me. It's just the people.
I tried to help him out.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
It's just the people.
All right,
alley-oop just now.
All right, goddammit. Start the game, guys. I did? Hey, put the keyboard down.
Hold on,
pause it.
That's why I said give me the
All
keyboard.
right, put the keyboard down. All right, cool. All right. So, starting it off, who's not a normal type up here?
Who's not
There is a
normal
poster
type?
among us.
Don't ask me no
Who is not a
questions.
normal type?
Pick who you think is not a normal
Don't
type.
ask me
Who's
no
not a
fucking
normal
questions.
type?
I don't
Yes.
fucking know.
You said 4?
Isn't Chansey fairy?
Do you think that?
Alright, so
He is a
Monet
fairy.
says 4.
Is it a normal fairy?
No, Jigglypuff
No, just fairy.
I'm
No,
gonna
who's
say-
just normal?
Who's
I'm
not?
a-
Wait, what's
Like
the
a normal
question?
type. Who's not a normal type? So whoever you pick is who you think is not a
I
normal
don't
type.
Six,
know,
seven. No,
man.
I'm kidding.
4 look like a jellyfish.
Right.
But that could be normal.
But ain't number 1 a god type?
There's no such thing as a god type.
It's not like an ultimate elite legendary. There you go.
There you go. See, now
It's
you
a
got...
category, not a type. It's a
Well,
category.
one definitely is a legendary.
Yeah.
Yeah, one is a
Do they
legendary.
have
Alright, see,
normal
I eliminate.
legendaries?
See, I eliminating little by
No.
little.
So
Okay.
they gotta be 1.
Okay, they eliminated little by
There is a
little.
normal legendary. Who?
There is a normal legendary.
It ain't
I
this
can't tell
nigga.
you. I can't
I've
tell you.
seen
I
number
can't
1
tell you.
before though.
I can't tell you.
All this dumb shit.
Is number 6 a Pikachu?
Can we
I
talk
don't
about
know.
Ursa
That's
rank?
why
Who
I'm
the
like
fuck
6
is
or
Ursa?
7.
It's a Pikachu.
Just put
Pika
y'all bank.
cuz.
Just
That's
bank
a
y'all
water
numbers.
You gotta say your number.
Bank y'all numbers.
I
I'll tell you.
I say Chansey is a fairy. I remember
So
Chansey
you go
being a
with
fairy.
you go with Chansey. I'm going with number 4.
I'm saying I'm sticking to
So we
number
got
1.
Chansey
four.
fairy.
We got 4. We got number 1.
We got
CJ,
4,
what you
1.
got?
3. I'm saying
You got
3. 'Cause
3.
Chansey, I know Snorlax is a normal type for sure.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with. I'm
You
gonna
let
go
me
with
say
7.
6, 7.
6, 7.
I'm
You
gonna go
might
with
be
7.
right. You might be
I'm
right.
gonna go with 7.
You saying 10? You saying
Yeah,
10?
We got 10. 4.
I'm not
3,
against what Ash is
1.
saying because Jigglypuff is normal,
Okay.
but potentially fairy.
Okay.
But I know
Depends on what they
Chansey was
can learn.
fairy.
That's stupid. What's the answer?
Okay, so tell us.
Alright.
Did you make
What
it
you
up,
think?
Ryan?
What you
Did
think?
you make up a
I
way?
said 7.
Say the one
You said
that's not.
7?
Don't go say the
See
one.
what-
You said 7?
Which one? So you
Oh
got,
no, I'm gonna just tell you.
you got to tell us which one. Tell us which ones
from
is
my
not
from
normal.
my perspective. From my
The
perspective,
ones that are not normal
Oh my god.
is 4
I said that.
and 4 and 9.
Oh,
What the fuck? I knew it. God damn! I had a
49.
feeling.
Is the red thing on his head
Chansey
a
is
lump?
normal. Who you thinking is Jigglypuff? Normal fairy.
So that number 1's a normal legendary?
Yes.
That's dumb. as
That's
fuck.
the only normal
I know
legendary
number 4 ain't
Pokemon.
normal. It's
That's
more.
That's
I
just
know. I know.
Arceus.
I've
He's
seen
God.
that one before.
How you God normal?
He's God.
He's the only one.
He's God, but he can learn every type in the game. Every type of move in the game. The next game.
Why
Alright,
the fuck
keep going.
we got that hold on.
Yeah. You got
Yeah,
that.
we
What
got
kind-
that one
what confused me is
she
that-
said it.
Yeah, I got it.
4 and 9. 4 and 9.
Is that
More
is that
Chansey
shiny?
was.
Is that shiny Zingoose?
Yes, it is shiny.
Why the hell you put him up there?
Alright, next one. Now,
Oh, dear God.
before y'all say anything, just because it's green does not mean it's a grass.
Can we smoke them?
Just because it's green doesn't mean they're a grass type.
Number 9. That's a
Who
water
is
type.
not a grass type?
That's a water type, I believe. Number 9.
Number
Number
9.
9. I was about to say that.
Okay, number 9.
Number 3.
alright.
Woodoo.
She said, woo
Woodoo is not a grass.
JoJo's Bizarre.
Right. Yo, man, they just had a whole stroke.
He is not a grass type.
Okay, alright, that's what you think.
3 is not a grass
Number
type.
9.
She
3 is not a grass type for sure. Okay.
Number
already
9.
said
Because what
3.
frog is gonna be on? No, I'm lying.
Okay.
Who is not a grass type? Number 9 is a water.
That's what
Number
I'm
9
saying.
is a water. Okay, that's what y'all think.
That's
Three
what
and
I'm
nine,
saying.
yeah.
I'm gonna go 9.
I'm going 3 and 9.
3 and 9. Okay.
I'm
But
going
what's
11.
this 11 over here?
I'm going
What is
11.
that?
for real, 'cause I don't know
I'm
that's
going
Zygarde
11
either.
and I'm going 11 and
That's
2.
Zygarde.
I'm going 11
You
and
haven't
2.
played ZA, so you don't know
That's a,
Zygarde.
a
If you play
flower.
ZA, you know Zygarde.
It's a flower.
I'm
Number
going
two
to
is a whole
the
flower.
dog and say 1, 3, 9,
1, 3, 9, and 11.
and 11.
I'm gonna go.
Yeah,
three.
because
But
number
Ash already
9.
answered
1,
both, so
3,
what the
9, and
hell?
11.
Because
so
one
he's
is by the
vacant.
water.
1, 3, 9, and 11. Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
sticking
Anybody
with 9.
else?
I'm sticking with 9.
I'm going
Anybody
11.
Yeah.
He said 11.
I'm going 11.
He's
1,
a
3,
YN.
9, and
That's what I'm
11.
My
You
man!
got all of them.
Give me
You
that
got all of them.
dick.
You
I
got all of them.
Yo,
I
check in with
said,
chat.
wait, no, because
Give
I
me
said
that
9 already.
Check
You
it
got
with
all
Chat,
of them.
yep. Check
You
it
got
with
all
1,
of
3,
them.
9,
Check in with chat,
11. Give
they
me
chatting,
that
they chatting.
dick.
You got all of
I
them.
got it for us, yo. Hold on.
Wait, go back to the.
Wait. I gotta
Did
make
you
that
just say number 10 is a hentai?
number 10.
That's crazy.
Did you just say number
That's
10 is
funny.
more hentai?
That's
Wait,
crazy.
Wait a fucking minute.
Who said that?
Hold on, go back. I said Yo Sawyer. I said Yo Sawyer.
Maldoni.
Baldoni, I'm done.
That's crazy.
Yes.
That's
Now,
my favorite Pokemon. One of my favorite ones.
Number 10?
number 10 got a BBL.
Oh my god.
But yeah, you got all of them. Damn, that's crazy. Damn, you blew that out the park. Damn.
Yeah. Hey, yo. Jump
Yeah.
off of
Why
that.
did you say, hey, yo?
Jump-
favorite
I said out the park. Damn.
Drop the
Hey,
ball.
hey, yo.
I'm trying to stop the goddamn ball. Hit the A, yo. What the hell?
I hit the AO also. I hit the AO also. Like,
Hey,
yo.
That kind of
Y'all
shit.
act
I'm
like
sitting
y'all
next
get
to
no
one.
ass in this.
God
Yo,
damn, bro.
Look at
Jeez.
Gluttony. Hey, yo.
You know what? You knocked it out of the ball, not booed out the ball.
Yeah.
Hey, yo.
What's
Like,
going on?
All right,
You
next
got
one.
to be more careful.
Whatever.
That was crazy.
That
So
was crazy.
crazy.
I got
whatever.
CJ.
Yeah,
Stop
move
blowing
on to the
nothing.
Out of nothing.
No parks.
Yeah,
God damn
number
it.
3.
Blowing stuff out of places got the baby on.
You know what? Whatever. Whatever.
yo, I'm dead.
But Zygarde is a dragon type. But he's green. He's a dragon type.
She said
Okay,
suspicious
okay.
ain't even the word for that comment.
Let's see what else we got. What else we got?
All right, I got what?
The next one's gonna fuck your mind up.
They got 2 more? Okay, no, last
Okay,
one.
last one, y'all. All right.
Who's not a flying type
Show me
again?
another Pokemon we gonna
Another
fight.
flying. It's another flying.
Here's
Who's not a flying type
Here's
now?
another bullshit.
His name is Flygon.
Number
so number 5
7.
better be Fly.
What the fucking
Hey,
form?
hey,
Who's
hey,
not a
that's his name?
flying
No,
type?
what's his name?
7 can't be a flying
Right,
type.
like, what the hell?
This nigga is a whole
Water type.
I just want to let you know, number 7 has wings and it can fly.
number 9
7 can fly.
Number 9 can't fly.
But does that mean if it's a flying type?
7 is
It
not a
can
flying
fly.
type.
Shut up!
Yo, bro, I'm lying.
What?
Number 9, he
Does
can't
that even
fly.
make sense? He said number
He
7
doesn't
can
fly at
fly,
all.
but it's not a flying type.
I'll tell you.
He doesn't fly.
Number 9,
That's why I just told him to be quiet. Cause
That's far-fetched, right?
Yeah.
But he's a flying type.
Is he considered flying type? That's what I'm
7 is
saying.
not
No,
considered
7
a
is
flying
not
type.
flying
no.
You can't fly.
No,
Yeah,
7
he's
is
a
a
flying
7.
type. He could learn to fly.
He got wings.
That don't
7
mean
got
you're
wings.
flying type,
No, I'm talking about
man.
Number
nine.
7.
What's number 3? What
Anyways.
is that?
That's an ultra
He
beast.
could learn to
I'm
attack
sticking with.
fly.
I'm still sticking with.
It's a
Ray.
Pokemon y'all don't know, but it
Bro, he's a real Pokemon?
Yeah.
Yes, these are real.
I'm saying number 10. Number 10
Who?
don't look like a flying type.
Right.
Right. Goddamn bug.
Number
type.
10 don't look like a flying type. Okay.
I went to 3. I said 3.
No,
I'm
I was
gonna
about
go
to say
7.
number 3.
What is 3? What is that?
Alright, fuck it.
That's
That's a
What
robot.
sculpture?
That's a
is-
whole robot.
It's basically like an off-breed legendary. in
No,
a
it's
sense.
a
Off-breed,
robot.
off-breed legendary.
Off-breed
I don't know
legendary.
what
That's
you
what
say.
They're
that's
called
why
Ultra
I
Beasts.
asked you.
They're called Ultra Beasts.
It's a
They're called Ultra
robot.
Beasts.
They're called what?
Ultra Beasts.
What the fuck are you talking about?
This is why Pokemon lost me, so I ain't gonna lie. 'Cause it's just-
What are you talking about?
Just bake your number.
Hey, Reggie watched Ice and Steel nephew.
Bake your numbers.
Yeah.
Just bake your numbers, goddammit.
You're pissing me off.
Alright, so we got a number
Stop
10.
getting pissed off, man.
I say number 9. I say
We
number
got a
9.
number 10 and number 9.
7.
Number 3.
And 7.
Alright.
I'm
And then
saying
7.
10, 9, 3, 7.
I swear 7 can fly.
Wait,
Wait a
I
minute.
feel like 1,
Is this
2.
the
I
YNs
don't know.
versus the OGs? Only the OGs is answering.
Having somebody that has a friend that used to play Pokemon, I should know all of this.
What's the answer?
So
What's
what
the
you know?
What's the answer?
So
It's
say
7.
it.
7
Make me
got that.
proud. Make me proud. What you
No, no, so tell
make me
us
proud.
what it is. Tell us, come on.
Which
Come
one
on,
is
Miss
mine?
Bro.
Just because they have wings do not mean they're considered
number 8.
flying.
That's
type.
why I
Poison-
said number
it could be a
7, because
poison.
how is he gonna fight with that shit on his head?
God damn it, ass.
So what is it?
I said 8 and
I was
9.
like, how put the number in? What you was going
I
to
say
put?
8
And
and
number
9.
3 definitely can't fly with them fucking
Thank
arms,
you.
because that's a
I said
robot.
that.
Okay, go. Keep going. Keep
That's
going.
not a robot.
Keep
That's
going.
bamboo arms.
I see niggas roll that up every day. Every day.
Alright, so bake your number. Who's the
And
flying type?
then Yeah, I was gonna say number 10 because I don't know what that's
number 10. You think it's
That's
not
a
flying
moth.
type.
Larvesta?
Number 10 is a moth.
Larvesta?
never mind. I lied.
That's the.
Who you want to go with?
But
bugs fly.
But it's not a bug.
That's why I said I
Bug type,
lied.
not a
Wait.
flying type.
Why are you talking about Larvesta like that, bro? Like, stop playing.
What's
Stop
the
playing my
answer?
mans.
I'm waiting for her to put her number in.
Stop playing with my man's Larvesta, bro. Stop playing with my mans, bro.
You want to put 3 and 7?
Yeah.
3 and 7.
I said
The
7
bamboo
too.
smoker.
All right, Ash, you said
and Dragon Man.
Ash, you said Farfetch.
I said 8 and 9. Yeah.
You said 8 and 9.
I see why you said
You're wrong. You're wrong. They're both considered flying. Farfetch is
8 is a
considered flying.
butterfly.
Because I knew he could learn fly in the game. So I was like, all right.
Which one is it?
So the ones that are not a flying type is 7,
I knew it.
1,
I said
5.
what? Oh my
7,
god.
1, 5, and 10.
Let's go.
How can a dragon not be able to
Let's
fly?
go.
We killing right now.
Y'all doing
We
better.
killing right now.
Y'all doing better.
OG's is killing right
doing
now.
better. Y'all doing
We
better.
rocking right now.
I'm sitting there with just
So,
Number 10 is number 10 can fly, but he's actually fire bug. He's a bug.
Firebug?
Yeah, his name is.
Who the fuck is
Bug
number
Piranha.
3? Who the fuck is this iRobot looking at?
It's an Ultra Beast, but it's actually flying. So you see, like the inside of its arms, it shoots fire. and
But
it
he
flies.
looks like an iRobot. He's an
What game
iRobot.
is
He looks like an
that?
iRobot.
3. What game is he from?
Oh, Sun and Moon.
Sun and Moon?
Yeah, Sun and Moon.
Yeah.
It's an Ultra Beast. It's like 10 of them.
Right.
I figured
You
number
study your
1
young,
could-
like, you
Guess
gotta-
what?
But number
Guess what?
7 can fly though.
Guess what? The OG's is winning.
Yeah, you're right.
Then we up. We up.
Y'all up by what? Y'all up by 3? No, about
We
2.
ain't lost none yet.
Keep it hope alive.
We ain't lost none
Keep it
yet.
alive.
I got the first one, so you got the second one, and we got this one.
Oh, okay, very
Keep
cool.
it hope alive.
All right, so
Keep
3.
it hope alive.
All right, so all right,
We-
next game.
See, we're
That's
cool.
the end of that one?
Yeah, it's the end of work.
All right.
GK's still cool.
I don't
Look
think
at GK
I don't think
still.
Wait, go back to the chat.
Oh,
Yeah,
let's
Yeah, what is
Yeah, see what
saying?
chat's saying. See what chat's
Shall we
saying.
move
Chat,
on?
chat. Come on, chat.
That was low, so I ain't gonna lie.
Let's go.
So 3 is my ex. Got it.
He said, "What the fuck is number 3?"
Oh, fuck.
Lottie's in here. Lottie.
If 3 can fly, so can I. Yo, listen.
So can I.
Yo, y'all pissing Baldoni off.
Yeah, right. I'm just saying. 3 is an ultra beast.
I've never seen Baldoni this aggressive.
Nah, they brain is like annoying.
3 is my ex. Who said that?
It's an ultra
my
beast.
God, you know what?
Pokemon don't have altered beast.
They're categorized as an ultra beast.
Go home right
literally.
now.
Go home right now. Go home
You
right
gotta
now.
go. You can't be
All right, so
Oh.
is it part 1 or part 2 that was the other shenanigans? I think it's part 1.
We even go
Part
to
one?
part 1
Yeah, I guess
yet.
part 1.
Let's start
You
part
gotta do
1.
part 1 before you go to part 2.
Yeah.
No.
No, I'm trying to figure out what. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Oh, what happened? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, look at you, bro.
All right, time for the YN
I'm tired
slang.
of y'all fuckery with my boy.
Yeah.
See my boy? You
Y'all
fit it up.
tired of
You
shit.
fit it up. No, take a look at the whole fit.
Yeah.
Look at the Timbs. Look at the Timbs.
But the Timbs.
Yo, them Timbs go hard though. Tim from my hooligans in Brooklyn. You feel me?
Look at Yardy with the Timbs.
He said I'm back.
I had to put in the Timbs.
He about to go on a whole
going on.
drill.
Yeah, he going on a whole
He about to
drill.
go on a
Why
drill.
you
You
got,
should
why you
have.
got gloves on, bro?
Yo,
It's cold outside.
Can we put Yardy
Yardy
in the
got a
Dodge
blicky in
Charger?
the back.
He got the switch on him. He got the switch on him.
Wait,
My boy looking official, though.
Right.
On the next season, can we put Yardy in the Dodge Charger? Can we
Maybe,
put him in the
maybe,
Dodge
maybe,
Charger?
maybe.
So he can have the Dodge Charger
That's a little too
spinning
much
on the
for
block.
that.
I'm ready for this one.
All right, we got some YN slang.
YN slang. Oh,
Time for some YN slang. Here we go.
explain the game.
All right, so hold on, keep going.
Young
Keep going.
man.
No, I got it. It's up there. Well, give me a second. Give me a second.
My bad.
There you go. That's me. That's me.
That's
That's me.
That's fire.
We got a character.
Yeah, hit the
that's
clap
me.
button.
Hit the
Man,
clap
you gotta hit the clap
Oh
button.
God, man.
That's me. I had to try to, put the index the right way. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
All right, so
What's the word?
first word, simp. Use it in a sentence and tell what it means.
Stop
Tell me what it
simping.
means.
Sipping mean.
Don't be a bitch for her.
Don't be a bitch ass nigga.
There you go.
Yeah,
okay.
Yo,
Okay,
yo,
use it in a
y'all
sentence.
clown.
Use it in a
Yeah,
sentence.
yo.
Stop being a simp ass nigga.
Yes.
Stop being a simp ass nigga.
Stop being a simp ass
Don't be
nigga.
simping for these hoes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't be a simple ass nigga.
Simple. All
All
right.
these words?
So, clap.
Either.
Fucking busting ass.
Yeah.
Clap these. Not that specific clap.
Nope.
Oh, you about to get smoked.
You can get smoked up.
You about to get hit.
Not that. Not that one either.
Round of
Shot.
applause.
The specific one.
Shot.
The specific clap.
The
Ah,
clap.
it's the same
He
word.
said clap with 2 P's.
Yeah, it's 2 P's. It's a
Talking about the
specific.
STD clap?
There you go.
Right.
Yes, there you go. It's actually a slang.
He said no. Shorty got the clap.
Yes, Shorty got the clap.
Shorty got the clap. I forgot that.
Yes.
That's really a word.
That's
Well,
nowhere
we've
near
been using
new.
it. Well, it's Gen Z. Well, not Gen Z slang, but it's slang that
That
we
is
use in
nowhere
It's Gen
near
X.
new, bro.
Gen
Okay,
X.
alright, so if it's ain't new, then
Sure.
You know why we don't remember that? Because the clap ain't popular no more.
No.
The actual disease ain't popular no more.
Oh damn, crazy work. Alright, well, whatever.
We're still winning.
Let me just bring this over here real quick. Hold on.
Alright, cool. So Booster.
Booster?
Yes, booster.
Bootlegger, same shit.
People who steal
Bootlegger.
shit.
Wow.
Same shit.
Wow.
That's
Same
our
shit.
shit.
Alright.
That's
Moving
our
nigga.
shit.
Keep it
Next.
moving, nigga.
Yo, Shucky.
We got
Shucky.
Hold on.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Shucky.
I promise you.
Shucky. Let's fuck their heads up real quick. Down bad to my dick. What do you
No,
think?
we're not doing that yet.
Wait,
Let's
hold on.
jump.
What?
Let's jump to that one. Let's jump to that one.
Wait,
Let's jump to that one.
Whoa, wait a minute.
It says it right there.
I know. Jump a bomb. I'm triggered.
Yeah,
Why you want to go down bad to my dick so bad? Jump a bomb for that.
Wow.
Let's go that one. Let's jump to that one.
You
real
gotta
quick.
No, why you want to
Yo,
jump to that?
and you still want to jump to it.
Right,
It's
yes,
crazy.
bro, like, dang, I'm trying to take my time. This nigga.
What's the next one?
Alright, munch. Next word is munch.
Munch is a bum ass nigga.
Yeah, basically.
No,
munch is
no, it ain't.
Person
Eater.
just eat.
That means you an eater.
Ass
You eat
eater.
ass.
Yeah.
Ice Spice for the whole song.
You got that. Yeah.
Ice Spice, no,
Ass
nigga, you ain't know, nigga. What you said first is what you said, nigga. You ain't know.
That's good.
But she said it.
Right, Ice Spice.
Yeah.
Alright,
That's
cool.
what I was thinking about the song.
Alright, steam fish.
No, you
But
just lock in. Just lock in.
Lock in? Oh, yeah, my fault. Lock in.
Get in the zone.
Stay focused.
Yeah.
Alright.
We got the steamed fish. Stay
Steam
pussy.
fish.
You know what that
No.
That's
No.
not what
I
steam
said it
fish is.
already.
No.
I said it already.
He said it already. My
Batiba.
It's
Like,
the
are you a
Jamaican
steam
way of
fish?
it's the Jamaican way of saying gay.
Batiba.
Wow.
Oh, wow. So
Yes.
what's fry fish? I hate this.
He said steam fish or
Steam
okra
fish, but it's just called a fish.
What
Call
about
it a
okra
fish.
body?
Huh?
What about okra body? What is okra body?
Okra body?
Yeah.
Body be nice.
I guess.
Stupid.
Alright, so
Salty.
salty.
You tight. You got an attitude. You pissed. You
Okay,
mad.
first of all, why would you add salty and two steam fish is nowhere near new? That's
Okay.
my error, actually.
Well, technically, that's where that could be your error, but we're using it now.
No,
That's
it's
why I
not.
put
It's
it up.
not no, we've been using it from my
Salty.
error till now.
Julius, drop a bomb. for my guy,
Julius Maximus, yes sir.
My boy. Julius is in here.
Julius is the
YN.
YN that didn't make, but he's on the show.
Yeah, his chat's YN. Let's
His
go.
chat's
Julius.
YN. Julius.
Alright, so high key.
Come on, man.
That's like
High key.
High key just means kind of like
I'm using
fully-
Opposite of low key.
Yeah.
like
What is actually high key?
you got me tight, high key. Like she dead ass got me tight.
No, what does it mean? Not the sentence, crazy.
It's almost like fully agree.
Low key.
It's like you fully agree.
Fully
like,
agree.
Alright, yeah.
Again,
About
like,
that.
that shit.
Now we're
It's lit.
down to your sentence that you want
Alright,
to be.
alright,
Now, you ready to talk about
Hold
how
on
down
now.
bad to
I
my
got
dick?
questions. All right, hold on. Stop it. Stop that shit.
What?
Down bad to my dick. I don't know what that one means because I don't want to know what it means. Fuck out of here.
No, it's not in gay. It's not in gay.
I don't give a dick. Ain't no nigga rolling up on me talking about yo down back to my dick. Fuck out of here.
Hey, yo.
Fuck out of here.
Well, I was just saying.
I don't even want to know what that means because I'm not
I gotta
saying
say it. I gotta say it, but whatever. It means that you're like
Desperate?
poor.
You're like
you
desperate?
put like,
Nah.
like
you
poor.
broke.
Like you broke. It's no, not broke. You're poor.
Now, if
You
a
don't got
nigga
shit to
roll
your, you don't
on
got
me
shit to your name.
talking about I'm down bad to my dick. That's a fight.
You poor.
I
Like
can reach
fight.
a nigga woke up,
I don't know what
yo,
the extra
you
part-
got
I know down bad, but not to the. I don't
Yeah,
know the part.
my nigga.
Yo, my nigga, you got a dollar.
Ash,
down
bro,
bad.
Ash, that I get.
Ash, it's
Down
crazy.
bad.
I swear, the YNs that I be talking to, they be
But
using
why
this
y'all
shit like
add
crazy.
dick to it?
I know down bad, but down bad to my dick, I figured out like a couple months ago. My friends
It's
really.
not even that shit is crazy.
You know who?
We don't even know.
You know who?
We don't even know.
The same steam fish.
The same thing. That's a good sentence. A good sentence. I fuck with the sentence. That same steam fish. You right. I'm with it. All right, so females, clock it.
Clock it.
Clock
What
it.
is that? What does it mean though? Like, what's the definition?
Fucks with it.
It's like, in a sense, it's like.
Yeah.
All right, so flex.
Next word, please.
no.
You're pissing me off.
All right, we're gonna go to mud
Why did you skip cook?
because he gonna say next. So
Yes.
mud
What? Mud? M-U-D?
and mud.
Companion,
My
friend.
nigga.
Yeah.
Technically, yeah.
Annoying.
Technically.
Annoying shit that certain people say.
Yeah, you're right.
I will
You're
admit,
right.
I will admit you got me on that one. I don't know mud.
Hello?
That's mine. That's
know
mine.
mud.
What is hello?
Hello?
I've never seen you good
Hello
mud.
was like you dead ass?
Never.
You're right, yes.
I'm not gonna
Yes.
front.
Dead ass?
I'm not gonna front.
Hello,
I never heard mud.
What?
I never heard mud.
It's a Bronx thing.
That's new to me.
It's a Bronx
mud,
thing.
muddy.
It's a Bronx
That's
thing.
muddy.
Yeah,
If you were to say
That is not only a Bronx thing.
You could be down the block.
That's like
Mud is the Bronx term.
You know what I'm saying? Like
The same,
Mud is the Bronx term of gang.
of
Yeah.
gang.
What up, gang?
No, I thought
What
mud
up,
was
mud?
more
I don't
like
see
oh
that.
like they grew together like they grew up from the mud type shit.
You
like,
could be on the
from
corner.
when they was
You
little.
could be on the corner. You be down the
You
block.
say
Hey, yo,
that, you
mud.
say that, but how they
Don't call
use
me
it is like gang
Don't call me
because
mud, 'cause
like
I'm always
like
mud.
Rakai, you good
Mud.
mud?
You feel me though, my nigga? You
Alright,
calling me
so-
mud, you calling me down?
Nigga said nigga GK said don't call me mud. Don't call me
Yeah,
mud.
that's my slang. Hello? What are you doing? Like, are you dead
That
ass?
was more of an expression. though.
Alright, so shook.
Scared.
Ain't no such things as halfway crooks.
Scared.
OG
Scared
shit.
to look and you fucking scared, bro.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Snatched
Yeah.
means you popping. Like your
Yeah,
body is
it's
snatched,
yeah.
right?
It means your body is fine, but
Yeah.
Body
Yeah.
is technically.
Your
Body
body
is
is
fine.
Snatched.
Open body.
Like the aunties I be swinging, they be
Alright, so I'm gonna go down the switch
Switch?
and then start from up there.
You said
Switch?
switch?
Yeah, from a switch. What's a switch?
A switch?
Ass
Something you get your ass whooped with.
No,
Something you get your ass
A knife.
whooped
A
to.
switchblade.
that is what that is. though,
It is
because
what
old
it is, but
people
that's
used
not
to
the
be like,
slang.
Go
Switch
pick
is
the
what?
switch off
When
the
a YN
tree,
tell you, I'm gonna go to the switch.
I'm gonna whip your
Right,
ass
so
with
switch
that
is
Yeah,
shit.
there you go.
Turn the switch.
I'm about to go to the switch.
If you
Don't
say in the
skip
sentence,
easy
I
now.
don't know what you mean.
That's
Turn
so
the
But
switch
just
to
the word
automatic.
switch.
Switch is automatic.
Turn
My
it,
nigga,
turn
I'm
it.
walking the
Right.
switch on.
So
I
going
ain't
get the
scared,
switch means
nigga,
turn
go
the
get
pistol
it.
to the automatic.
Yeah, there you go.
Basically.
No, but no, the reason why I gave it to y'all because it is a switch. Like it
You
used
didn't
to
give
be like a switch knife.
You didn't give nothing to me. Pause.
No, that's not what it means.
I want to be a teammate, but I didn't say
Somebody
You're
else
right, I
said that
didn't.
means-
Trey, I did not. I repeat, I did not. I
Switch.
swear to God. This nigga here in the back, bro. Get him out. Alright, so
Get him
peace.
out.
No, you skipped easy. What the fuck?
Easy. What you mean?
That's right. What you mean? What?
Easy.
Easy.
It's right
Easy
there.
hunching.
Oh no, yeah, you're right. Easy.
Where you see easy at?
Right there.
Right
Easy.
next to hunching.
I
So
don't
easy.
see hunching either.
Easy. At the top right, top right.
I see a piece. Is that one piece?
That's a tip.
No, easy.
But wait, why is peace spelled that way?
Like one piece.
No, but easy.
That ain't how you spell one piece.
Easy.
Piece of pie.
I come before you.
No,
Easy.
That's not how it is. That's not how you spell PC either.
I went to school.
Easy.
Easy education on this side.
Nigga, we're on easy. We're not on peace. We're on easy.
What's easy? What's
Easy hunching?
No, not easy.
No,
hunching.
fuck
Easy
that
by
nigga.
itself.
Just easy by
Shorty,
itself.
shorty easy. You feel me?
Easy, yeah, like you know what I mean?
Shorty
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, like shorty easy, like she easy.
That's
going.
not a
she
new
willing to give it up
fucking
to you.
term.
That ain't
man.
easy. That ain't new.
You old as fuck.
All right, now why did you spell peace like that? Because it's not.
Now peace. What is peace?
You spelled that wrong.
Oh, peace.
No, I spelled it right.
That
A
is not-
weapon.
they just
A
wanna
weapon.
change the spelling.
A weapon.
A weapon.
No.
I got a piece on me.
Okay.
Oh,
Alright, so to put it like this, without like no, because of
Penis?
stream.
Peace, my
Yo,
peace.
she sucked my piece.
Yeah, penis.
That's what it is. That's what it
is
is. I swear that's what it is.
That explains why I spelled that way.
Yeah,
All
she
right.
touching my piece. You know what I'm saying? My
I
piece.
got her.
That's not
That's
even new
new.
either.
That's not new. That's
No,
old.
it's
not.
That's not new.
Hunching is fucking.
You're making me
that
think
ain't
that
new.
this
No,
is
it ain't.
something new.
Hunching is.
Baldy is funny. Let
Hunching
me go
is
get my
fucking.
piece to
It's
cook
not.
that
Hunching is
food.
mine.
Nah, it
What-
is, it is.
what is
Yes,
hunching
it
then?
is. What?
Hunching is not.
What is
Hey,
hunching?
hunching when the girl do when you eat her shit. That's
Hey,
hunching.
No, it's
No.
not.
That's
It's not.
hunching,
No.
nigga.
That's munching. Not
I'm
munching.
sorry. My
Hunching
fault.
is sex, man. Come on. Yo,
Get him
why
out
you
of
know
here. Get
this?
him out of here.
All right, y'all got that right. I'll give it to y'all. Fuck it. Not like that. Not like
What was your
that.
first explanation when you eat the what?
When she grab your head when you eating it, that's hunching.
No,
No, it's not.
It's fucking.
My fault, gang. Nice.
Oh.
That means that my friends using it wrong.
That's your
I'm good, right?
We using it wrong. All right, back door.
All right, cool. I got to act for insurance.
All right, back door.
Okay.
Back door.
That's what they say on the bus.
What?
Cutthroat, right?
Not really,
You
no.
backdoored me.
From the
Yeah,
back?
that's what I thought.
You back? No, you backdoored me.
From the
Let
back?
me be the
Cut from
OG.
me.
Let me be the OG in the house. That
It's like-
slang ain't coming up in here.
Nah, it's like
Yeah,
you. It's
that-
like you.
that's
It's like you
crazy.
turn on your mans. You
Nah, nah,
back-
nah, nah. I don't want to
Yeah.
do
That's
that.
what I just
Oh,
That's
said.
what it means. Like somebody goes to the back door, like they
back
unexpected.
door me.
Right, right.
You
Exactly.
violated my
Back
door.
door. Right,
Yo, hey, yo.
right. I was trying to not say it, bro. I was trying not to, bro.
No.
Got to be more careful.
I
Drop
know
a
what you
bomb,
mean.
I'm tripping.
I ain't get caught with it.
Some slangs I'm not using, bro.
Hey,
Yeah,
Yo,
yeah.
Jody
bro.
said Batgirls 14.
Backdoor Girls 14, the classic, yes. Oh,
What type of
yo, you
He
listen.
said 14. He know the number.
I know what backdoor is because we recorded a porno back then. We go backdoor, backshot grannies.
Backshot grannies.
Backshot
Backshot
grannies.
Backshot grannies.
Hey, yo.
Backshot grannies my back door.
Alright,
I'm
cool.
trying to tell you it
A
was
bop
lit.
is a hoe.
What the
Yeah,
fuck?
Yeah.
A bop is a hoe.
Alright, munyan. What's
It's money.
munyan?
Munyan.
We
Munyan.
skip. We skip Lula.
What's
48?
48?
Oh, no, it's not 48. It's 48.
48, not 48 finesse, but 48.
The cops.
That means basically like you tricked them. Like
Yeah, you tricked them.
I didn't know that. I didn't
When
know
somebody
that.
48 you, that's like somebody setting you up.
Oh,
Setting you up. So when somebody tell you 48, they got set up.
They got 48. They got set up.
I didn't know that.
Y'all got to be more careful out there, chat. Be careful. Don't get 48.
Wait, so finesse is swindle.
We know what finesse is next.
Yeah.
Jack in the
trend. I know y'all don't know this one.
You copying my stilo.
No, it's not Jack in the trend. It's not Jack in the trend.
Basically, I think trend is supposed to be like a gang.
No.
And yes, it is.
No, trend is a gang, yes, but the whole sentence is one thing.
You jacking a gang you ain't even
trend,
from. You set tripping.
You listen to Kylie Rich.
You set tripping.
No, you listen to Shaggy and Scooby?
That's our
Shaggy and Scooby.
No, not Shaggy and Scooby, the actual characters.
I was
No,
hoping
the actual.
So why would you just say Shaggy and Scooby and expect everybody?
No, because their name is Shaggy and Scooby.
Who is that?
two YNs. They call Jack.
Okay, y'all not gonna take the names and use it.
Alright,
So Jack in the trend set tripping.
Scrap Scooby? That nigga?
No, not OB Scrap Scooby. No, the other one, Scooby.
Who you talking about?
You don't know Shaggy and Scooby?
No, I know the cartoon.
Wait, Jack in the trend is not set tripping?
No, I'm dead ass lost.
No, it's not.
What are they
I
talking
don't know.
Like,
Alright, let me explain
gang,
it. Let me explain it. Let me explain it. Do you know Jack in the Trend?
No.
I know that song though.
Does anybody in chat know Jack in the Trend?
No,
They don't know. That's
you
like
made that shit up.
No, I didn't. I swear I
very
didn't.
niche
It's a whole
wrong
song
thing.
called Jack in the Trend. I promise you.
Even Galaxy Store said first it was 12, now it's 48. Damn.
What up, Julius? What's going on, my
Exactly.
boy? I was trying to get you here, gang.
And now after 48 is 6, 7.
But alright, cool. So Jack in the Trend came from a song, and a lot of YNs was using it. But basically, how the song goes is she Jack in the Trend. I bet Scooby and Court put the dick on her butt. Yeah, meaning that you going.
That's his thing.
Yes.
Know that song.
You know that song?
That's his thing. She got it cut.
Yep. It's like a keep throwing dick on her butt. Right. That's what Jack in the Trend is. So Shorty tell you.
What's happening?
So
Why is talking about dicks and butts?
All day long.
Trend is a gang in the Bronx.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an actual gang in the Bronx.
It is.
Jack in the Trend. So
But Jack in the Trend is basically
Jackie the
putting
gang.
her butt.
Like she jacking, you feel me?
So alright, itching and burning. She got me itching and burning.
She got me itching.
Goldie!
Appreciate the biddies.
Daddy Mac,
Clap
yeah.
it up for the biddies.
Appreciate you. Oh, biddies matter, y'all. Goldie's about to make me proud.
Let me ask a question. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
For the OGs, fuck these niggas.
Damn.
Wow,
Out of all
that's
these
fucked
new
up.
slang, which one you like the most?
The one I like the most?
Yeah.
Hello? I like that.
That is
all that other shit, no.
That ain't even new though.
That's not. I don't like that one. I don't like down bad to my dick. I hate that.
Not doing that. We're not talking
Even
about
though
black.
I
This is your
I
porn.
like Munyon.
Yeah.
Munyon.
You got that Munyon?
I like to eat
If we're talking about like
Munyon.
brand new shit, even though Munyon is just saying money,
Yeah.
I can fuck with Munyon.
Munyon
I
is
can
not
fuck with
bad.
Munyon.
Munyon is
Well,
not
he
bad.
said itching and burning. That means
What's itching and burning? You got something?
You got some shit.
Itching and burning.
Why,
She got it.
It's not a slang term,
Right,
man.
that's just what it is.
And
That's
that's
a
what they
fucking
say.
sentence.
That's how you describe it to your doctor.
That's how they say. But that's how they say it. You say prescribe it to your doctor. Nigga said she got me itching and burning.
Wait, what he forgot?
Yeah, I forgot hers. You right.
And Riz.
So Rand said hers and Riz and what? Oh. Wagwan, man.
Wagwan.
Yeah.
Yo, Wagwan Mandem. Yo, Saran
Slime
Durant. That's
out
my
me,
guy.
slime
Yo.
My guy Saran, yeah.
What does slimed out mean?
What slimed out mean? If you say anything gay, I'm gonna.
No,
If it's
slime
anything
is
with
like.
I'm not gonna
Yeah.
It can mean two things.
Right.
Two things.
What that mean?
Like you
Slimed
slime a
out.
girl out, you fuck
Okay,
her.
I was thinking
right.
that. I
You
was thinking
Slimed
got-
that.
out is just like
train.
beating somebody up. Like I just slimed her out. Like I slimed him out type shit.
Right.
I would never say that.
Why would y'all use those two things in the same context?
I understand you explaining it.
It
I'm
technically
saying I would
is.
never say
You
that.
beat a dude up, but you beat a girl up.
No, you beat a dude up and
but
slime
it's
them
like
out.
but it's
No
but it's
way.
like
Right.
No way.
Right.
no, but it's like you
No
violate
way.
him though. You
No,
violate him.
I understand what you're saying.
Like you spit on him. kick
No,
him
no,
off.
I understand what you're saying.
I slapped that nigga out.
So, but why would y'all use that in the same context, though? It's so weird that they would do this.
I promise
You
you.
beat a dude up, spit on
No,
him.
for real. Where's the Urban
You
Dictionary at?
You beat a girl up, you spit
No,
on
they
him.
said I slimed
You
him
slimed
out.
out.
It's crazy
They
work.
said I slimed him out, then went and slimed his bitch out.
This is crazy.
Slamming some of those niggas in
I
there.
promise you. Nah, say like that's 8. Yo, I ain't gonna lie.
Hey, yo.
They got more slime than Nickelodeon.
No way.
Damn, son.
That's some crazy ass slang.
Yo, this new slang is not from my old days.
No,
Right
it's
now.
not. Daddy Mac and Julius appreciate the lurch. Yeah, I appreciate the lurch.
But you know what's crazy though?
Appreciation.
You think I put all of this on my ass? I didn't. I swear I didn't.
Okay,
Hey,
all
yo,
right.
yo,
It's not like
yo,
this.
why we gotta go back to that?
Hey, yo.
What's going on here?
What's
I don't
with the bro? What's with the dicks and the butts? What's going on?
CJ, that's your brother. That's your brother.
Damn, right now? That's crazy word.
How many times?
You know what? Fuck it.
What episode?
Whatever though.
Colton said we're gonna do the Detroit slang when I come through, the new slang. So yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yes,
Yes, please. So we know y'all not they slamming men out. You know what I mean?
We know what up, though, but we need more than Detroit shit because this shit here with
It's
the
some
dicks
next
and
level shit.
butts is crazy.
From New York,
Wait,
what does
Skull-
what mean?
Script, this is what y'all be saying?
Scroll the chart over.
Nah,
a
scroll
little
the
bit.
chart.
Niggas like,
Nah,
oh, it's
scroll the
like
chart.
a
Low key, you know?
I don't know what you're saying.
You gotta move it over. What's
Scroll the chart over a little bit.
Yeah, it's at the edge.
You sure?
No, it's not.
Move it over.
Akmean. Oh, that's the
Oh, that's the
Arabs.
That's the Habibis. That's the Habibis.
Habibi from the deli.
That's the Habibi
version of nigga.
It's the Habibi from the deli, not the
Right,
Spanish
right.
niggas, but the
Arab
Muslim
version of
motherfuckers.
That's the Arab. That's the Arab version
It's
of the
crazy because my
Habibi.
mind went straight to Doc Ock. But anyway.
Yo.
Hey, when you said Scooby and Shaggy, we wasn't supposed to thank the bird?
No, it's Jackie. It's Jackie the Train, bro. Jackie the Train. You know. Shorty tell you she want to jack the train? Yeah, you got it.
That means you gonna put it in her butt.
You watch too much TikTok.
That's
TikTok.
what else you got, man?
It's 2 minutes of this shit. It's crazy.
Alright, so hold on.
Right. It's more to this?
It's
Ain't no
more.
way in hell.
No,
God.
not slang. Which one? Alright, it's guess the soundtrack, video game, and anime. So I gotta turn this up.
Okay, this might be cool.
Yeah.
Wrong remote.
Wrong remote?
Yeah,
My fault, gang.
other one. No, I mean,
Is it the right one or is it the wrong
It
one?
should be high enough to hear.
That's what happened when you jack the train.
Is it how you
Give me
know
the remote.
Jacking the train, bro.
Give me the remote,
Put it back
Shooks.
in.
I said,
Yo, somebody, yo.
What is it?
put it back in.
Right, like, wait a minute.
That's crazy. Hey, yo, action right there.
All right, we got it. We good.
Alright, we good? Alright, cool. Alright, so start it off so it could be from a video game or anime. Point.
That's a
Why
video
you
game.
keep doing that?
That's
You
Pokemon
gotta
for sure.
pause it so don't go
I
to
gotta
the
store it
next
so I don't go to the next thing.
Definitely Pokemon.
It's a Pokemon, so
You
I'm
have
for
to
sure.
pause it multiple
It's a
times in
Pokemon?
a row.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I
That
just
is
know
not
it's
no.
video
That is
game.
not no video.
Wait,
game.
go back. Yeah, go back.
No. I mean that's not no.
Alright,
That's
so
not anime. That's a
not no
video
anime.
game.
Alright, so hold on. So and then
I think that is Pokemon.
It definitely is Pokemon.
do you know what game?
Right?
Oh, I just
Sounds
had
like
the
Jimmy
I just
Dog,
had the
something
same
like
monster
that.
as you,
Jimmy
bro.
Dog.
That's one of the old ones.
Do you know
Bro,
what game?
I just
Do you
had-
know
I
what
just
game?
had-
Y'all just gonna go Pokemon.
I'm just gonna say.
I know it's Pokemon. For sure.
I just had the same
Oh,
monster as you,
Sword
bro.
and Shield?
So now here's the twist. Pokemon
said Sword and
anime or
Shield?
Pokemon game?
Game.
Game.
The game.
Game.
Okay, it's the
Pokemon
game. Yes.
Sword and Shield.
No.
Sword and Shield, okay.
I say like
You gonna say no.
Emerald or
Oh
I don't know
my
which
God.
one it is,
I'll
but I
say
know it's
older
fucking
than that.
Pokemon.
So
Yeah,
so we break it on game.
Yeah. Pokemon
Yes,
game.
it's not the
game.
show.
Alright, so it's the game.
Yes, I do it.
I didn't play this one, so I.
You never played Black or White?
No.
I never either. I could just tell that was a
I
video game
I was taking her out. It was
Yeah,
like-
their songs is like really like unique. Like you can know it's a Pokemon game.
Wait, check in with chat. You got they participating.
Yeah, let me pull
Actually, I
it.
can look right here.
Red said Hondo Pokemon.
Pause it, you keep playing.
I got it.
Oh, no,
I got
it's
it.
not.
That was me.
Hundo Pokemon. Oh god.
So everybody said video game.
I played
Video
the second
game.
version, to be
Video
honest.
game.
Galaxy
Okay.
Soul said I played the second version.
A lot of people said video
Somebody
game.
said
Okay,
somebody
y'all,
else.
alright, y'all got one.
Yeah.
Y'all
Yeah,
got one.
shit, period.
Dog, if you don't play the One Piece theme when Luffy
Yo,
waking
don't
up to
play the
scrap,
One
I'm
Piece
unfollowing.
theme.
Oh man,
Who said that?
Wait, this is the one.
I ain't gonna lie, keep the follow, but no One Piece is up here. I'm sorry to say it.
Coach just said Ak is short for Aquaman.
Really?
That makes sense. That makes sense.
It do. Actually, yeah, now that you say it.
It makes
yeah,
sense. I never
do.
thought about it that way, actually,
do.
but it makes
It do.
sense.
It do. Bro, fuck Goku.
Hey. Ho. Yo.
Pause it.
Fuck.
Damn,
You pressed it when I pressed it.
Oh, let me guess. Let me guess.
I pressed it on the Yeah, that's what happened. You pressed it. But it's Smash Bros. Online.
But I knew it before it got.
Oh, I didn't know.
But you didn't know what game.
No, I didn't know.
He did though.
No,
bro.
No, but you can say Smash Bros. Which one? Melee, Bros, Brawl.
He said bro.
No, he said Brawl.
Mad at him.
No, I would have known it was that, bro. Like we know.
But
fucking crazy.
yeah. I'm not a Brawl guy.
It's the same. It's been an online thing from Brawl all the way through. It never changed.
Okay.
What he said.
Ruby is anime.
I don't know what anime, but I know it's anime.
Right.
He's on
I
to
know the
something.
difference between a video game sound.
He's on to something.
Yeah,
Anime
you can
sound.
tell.
You said Ruby? But what game?
Yeah, we got an anime head in here. He know anime.
Yeah. He's one of us. He's not one of the YNs. Yeah.
We got a YN lifeline.
Yeah.
YN lifeline.
We got a YN lifeline right
You said Ruby?
That nigga watch anime all day.
He said Ruby?
So you say anime?
I'm
I don't know what anime, but I'm going with anime.
So now when you
He
say
said
Ruby, anime or game?
Anime.
What you want to bank on?
Anime. Or it could be Blaze Blue.
Ain't no game.
Oh, what you gonna bank on, nigga?
Ain't no game.
I don't know. So
I'm
I'm gonna say
I'm
anime.
gonna bank on anime just how it sound. I'm gonna bank on it.
I'm
Yes,
gonna
because no
say
game
anime,
has a
but I
fucking
don't know
sound
what
as
anime.
anime.
And he went 2 video
But there are
games.
video games out there that have actual anime music. Actually, like for real.
If you don't shut up and fucking.
All right, cool. So
just
If you don't shut up,
it's a video game. He's right.
come on,
He said Blaze World. It was.
What about
All right, next one.
What battle?
Oh, that's the Bad Bunny song.
Play it again.
All right, not this one.
That's popular. Let me get a bacon egg and
It's definitely a game.
I don't know that one.
Okay, it could be from.
It sounds like a menu selection or some
Not
type
for
of
I
real.
can see why you say that.
a
I
map.
don't know
a
though.
map or something.
That's crazy.
Like background noise.
Yeah, like OST, something like
And
that.
I want bank on game.
I say
I'm
game.
gonna say game.
No animes.
I'ma
really
say
have
game.
no shit like that.
That's
I'm gonna say
that's
anime.
definitely in the bodegas. That's
I'm
game.
gonna say
Y'all gonna be
anime.
annoyed. Yeah, y'all gonna be so
I
annoyed.
said anime. Don't do that now.
No,
You
no,
said
you said
anime?
anime?
Yes, I
I'm
said
saying
that.
them two specifically, actually. But this is what it is. The theme song for Speed Cola.
Oh
What's
my
that? What's
god!
that?
But
Is that for fucking?
it does. It is.
It does.
Ain't no
Oh my
crazy.
god!
You know, it's crazy because it goes Speed Cola.
I was
Yeah,
just
that's right. Why did I play that
Because
part?
I can't. It has to do instrumental.
Speed cola speed up my life.
I could have got that.
Oh no, baby.
I didn't know it was
Zoom
speed
back
up
in.
my
Zoom
I
life.
back in.
don't know what that
Press
is.
F.
Black Ops 3.
Black
Zombies.
Ops 3.
Oh.
Zombies.
Okay, hold on. Wait a minute. Don't touch nothing. Damn.
That's the Speed Cola song.
What does Speed Cola do though?
Speed up the
They know that.
It be
You reload.
I might say they know
They play
that.
zombies.
They know
zombies,
that.
so they know.
They know. They know heavy. Heavy.
Your
Actually.
your reload speed, your
Yeah.
switching
Shooting.
from one gun to the next gun.
Yeah.
Not your foot speed though.
Yeah.
That's
That was
Stand up.
Stamina up. Yeah, I always like stamina up. And juggling.
Right.
Yeah, jugging's like important.
Yes. First thing you get.
First thing you get for sure.
Right. Immediately.
That's
What
a goddamn
anime?
anime.
That sound like Persona or some shit. I don't know.
Damn
It sound like
you know
Persona.
what
Persona's a
it
very
is.
good
Yup,
guess
that's
though.
true, too.
Persona's a very good guess.
I'm gonna go anime just based on how it sounds.
They always go like they always like do their songs like certain type of way,
Seven
just
Deadly
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
something
like that.
I'm gonna say
It
Yeah,
actually
you
sounds
got
like a
real
song,
niche.
song. Yeah.
So what we all banking on?
I'm gonna say Seven
Man,
Deadly
maybe we
Sins
don't know which.
something.
I don't know which one.
That's not Seven Deadly Sins.
No.
Alright, keep going.
I'm gonna say
You know what
anime,
this is,
but I don't know
Freddie.
which.
Hell no, I
it's
don't
an
watch
anime.
anything like that.
Alright,
I
so
took a shot in the
alright, the 7 Deadly
I'm more of a
Sins
Call of
right here.
Duty
I
head.
don't know.
It's not
I don't know. I
Seven-
just
it's-
said it because I just taking a shot in the dark.
It's not Seven Deadly Sins.
Yo,
I'ma tell you
your
that.
own
I'ma tell
YS
you
don't
that.
even know. He don't know this. He said.
Bro, I'm a Call of Duty head. I don't watch anime like that, bro. You know this for a fact.
What?
What are you
Don't
talking
look-
about?
don't-
Your own
You
companions
said you don't know this
bro.
anime?
Bro, I don't watch anime like that. What the
So
fuck
you
you
just
looking at me
told us
like that,
it's
bro?
So did you know the Speed Cola?
Yes, I know this because I play zombies, bro. What the fuck?
Speed cola speed up your life.
What the fuck?
Speed up your life.
So it's an anime.
Yeah, I really do need to speed up my life. Like, damn, what the fuck?
It's
Like,
an anime.
shit.
It's an anime. Oh, let's
wow.
fucking go.
My God.
Let's fucking
My
go.
God.
That's the song. Give me that
was
shit.
crazy.
That's
got
crazy.
that one.
That's
What season is that?
That's the song when Meliodas about to get shit get real.
Oh, let me go.
That's the song that they play when shit get
Not
real.
mad at that.
When Meliodas about to get real, it's up.
I
Give me that shit.
No, you don't hear it? You don't hear it?
It sounds like somebody going to kick some
Shit, I blame it on shit jump. See, I even said it when shit get real.
When shit get real. Look at this shit.
Yeah. All right, next
That's
one.
crazy.
Let's go. I threw a funny one here.
I got us, OGs. I got us.
We're winning.
Storm 2.
Yeah, you talk. We ain't hear it. Go back.
Yeah,
Oh my god. Oh my god.
It sound like Zelda.
No, that's definitely Ninja Storm.
It sound like the
Ninja Storm.
the map,
Ninja Storm
one of
4.
the game maps, something like
The
that.
game?
I don't know.
No,
He's absolutely right.
You should know this.
Yeah.
I don't know what storm it is, but
I know this for a fact.
Bro, wait.
I know this already for a
Play
fact.
Play it back.
I know this for a fact already. I'm not gonna say anything. I just know it already.
Ninja Storm 4.
I know this already.
It's definitely a map theme for sure.
Shook, you already got the answer in my head.
That is definitely Ninja Storm.
Ninja Storm 4.
Alright. Can I
I don't
answer?
think
Can I
it's
answer?
four,
Can
I'm
I
gonna just
answer?
let y'all see it. It is.
This is
three.
3.
This is
I
when
was
Naruto.
gonna say 3.
Three.
I
They
was gonna
fight
say
is in
3.
3.
Yeah.
They fight is in 4.
This is the end fight.
I was gonna
at the
say
end of the game,
3.
at the end of the story. This is when Naruto was like, I won't let you take back from Orochimaru type shit. But yeah, this is that one. And then alright, is this the funny one?
Let me get chat involved real quick. Let me see what chat talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Gundam Wing.
Gundam.
That's a good
about the
guess.
other
That's a
one.
good guess.
That was a
That's
good
what I'm
guess,
saying.
actually. Yeah.
About the
Wow.
other one, yeah.
I don't know.
Yo,
Speak.
bro.
Puerto Rico and go hard.
I don't know speed cola. I only speed coke. Wow. Wow.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
Speed Coke. I don't know about that one.
Ready?
Oh wait.
Y'all should all know.
That's Street Fighter.
No, wait. To Black History Month.
I am the stone that the building.
Boondocks, bitch.
The inspiration. The
I don't think GK knew that.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? My space bar not working. Oh, there you go.
Exit stage right now. Exit stage right now.
I've seen Boondocks, but I never really sat there and watched the
Yeah,
so
we gotta ask them first.
I didn't know that.
Wow. You
Yeah.
really watch
No,
it,
I
bro?
know the Boondocks. I don't know the theme.
Exit stage right
Make sure
right
they
now.
answer us first before you give us the answers.
I did not know that.
Because he didn't know that. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. But I did.
But you did. So
I'm
what
about
did
to
you?
I thought the theme song was like just giving up. That's why I said Black History Month. Fuck it.
You know, all black people don't watch black shows.
I think I have one more. Okay.
Yes, that is Sonic Adventure 2.
What is it? It's a game. Okay.
I knew it.
Bonus points if you know what it is.
Didn't know
Sonic
what game.
Adventure 2.
Didn't know
when,
which game exactly.
When is it when Knuckles arrives?
They're coming at you for your spelling.
Knuckles
Chat.
I was texting fast, y'all. My fault, gang. Whatever. Is that what you want to do? Chat is in my like.
Yeah,
Yo, we're on my ass.
it's definitely Sonic Adventure 2.
He said
Knuckles
bro
shows
spelled
up.
Sasuke sauce.
Knuckles, not his stage, because it's not his stage. His stage is the other sound, the
You got mad
Halloween
twins,
sound.
You're
right. It's his theme, actually. Here, Rob Coon.
They call me Knuckles. I like side down chuckle. I'm always flexing my knuckles.
Alright, that's everything. That's everything. Alright, now,
where's part 2?
Music.
Yeah, he black. He real black.
He does is black, though. I can't lie.
Okay. Huey and Riley, the best YNs. Yes, yes. They was really, like, insane. Like, oh my god.
Part 2.
Alright, part 2.
This is the last one, right?
So, we are gonna start,
saw pictures.
if I remember correctly.
YN Gauntlet.
So,
Oh,
there's
shit.
a YN Gauntlet.
Oh, okay. This might be interesting.
The champion,
Oh shit, who's the champ?
you Lil Uzi Vert.
No.
Lil Uzi Vert.
No, the way he cheated on JT,
Bring the drink.
The way he cheated on JT,
Are you starting the gauntlet with fishery?
Okay, the left picture is
I
fine.
Uzi Vert, though.
The left picture is fine. Stop it.
This
The left picture is fine.
This picture.
The right one, he was trying to be Bill Tanks. He was trying to be Bill Tanks over here. He was trying.
I don't even know what she said because she's foreign.
Alright, so versus Ice Spice.
No Uzi Vert.
Come on.
Lil Uzi Vert. What the fuck?
Wait a
Ice
minute.
Spice.
Songs. This is all songs.
Popularity
Well,
only.
if you want to put all of it, fine. But songs specifically, I was doing it for.
For songs, Lil Uzi Vert. Ice Spice's music is fucking ass.
You gonna do Ice Spice over Uzi?
Ice music is ass. The only thing Ice could do is
You gonna go because she's hot? Get the fuck out of here.
the only thing Ice could do is shake some ass. For
That's
real.
all
I'm
she
not
did.
gonna
And that's the
lie,
only
like-
thing I need.
She shook ass.
That is all I need from anybody up there.
She
Bro,
shook
all she
ass.
do is
She shook ass in the duggy over my sandwich. Like, bro, you didn't hear the song. You didn't hear the song Dougie. She shook ass over my sandwich in the duggy.
I'm voting on looks. Absolutely.
so.
Ice
So you
Spice.
gonna vote on looks is crazy.
Yeah,
You
that's
going
my
Ice
Uzi.
Spice?
I've
So
always liked
let's
Ice
go around the
Spice.
room. I say
Right.
Uzi.
All right, we got one Uzi, two Uzi.
Uzi.
Ice.
Ice. Okay, one Ice, two Uzi.
To Uzi.
Anybody else?
I'm
What you
going
got?
Uzi.
What you got, Ash?
Uzi.
Uzi.
Who's going with
Uzi.
Ice Spice? Who's going with Ice Spice?
Me.
She made a song
I don't
called
care about
Dougie.
her song.
But wait.
What
She
you
shook
going?
ass in the Dougie over my sandwich in
like
the
mad
summer.
times.
Like- I said, what is- Yo, I didn't eat it. I told the op.
Yes, you did.
I told the op, yo, make it over. I told op, make it over. I told op, make my sandwich over. I told him to get a bacon, egg, and cheese.
Alright, so
So I'm
Uzi
gonna
got
make it
that.
over.
Uzi got
Yeah, Uzi got one right now.
Especially because that
Alright,
song
so
Ice dropped for that
Uzi
fucking SpongeBob.
or Lil Tecca?
I don't know. I don't know.
I got
Lil Tecca.
Have you heard of I Got Black, I Got White, What You Want?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's a song by Lil Tecca. The one in the
What
right.
about his newest song? The,
What is white? What is
I like
white?
that song. Yeah, I know that song.
What's what?
What's his song? Who's this kid?
He got I Got Black, I Got White, What You Want. He got the
Yeah,
that song.
Yeah,
he got that song.
Yeah. I'm gonna hold you. I still ride with Uzi on
Me
that
too, I'm
one.
with Uzi.
Okay, all right, Uzi.
for sure.
A bunch of Uzi up there.
Two for Uzi and mine. Uzi.
I ain't gonna lie, I respect it. Tecca is kind
I
of
equally don't care, but I'm gonna vote for Tecca.
You really don't care.
He's not dressing weird in this photo. God damn you.
He wears blouse.
How
dare you?
I had two photos. I still put a photo on purpose. He's talking about how he dressed.
He still look like height.
Oh my god. this
He
nigga-
made the list.
He
If you're
wears
wondering who made the list, it was him.
Don't bring
It
up
was
Prince
him.
right now.
It's better than Ice whole catalog. Who made this list?
He also wore a jacket that had
Was it you?
shoulders.
Right.
Alright, so Uzi on that one.
I'm
Usher
voting
wore
for
a blouse too.
Tecca because I would wear his outfits.
Okay, alright.
Oh,
Uzi
shit.
on that one.
What the fuck?
Alright, so Uzi or Zeddy.
Zeddy, definitely.
All day.
Definitely.
I can't be mad with y'all on that. I can't. Where you going? I know what you doing in
He
got some bangers I can't lie.
Now you getting drunk.
No, my mom.
I wanna say more than
His newest song is I'ma sit back with a blunt.
I got. Does he wear blouses?
No.
Fuck that. I'm voting for this nigga.
I picked this photo for a reason. This nigga still doing it. Oh my
Zeddy?
lord. Alright,
Where's Eddie from? Brooklyn or Bronx?
Let's see what chat talking
I
about.
think Bronx.
Chat, do you guys know who the fuck Zeddy is?
Yeah,
Yes, everybody knows.
let's
No,
see.
everybody don't know.
Zeddy coming up there. Zeddy, he's so funny.
Surrender. How do you're not from the? What the fuck?
Zeddy is up. Coming. Well, he's coming up there.
Zeddy
Kitty
was
Cat
on
said
the-
no.
Zeddy then.
Kitty said no.
I can't be mad with y'all. I can't be mad with y'all with Zeddy.
He got
I can't
what?
be.
You got like 9 baby mamas.
How old
Baldy
is he?
exit stage right.
23.
At least he get bitches.
He got 9 baby
That's a
mamas.
lot. He got
Who?
Who?
Wait, who got
Zeddy?
9 baby mamas?
Zeddy got 9? Oh, he was wilding.
Oh no, that's crazy.
He didn't care to pull out.
You
He
know,
was like,
I
"Fuck
wouldn't.
it."
I wouldn't be surprised if Zoe was one of his baby mamas.
Oh damn. Yeah, that do make
Damn.
sense, yeah.
They voting for Zeddy.
Yeah, I see. They're going for Zeddy.
So
All
Uzi
right.
got an L.
Yeah, so far, after what,
So
like
that's
2?
That's 2-1.
2-1. All right, 2-1. So now, YNW Melly.
No, 5 women, 5
Get the
different
fuck out of here,
girls.
bro. Come on.
What? You
got
picking
5 kids.
Melly?
Ash is
Uzi.
getting tight.
Uzi. You going
Ash is
Uzi?
getting mad.
Okay.
You
You
know,
going Melly?
Ryan Millie is an evil person. I don't fuck with that nigga.
Why is
Why
he
you
evil?
But you're doing it off his songs, not who he is.
A lot of his songs.
Oh, no.
You're doing it off his
Two
songs.
of his best friends.
Yeah,
Yeah,
rolled
that's why he locked up right
Rolled
now.
around dead bodies in the back of his trunk.
That's
Yeah,
crazy
Yeah,
as
he was
fuck.
wild.
What?
That's why he locked up.
He's a weird ass nigga, bro.
Yeah,
I'm
he
about
was.
to vote for Uzi on that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Right.
Just because he has dead body? Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he made a song about it too.
Yeah, he did.
That's why they caught your dumb ass.
Yes.
It was what Murder on My Mind.
Yes.
Yeah, Murder on My Mind. Okay, so Uzi got that one.
Yeah.
All right.
But Zeddy got 5 baby mamas and 5 kids.
God damn!
That's
Fucking crazy. Because I didn't even know that.
I
I didn't even know that.
What? He might.
Yeah, 223s. Yes, Sarah.
I need a paycheck to
Keep
not
that
come
nigga
to
in prison, please. Keep him in there, please.
He's gonna be in there for a while. He's gonna be out there for a while.
Yeah, so that's 3-1 for sure.
Lil TJ.
Lil
TJ.
I ain't gonna lie, TJ. You don't know TJ. You don't know Lil TJ.
Lil TJ.
TJ got it.
Yeah,
TJ got some bangers though. He fell off, but he got some
Yeah,
bangers.
Lil TJ. That's my favorite.
Does he wear blouses?
No.
Yes, he do. How about that? Yes, he do.
No, he don't.
He wear kilts.
No, he don't.
Oh, that's crazy.
Does he wear kilts?
No.
Okay.
No. The nigga said, does he? The nigga said, does he?
Yo.
You don't know nowadays. All these niggas be wearing dresses nowadays.
That's what I'm saying. I gotta ask the YNs.
Whatever. All right.
So that's 3-2.
3-2. All right, cool.
3-2.
All right, so now, Uzi versus
Meg
Megan.
Meg!
Megan's coming out with the anime called Hotties.
I had to put some females in there.
I'm biased as fuck.
I had to put some females in there. I had to.
Ice Spice was one.
Chat, y'all need to watch Megan's new anime that's coming out. It's called Hotties.
Y'all not gonna ask me the person who's supposed to wear blouses.
Yo, fuck the blouses, nigga.
No, fuck you.
Man got that.
No,
got that
fuck
loud.
Tory. Not free Tory. Fuck Tory.
Let me see chat.
Tory does not need to be free.
Yeah,
No.
speaking.
No, free Tory.
No, fuck Tory. Fuck Tory.
Why?
Hey, he said banned.
Oh, damn, time's ran out. Goddamn.
Oh, she wildin'.
Damn, Kitty banned them.
Yeah, Kitty.
What did Saran do? Why'd you ban him, Kitty? What happened?
He said free Tory.
Damn, I like Tory.
She said,
I
fuck
say free
She
Tory
said,
too.
she said,
You
fuck
can't ban
Megan,
a
free
nigga for
Tory.
that. That's crazy word. Free Tory, nigga. The nigga did not shoot her. What's the problem?
Oh, yeah, you right.
BT Gamers in the room, too, y'all. Shout out to BT Gamer. Yeah. What's up, bro? What's going on, man?
I voted on the chick. Wow, balls.
He said,
She said he's
Game
not
Night,
bad.
I need your
Yeah,
opinion
Meg's
on
song is
something.
fire, period.
Alright, so I'm guessing Meg got that. I'm guessing. Wait.
I don't
And
care
no
if you-
Uzis? No
I don't
Uzis?
care if you listen to
I
Megan
said
music.
Uzi
No,
already. I said Uzi.
No, Meg.
No Uzi?
No, he lost.
I don't really care if you
Who
cry.
are you voting for?
Uzi is that? Come on now.
You have got to know.
So we
Alright.
Who is this nigga?
Who's that?
So Super. This is So Super. If you don't know his song, he's all around TikTok and stuff. This is his song.
Oh, that's the song?
Yes, it is. That's his song.
I got one question.
Wait,
Don't you say it.
Oh, wait.
This is the song.
Zeddy should
No,
rap
that's
or
not. That's
No,
not
it's not
Zeddy's song.
Zeddy.
It's the same beat.
Huh?
Is it the same beat as Zeddy's song?
No, Zeddy did another. Yeah, it's the same beat as one of Zeddy's songs.
Yeah,
Yes.
a lot of
But he
niggas
actually
do
did the
same
song
shit.
first. He did the track first.
Answer my question.
Who's the nigga? What's the nigga name?
You know the question.
Oh my lord! You said what?
No.
You don't wear blouses?
No.
I'm gonna vote for this light skin.
He got contacts in his eyes though. Can get him out of here.
He don't wear blouses. What are you talking about?
He wear blouses.
What's
So you
wrong?
got the context of it? No, never mind. I ain't gonna
What's
ask.
wait? What's wrong with people with light eyes? Because his eyes can be
I
natural.
agree.
You want to have a discussion right now, nigga?
Nah.
Alright.
I don't know why. Like he don't even have
Yes,
fingernail
nigga,
paint
stop
on right now. He don't have that.
That's old Uzi though. You know that's old Uzi.
That's
really
won that.
2017.
Uzi won that. Uzi won this battle. Uzi won.
Uzi
No, he didn't.
Uzi won over So Super?
No, he
Yes.
No.
I ain't gonna hold
How
you.
many
I'm gonna ride with So Super.
I'm a ride with Soul Super too.
Come on, don't hide.
So Super not bad.
Matter of fact, I'm lying.
Come
I'm
on,
lying to
don't
you.
hide. Like, nigga,
I'm
get
doing
away
it.
from me.
I was joining the bandwagon, though.
So you're telling me in a 3-hour car ride you can listen to So Super more than Uzi?
That's
You
what
only
I
have
said.
one
I-
track,
I-
bro.
Picking,
What other songs did he have?
Whose music we like better?
What other song he have besides the TikTok shit?
Super.
I think
He
missed
got
that
Don't Hide. He got CTTFRM.
He got another song
I
called
saw you
No.
got Spotify music up there.
Yeah, he got more
you know
music.
what
He got more music.
He got another song
I'm
called
going
No.
with Uzi on that one.
Yeah, bro, look.
I'm going with
Yes,
Uzi.
look.
I'm going with Uzi on that one. Yeah.
I'm going with.
Somebody said it was rigged. Somebody said it was rigged from the start.
Super.
Super Saiyan.
Yeah, I got Uzi versus some scrubs. This rigged from the start. He's not a scrub. He's actually up there.
He got a song called. He got a song called No.
They out.
And then he got another song. He got another song called Dumb Crazy.
Three something.
Dumb Crazy.
3-4.
Dumb Crazy.
No, for real.
Dumb Crazy. He got a.
Lil Durk.
Lil Durk.
Over Lil Durk?
Over Lil Uzi?
Yes.
Over Lil Durk?
Yes. What's wrong with y'all?
No, Lil Uzi over Lil Durk. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
I'm not gonna lie.
I like Durk's music.
Little Durski's gonna be Little Durk. Little Durski's
Yo,
gonna be
GK.
Durk. Like,
Let me hear something.
Hold on, we got some
Drop
bars.
some bars,
We got some
bro.
bars in. Hold on.
Yes, he is. Right now.
BTA Gamer says for some bars.
Hold on. BTA Gamer says spit some bars real
BTA Gamer
quick.
says spit some bars, so let them have some bars.
Well, no, it's YN takeover, so YN gotta spit a bar.
YN gotta spit a bar. I ain't
You
spit
gotta
shit.
spit some bars.
I am not that lyrically correct like that.
One of y'all
I'm not
niggas figure it
spitting
out.
shit, so.
I'm in the backyard.
I'm bad at that. Damn, man.
Damn.
BTA Gamer? I don't know.
You gonna let this nigga spend his money and not get no bars? That's crazy work. This nigga's about to leave the game lounge and start to lurk.
Oh shit.
Don't let me drop these bars twisted. It'll get perverse.
Oh shit.
Don't let me come around your girl. If she an auntie, she gonna start to twerk.
Oh shit.
Drop the
Period.
bar.
Drop the ball.
Period.
If you do it one more time for the ball.
Yeah, drop it one more
I got
time.
you, BT. I got you.
Guys, he also said I need to know what you guys think about my new Twitch profile picture that I'm going to be using for my Twitch streams going forward. Well, we can't see that right now.
You can't see that right now, but we'll check it out.
Sir, this is my time.
Yeah, who got hit with the Sonic Ring? Who got hit with the Maurice?
Kitty with the
Right.
redeem. Yes, sir.
What's up, bro?
Yeah.
Hey, Cash, my guy. What's up, bro?
Hey, Cash, what it do,
Cash.
playboy?
Yo.
This is YN's show, so we in the back.
Yeah,
But
they
I'm always
taking
in
over. The
the back.
YN just running the
It's
show.
a YN.
It's all
So
YN
you popped
shit.
that at the right time because you a YN, so this is YN show today, bro.
Galaxy, that's Glaze. But yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Hey.
I just dropped the bars for y'all. I just dropped the bars for y'all from way over here. You know what I'm saying?
Next one.
So Dirk got that. Wait, how many Dirk?
No,
Dirk?
Uzi. Fuck Dirk.
I say
I'm
Little
Dirk.
Dirk became Little Dirk.
What's
What's the
Fuck
number?
Dirk.
What's
It's
the number?
Uzi.
So
it's
It's
four,
Uzi.
4-3 right
Uzi,
now.
okay.
Niggas sing too much, bro.
God, it's 4-3 right now.
Yeah.
But you like
But
Drake.
Uzi down.
What's wrong with you, my nigga?
That's not down.
But you like Drake.
Down.
That nigga sing too much, nigga.
No,
He made a singing
Dirk
album,
did this
nigga.
one
Take it out.
Oh, okay. So wait, so we going, so, wait, how many Uzi? How many Uzi?
Uzi's 3 and
Other people.
No, I'm saying who voted for Uzi.
So I'm
Only
gonna say Uzi.
I'm saying Dirk.
Dirt.
Fuck Dirk.
So we got Uzi.
So
We got Uzi.
Little Dirk is. I said Little Dirk.
Talking about you want Uzi or Dirk?
I said Uzi.
Okay.
I said Uzi.
Uzi.
Dirk is about to be fucking dirt.
Okay, so Uzi
So
got
Uzi
that.
got that
So
one.
Uzi
So
got that.
it's 4-4.
in this room.
It's YN.
So it's a tie. So
Lil Uzi getting up there. I like that. I like to see this. I like to see that. All right. So it's Uzi versus
Come on
Travis
now.
Scott.
Travis Scott.
No, fuck Travis Scott.
That's crazy.
the nigga that made Sicko
No,
Mode.
I'm joking.
Travis
I'm
gonna say
Travis
Travis
Scott.
The nigga that made Sicko Mode.
I'm gonna say Travis Scott.
I think
too.
it's sick
I like
himself.
the song
No,
with
I'm
him
joking,
and
I'm
Sis.
Chucky, this
Look,
nigga Travis is
What
sick
about
himself.
Dirk?
Like the fuck.
What about
Dirk?
Dirk?
That shit happened.
No. What about Dirk?
I actually
How
like
you not gonna
Travis
pick
Scott.
Dirk?
Dirk is ass.
Fucking
I'm not
traitor.
gonna lie.
And what they
Fucking
did at Travis Scott's show, that kind of blew mine too.
Yeah.
And they tried to
They
blame
didn't
it
do
like it was
nothing.
his fault.
It called it was he had too much people there.
Nah,
No,
come
you
on.
gotta know what you're doing. Too much crowd. You gotta keep that shit on the rack.
That was
You gotta
I feel like that was
see
security, probably.
That was security. Like he,
Yeah, it's a capacity weight
had to
on
pay
that
all
shit,
those
boy.
people.
Yeah, that ass.
All right,
they
so,
did have to
got
pay
it.
them people. I feel bad about that. I mean, I'm sure people really did get hurt in the process of it, but he shouldn't be
It's not
like.
his fault.
Somebody gotta do something.
I didn't make the stage.
They gotta sue somebody.
Yeah, sue the
Sue the niggas who the stage hands.
Yeah.
They made
They're
the
not gonna do
stage.
that. They're gonna sue him.
sue the
He
company
artist.
who
It's his fault that all those people came
owns
out.
the venue.
They look at it like it's his fault that all those people came out. So
I mean, he just wanted to hear the
He
song.
need a better lawyer.
That's
is what he
all.
needed.
Yeah, that's what he needed. Yeah,
Just had to hear the
Next one.
songs. All right, so who got that?
I'm
Uzi?
saying Travis Scott.
Travis Scott.
So Travis got that?
Travis.
Travis.
Travis
Travis
5-4.
got that.
That's fine.
5-4.
Travis is pretty decent. Travis is pretty decent.
Ah, damn it.
The ops is up right now.
All right, so
Ops is
Uzi
up.
or Nicki
No,
Minaj?
fuck Nicki Minaj. No, fuck that bitch. Uzi.
Damn.
No, because she was on shit with Donald Trump. No, fuck. No, Uzi.
She went
Fuck
hard on
Nicki
Uzi.
Minaj.
I'm not Uzi. She went hard on
You
Nicki.
guys know who Uzi
She was
voted
being.
for?
She was on national television with Donald Trump. No.
Oh, did he even vote at all?
Nicki Minaj, nigga.
You going
No, Nicki Minaj is on TV with Donald Trump. No.
Do you know who Uzi
This
voted
bitch is a
for?
Barbie doll.
You know who Uzi voted for?
You know who Uzi voted for?
He voted for Trump?
I don't know. That's the point.
That's the question.
I don't know.
Oh,
I think it was like.
But guess what?
But they're saying
guess
they
what?
know for a fact.
She looks good, and she has way more material.
Nikki ain't
No.
shit,
This
respectfully.
bitch is a Barbie
Damn.
doll. She did plastic surgery on herself.
Nobody
She's a
cares.
Barbie
And your
doll.
boy wears girl clothes.
They can't say human
That's crazy, bro.
So we also gotta remember how
Nicki is
we,
like 47.
So you telling me you date a Barbie doll? The fuck? Like
You chill with niggas who wear girl
Well, it's
clothes?
based on the music, not what they voted for.
You gonna keep doing this?
It's based on the music, not what they voted for. So it's just based on who you
It's
like.
based on the music.
I'm not even saying that.
Nikki got this one.
She was being
Nikki.
diplomatic.
That's not working.
She made a personal move for her business. She felt like. So.
Nikki.
Okay.
She's in the store. Nikki. I don't care what that.
Saran said
Yo, fuck
Kodak
the
Black
Barbie
plays
doll,
the
my
whole
nigga.
This
list.
is egregious. You're
Oh
gonna
my
vote
God.
against Nikki for Uzi
Saran,
verse.
cut it out,
Stop
Saran. I like
He
Kodak
said
too.
Kodak clears the whole list.
No, he doesn't.
Wow, Kodak is not
my
doing.
God.
Nah, hell no, not
Oh
Uzi.
my
Hell no.
He better than
God.
Uzi.
He
That's
said Nikki is like 47. Why is she here?
So what?
like I said, fucking Barbie doll. Like I said.
Nikki got this one.
Nikki got this.
Okay,
I say
I
Nikki
can't,
too.
I can't, you know.
I'm fan of Nikki.
They said
I mean,
Nikki
I
ain't
mean,
shit
y'all know who I'm
respectful.
going with.
Come
Honestly,
back.
I know who I'm
Immediately, little Uzi always got that.
I'm just saying, when it comes down to the music itself, the track record, Uzi can't touch it.
Yeah,
in
her
no
personality.
Nowhere.
Yeah,
Nowhere
yeah.
near it.
Yeah,
Nowhere
yeah.
near
Of
it.
course.
From hip hop to rap
To all
pop
types of shit.
culture,
Yup.
He's not.
he's not ready to touch her in no way.
Personality wise, no.
Personality and like personal shit, yeah, we can clearly see that he's just into fashion and like wearing blouses, but she just
What the fuck is up with
All right,
the
so now let's do it like this. Plot twist. Who do you think YNs will go for?
That's
Nikki?
not the
Well,
question.
the why? Well,
That's not the
depends on
question.
the
I'm just saying,
YN.
that's why I said plot
Moving the
twist.
goalpost so you can win.
No, I said plot twist. Y'all pick
No.
up Nikki fine. I
But be
agree.
careful with that question because there are the Bobs. There is no Uzis.
But the Bobs is us though. Our generation is more like the Bobs.
No, they
But
still
there is
bars.
still the Bobs.
Unless your parents were
You know,
Majority of
millennials,
Bobs are the
and then
gay
you
niggas,
grew up with
though.
with Nikki like I did, because my mom was born like whatever, but
Yeah, it's her personality. It's her personality.
Her
I
personality
feel
makes
y'all
her a
on that.
shitty person,
right.
but even still,
So then why is it not
Still a
fair for me to
fucking
say I
Barbie
hate
doll,
this
like,
nigga's
come on,
personality? He
son.
walks around with purses.
It's
Fuck
fucking
this nigga.
With
Barbie
purses?
That's a
It's called the
personality.
clutch.
That's his personality. Of course it's personality.
that's his character.
That's his personality.
He's emo.
fucking
Come
God.
on.
Your fashion
He's
is your
emo.
personality.
He's emo.
That's a personality.
You're right.
I agree. It's innocent.
So
I
fuck
agree.
this nigga then. What the fuck is y'all telling me?
What the fuck, man?
Man, crazy. Take off the
Take
makeup.
off the makeup and cloth. That list, everything. She must look awful. Damn.
All right, okay, she looks better than him.
God.
Fuck is that?
Because she's
We're
a
gonna
female?
have this argument. I'm
Because she's a
gonna challenge
fucking
everybody.
Barbie doll, bro.
Well,
How many
that-
times I
And
gonna
your
say
man
this
is
shit?
a girl clothes. Is what you telling me? Fuck out of here. What kind
But
of
guys
argument
are
we
going to
having
say
right
it. That's
now?
kind of wild to say. Yeah,
Bitch is not real.
No
Bitch is
And
not
your man is
real.
real?
Nigga, little Uzi Vert is
Let
real.
me see you go outside in the Uzi Vert outfit. Shut up. I'm coming at all of y'all. I'm not getting up off of this shit. Catalog, looks,
But that outfit
fashion.
he got on is decent. It's regular shit right
That's
now.
what I'm saying, bro. This nigga
That's
talks
what
he
I'm
wears
saying.
blouses.
Uzi. I don't give a shit about that. He got pink hair. Fuck this.
So
nigga.
what?
Uh-uh.
Because of his
Don't
Don't like it.
I
don't
care.
disrespect
Fuck Lil
purple
Yachty
like
too.
that.
What
That
you
is
saying? I
purple.
don't
That's
give a
not
shit.
pink.
Then you got Lil Pump.
Oh, Lil Yachty. I know
Little
Lil
Pump,
Yachty.
you're not making your argument better, my nigga. Shut up.
Who's Lil Pump?
I'm gonna fight all y'all today. I don't care what y'all tell me
But
right
it's a
now.
lot of artists who got different color hair. Stop.
I'm talking about dudes.
Who's Pump?
Cisco had silver ass hair.
Silver, I
yeah.
said pink.
But as I said, there's
Color.
other guys.
Nigga,
who
Little
have
Peep
color.
had white hair. Fuck
Pink,
you
not
talking
silver.
about? Like, Little Peep.
Chris Brown had blonde hair. Nobody cared. I don't give a shit.
Because blonde is just the number one color.
Yeah,
So
Blonde
it's Justin
is-
Bieber.
So it's Justin Bieber, yeah.
Yeah, fuck that shit.
They had
Leave the pink. Oh, man, fuck out of here.
Shit.
Nikki, fuck is y'all niggas telling me? I'm gonna argue with all y'all.
That's fine. That's fine.
Fire
that
for
woman
that.
looks like
Alright, so go think the
Hook
alright, so
of
go think the
Hangover.
fucking Barbie doll then. Like,
Damn.
what the fuck?
Nigga said Lil Wayne clears this whole list for real. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not even.
Yeah, that's not a conversation.
I mean, I wouldn't even put him up there. Honestly, but whatever.
I'm voting Nikki. That's clearly obvious.
Yeah, clearly.
That's fine.
Get that fucking Barbie doll out
Alright,
of
so I
here.
got one
Like,
more.
Nikki, that's a, so what's it?
Alright, so bonus round. I don't know if y'all know him.
Who is that?
Bonus round, y'all.
Who the
Bonus
fuck is
round.
That's Kylie Rich.
What you say?
Kylie
A lot of
Rich.
Give me a
songs.
song.
Have you heard of
Oh, Ben.
Yeah, Ben.
Oh, I like
You should
that
put
song.
Jen Carter
What's-
up
what's
It's
here.
gotta be big.
Okay, I know that song.
Hennessy got me bad, bitch. When is we fucking again?
When is we fucking?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Still
that's-
Uzi.
Yeah, still.
Does he
Oh,
wear
Kylie?
blouses?
You with these blouses, my nigga. Now what if I say yes?
I'm standing on.
Now what if I say yes?
You should have put Lil Nas X
I'm not
up there. I
voting.
want to see what he would have said.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Lil Nas, I'm going with
That'd
Lil
have been a
Nas.
good question.
If it was Lil Nas.
Lil Nas is in a place in this guy here.
Lil Nas, no Lil
Who'd
Nas.
you pick?
Over Uzi?
Yeah, Uzi
Nah,
or Lil
Lil Nas
Nas X.
beats him out on that. on
Yeah.
that.
Niggas, does he still wear blouses? I'm still fucking.
Now you gonna go Uzi? No, nigga, fuck out here. Stay over
Because
there.
stay the fuck over here. We just assume Uzi maybe.
Yo.
We know.
That nigga is
No,
steamed
it's
fish and cabbage.
Stay in the back. Stay in the back with fucking Nicki
Nah, he gonna
Minaj.
pick Lil Nas over Uzi. No, not Lil Nas. He gonna pick Uzi over Lil Nas. Get the fuck out of here.
Get your ass out of here. Like,
Fuck out of here. All right, that was just the gauntlet. I think Uzi lost that right by one.
yeah,
I think
Uzi
Uzi lost that by one.
Uzi lost that by
He lost
one.
by one.
Yeah, Uzi lost that by one. I'm proud of my boy. My boy made it up there. I thought he was gonna get none, but never
That
mind.
was the YNest shit I ever
The
seen.
YNest shit I've
Yes,
ever
like,
seen
yes.
ever, bro.
All right,
Why
so
did you put the keyboard down?
no, because I have questions.
Little Uzi Vert
Oh, you
would
got a
have
question
never been a
for?
champion
No, I
here
have
without the
questions.
YNS.
I have questions.
Looks like that question.
Prepare yourself.
All right, so
Why do you have more than one question?
all right, so put the chat back up before I
My
start.
guy, you good? Go ahead.
so Uzi
Alright,
was
so-
the ultimate winner. No
They're
difference.
video game questions. It can be, I tried to like do like from like 2000s down. You know what I'm saying? Just try to do it as hard as possible.
2000s, but that's not your era. That's our.
No.
It's for us.
Well, just for
Oh,
everybody.
it's
For
2000.
everybody.
For everybody.
So it could be like 2001, 2, 3, 0.
Okay,
you know.
wasn't even-
Nah,
That
Uzi
wasn't
didn't win.
born. Yeah, I
Uzi lost by one.
Uzi lost by
He
one.
lost by one.
Yeah, Uzi
You can say no diff by one diff.
Holly, what's good with you, Holly?
K is in the building. Drop a bomb for K. Drop a bomb for Hollywood.
Right, A Cash. He did not clear everybody. Nope.
The YNs are doing a good job of hosting, Holly.
Yes, yes.
Thank
yes,
you,
Doing a very
thank
good job. They're doing a
you.
great job.
Thank you, indeed. All right, so question one.
All right.
In Metal Gear Solid 4, which camo has the following description?
I don't know.
99% camo, no, 99% camo index when still, but causes the life and sight gauges to decrease at twice the normal rate.
I don't even remember the question, bro.
That's very specific for that.
Did you read an encyclopedia for this?
That is very specific because a lot of people don't even like 4.
I never played
All
one.
right, so I think I'll do. All right, so cool. All right, let's do one that y'all know.
Do music or something.
In Call of Duty Black Ops 2,
Okay.
Okay.
there is a character named Frank Woods on a certain mission. He is sent to Panama to capture Manuel Noriega.
This is very specific again.
Damn, Shugi.
I'm gonna tell you what. I didn't
Chat,
play that one.
Drop a bomb. I'm triggered.
How? This is Black Ops 2. You should know.
Nigga said Frank who?
This is
Yeah,
Black
Frank
Ops. This is Black Ops 2 co-op mode. I mean, not even co-op mode.
Story mode.
Campaign mode.
Story
Who the
mode.
fuck plays campaign on
Alright, fine.
on any of the Call of Duty?
All right, fine,
That's the only
fine.
thing
I
I
have a
played.
bunch of them. I have a bunch of them that I wrote down. But anyway,
I know.
all right. In Batman Arkham City,
Okay.
which of the following characters is not affiliate of Joker? Mr. Freeze, Clayface, Talia al Ghul, or Raz al Ghul?
Wait a minute.
Rage Al Ghul.
Raz Al Ghul.
Raz.
He's his own man. You know that.
Raz Al Ghul
That
is
one's
not.
too obvious.
Yeah,
Even if
that-
I didn't play the game,
That's
I would
easy.
know that.
I mean, that's because we
Oh,
know
so that's easy, but the other fucking shit was
That's
impossible.
because we know Batman's
Yes.
history.
Batman, like-
That was like a whole 3-part question.
That's easy.
This nigga was like, okay, so on the third day of May, on the third day of May, in the evening at the night, when you went down a block to the corner store and you seen the ox in the back, was it 2 ox? Was it 3 ox? Was it a chicken? Was it a cat or the bread?
And what color was the ox shirt?
What color was the ox shirt? Which ox?
What did
God damn
Batman
it,
say?
bro.
Nigga said those questions so specific. Chat GPT can't answer. That
This shit crazy.
All right,
Bro,
since
could've
y'all
said
know
Frank
fighting
then.
games,
You should have said Frank.
I took this one down. In Mortal Kombat 3,
You're making me want to smoke weed.
in Mortal
And Mortal
Kombat 3,
Kombat 3.
in Mortal Kombat 3, which character can perform the gotcha grab by pressing FFLP rapid LP?
You don't shut the
Jax.
pissing me off. You're pissing me
You
off.
said
I
what?
actually knew that one. Jax.
Take him home with you.
who knows the button?
I don't play
CJ,
Mortal Kombat like that.
it seems like CJ do because it is Jax.
It's Jax.
It's Jax.
But that's still very specific.
That's
bro.
what-
But the
MK
fucking
played.
Arkham Knight shit is
Right.
not.
I know MK
That's-
lore. We talking about
Again, you
DC.
asking
common
3-part
knowledge, bro.
question.
But it's that's very
3-part
specific. Mortal
question.
Kombat
Yeah,
3.
that's DC common knowledge.
Right.
You know that.
Who does the gotcha
He said
move?
Scorpion. Jack Scorpion. Who's it?
No,
Brother,
no.
the people
Get
in
over
the
here
back
is
about to
Scorpion.
hit you.
Gotcha
You
is
see
Jax.
what Galaxy said?
Baldoni
Brother,
said,
the
you know
people in the
what?
back about to hit you.
Baldoni said, you know what? I'll take the G King route and roll up.
All right, fine.
Baldoni, he's stressing me out now, Baldoni. Give me a minute. Let me talk a little bit.
Yeah.
These little niggas right here pissing me off. Who the fuck asks questions questions like this?
I wrote them down.
Shut up.
Damn it.
Who the fuck put little Uzi in a gauntlet? Would never happen here
But
again.
he lost by
You're
one.
pissing me off.
He lost by one.
You're pissing me
He
off.
lost by
This is
one.
what you're doing. This is what
Okay,
you're
Barbie
you're
doll.
pissing me off.
Okay, Barbie
You're
doll.
damn right I'm voting for Nikki. She won by a landslide.
Say fuck Barbie dolls, man. Fuck
But
Nicki
he
Minaj. She's a
don't
fucking
look
Barbie
like
doll.
He
Fuck
lost
this
by
bitch.
the one. All right.
Wait, somebody said you answered.
All right, let's get some. All right, let's get some easier ones.
BT
All right.
Gamer said something. She said, "Game Lounge, did
Whoever
you
you
guys
start-
watch
Papa
the 30th
was
anniversary
ready.
of
Hold on.
Pokemon? If so,
Hold on. Repeat that, CJ.
BT Gamer said, "Game Lounge, did you guys watch the 30th anniversary of Pokemon? And if so, what did you guys think about the Gen?
Yeah, we watched that.
We watched the.
Let me speak to you, BTA. Let me speak to you, BTA. Firest shit I ever seen in my life, okay? Firest shit I ever seen in my life. The game was mad fire.
I got a split waiting on me after the show. I need it right now.
But yeah, the game was
It's
amazing.
good though. It's good. It's good.
The game was amazing. I'm waiting for it. I'm like itching like a crackhead for it.
But Galaxy Storm said, "Bro, you answered these questions from Wikipedia and website."
No, I wrote some of them down. I mean, some of them was from Wikipedia had the website, but I wrote some of
The
them down.
adults in the back today, bro.
254, yeah, Papa. Jump a ball for Papa.
All right, so next one. In July 2023.
Oh, here we
Wait.
My fucking
Wait, finish the question. Let me finish the question.
Go ahead.
Video game company EA announced that players will be able to explore Wakanda in an upcoming open world video game based on what Marvel superhero?
Black Panther. It's only one place that Wakanda has.
Well,
You hear this nigga got it? Oh my fucking god! We're like, yo.
man, since July 19th at 2 p.m.
All right, next one. All right.
Right.
But then the game ain't even come out.
It ain't even out.
Right, so that pissed me off too. I was like, why is this even a question?
It was a plot. They thought about it, never happened.
All right.
But the only reason why I was able to get that because you said Wakanda.
Wakanda,
There's
right.
no other Marvel character that is in Wakanda.
All right. Which video game console released in 2006?
Which video game console released in 2006?
PS3.
Was it the P3?
I think so, right?
Was it?
Oh, PS3 come out later.
P4.
I would say
Yes.
I would say the Wii. I would say the Wii.
Ash might be right.
Ash might be right because it had a 10-year run.
Yeah. Ash might be
It had a
right.
10-year run.
It's either that
It had a
or
10-year run.
it's either that or GameCube.
A-Cat said P3.
Nah,
They say P3 in the
no,
comments.
Ash is right. Ash is right.
Ash is right.
Is it P3?
Ash is
PS3.
right. P3.
PS3 and Nintendo Wii.
I didn't know what the question was.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it was what video game system released in 2006. It was P.
That's why I caught my
Same day. I'm sorry. You went to the bathroom.
I never had a P3.
My PP. My PS3.
I made a bunch of them, but I'm trying to figure out.
I didn't mean you didn't
Yeah,
My P3 is RIP.
let's get some good ones.
That's why.
The Wii was though.
It
A-Cat.
was. Period. It was.
Until the end.
The Wii had me mad.
Fuck
for real.
Hollywood
Wii
Go. I appreciate you 5 streaking this
what's wrong with
bitch.
Yo, 5 streak. My man.
Fuck Wii Sports.
That shit got me mad.
I love Wii Sports. Don't do that now.
So about respect the Wii. So about respect
Yes,
the Wii.
respect the Wii.
You respect Nicki Minaj.
Hey.
Leave me alone.
No,
Leave me the fuck
no.
alone. Leave me the fuck alone.
Fuck Nicki.
Nintendo console or is it the Switch now?
It ain't.
Is the Wii still the highest selling Switch Nintendo console or is it the Switch now?
It's the Switch.
No, I think it's a Switch.
It's the Switch now. Okay.
Switch.
They reigned the title for a long time, bro. Like they had that shit locked in for a hot minute.
All right. What Konami game came out in September 1998 that causes a lot of movement?
Contra.
Konami?
No, Konami.
Konami.
That causes a lot of
causes
movement?
a lot of movement.
What you mean?
Is it
As far as
fighting?
what?
Like movement, like your body movement.
Contra.
No.
Contra uses your body movement?
No.
You said
Virtual Boy?
Like your
What
body
The
movement.
Virtual Boy.
Oh,
Like being active.
Dance Revolution.
Wait, what year is that you said?
Virtual Boy.
1998. 1998.
It's a
Dance
body
Revolution.
movement.
1998.
No, Dance Dance
It's a fighting
Revolution.
game.
No.
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 I can't tell you. You asked me
not-
like it's a fighting
it's
game.
not
I
a
can't tell
fighting
you.
game. That's
You
what I
gotta
said.
bank. You gotta bank on what you want to do.
It definitely is Dance Dance
Guitar-
Revolution.
Was Ninja Gaiden a movement game?
Guitar
Like
Hero,
moving your body, like active?
Dance
Oh, so
Dance
you gotta be
Revolution.
Dance
Like an
Alive.
active, like an active game.
No,
Dead
Dance
or
Dance
Alive team.
Revolution.
What's the answer?
Dance Dance Revolution.
Oh, that's what he said.
Oh shit.
A-Cat
That's what I
said
said.
PS4 or PS2 or PS4. PS2.
PS2, bro.
Okay.
Dance Dance Revolution. Baldoni shot it. No, hit that one too.
Who said it?
Baldoni.
Dance
But
Dance
I
Revolution.
said that. That's why I said Contra first.
Time Crisis.
Body movement. So that's
Yeah,
Dance
yeah,
Dance
Dance
Revolution.
Dance
Oh, let's
Revolution.
see, because y'all been playing that game before I was even born. But anyway, in Mario Kart, how many shells are there that you can use?
Red, blue,
3.
Red, blue, green. 3.
Yep, 3.
As of today, all of them.
Same
All
shit.
today.
They
All
ain't
of
make
them.
no new ones.
No, they did. 4.
What's the
Which
new
one?
No,
ones?
5.
What's the
5.
5?
So of course, a regular green, red, blue
Mm-hmm.
is a gold shell,
Okay.
and there's a
What's a gold shell?
the gold shell drops coins along the pathway.
Oh, that's the newest one.
That's the
though.
It
newest
gives you
one.
speed.
That's the newest
Right.
shit.
Gives you
Yeah.
speed. Okay.
And then there's
They said 5. 8 cash at Galaxy Store said 5. So what's the 5th one?
Well, he did say 5. She did say 5.
it's
What's the
5.
5th one?
What's the 5th one? If you think it's 5,
There's no 5th one. The one with the spikes? There's
No, that's
that's the
blue
blue
shell.
shell.
Oh, that's the blue shell.
What does the
Green,
new one
red,
do?
blue.
The new
gold
gold
shell.
one gives you coins.
The gold
when
one
you
gives you
throw it,
coins when you throw it.
and it make you speed go faster as you
Do they?
Mario,
Did they?
right?
I think they added the big shell too, right? The,
No.
In
the
Mario Kart.
Nah, the big shell is the blue one, right?
no, the big shell is
Of course,
the
you know
first
the red,
place
blue,
shell.
and blue.
Oh.
I think it's only
Then, like they
4.
said, the gold one that came out.
How many is this
I
your
don't
game?
know.
Huh?
I know
How many
the
is
original
it?
3. I don't
4.
know.
It's
Yeah.
4. It is 4.
4. Okay.
The last one was the gold one.
You got
Yeah,
chassis and
the gold one.
It was 4. It was 4 track.
4. Yo, A Cash, why'd you say 5? We know the red.
No, I
blue-
said 5 because I'm like, what about
Hey,
that
Galaxy
big shell that be
Star
bouncing
Well,
back
no,
and
I'm
forth?
saying A
The
Cash
big-
said 5 as well.
Yeah, 2 of them said 5.
No,
3.
three.
Baldoni, 8 cash, and Galaxy.
But you know what? I'm thinking. I said the big shell. There is a big shell, but you can't get the big shell and throw it.
You
It's
can't
just
use it,
on.
it's just
it's
there.
on a course.
What color
Yeah.
is it?
Oh.
Shit, what else I got?
But should it count?
Either
Oh,
green.
Bowser shit.
No, he
But-
said one you could use. That's what he said.
Oh,
It's
okay.
still considered green, so no.
Okay, so what third-person Nintendo shooter game released and developed? Well, yeah, I wrote that wrong because I don't know what the fuck. All right, what third-person shooter video game developed by Nintendo was first released in 2015? I can't give you the rest of the question because it will tell you.
Repeat again. Repeat that again.
First shooter Nintendo game. that was
What
released in
third-person
2015.
shooter video game developed by Nintendo was released in 2015?
Splatoon.
Do you think that?
Ooh,
That's the only
was
shooter game I
really-
can think
Definitely,
Yeah.
Oh, Dirty says
definitely was
Splatoon,
Splatoon.
Splatoon.
Splatoon is the only thing I can think of, to be honest.
You don't have a lot of
Splatoon. I'm
shooters.
going with Splatoon.
Yeah,
too.
think so?
You don't have a lot of shooters.
It's not a lot
Splatoon.
of shooters.
Yeah,
Splatoon
you
is
got it
first that
right.
came to my mind.
Okay,
Splatoon.
now read the rest of the question.
I
so
forgot
we
my
can find a
Splatoon.
way to
Splatoon
answer
was
it.
lit though. It was cute.
I like Splatoon. I'm gonna be honest
Yeah,
with you.
it was
What's
cool.
the-
Yeah, I know I'm
What's
not a
the rest of
Nintendo
the
guy, but it was
question?
nice.
It was a
What?
good game. It's like Call of Duty, but kitty.
With
Oh,
pinky
with
shit.
pinky.
Oh, so
Yeah,
it's
I
gonna
like
say
I like
it says transform between human and squid-like forms.
You like seeing
They
squid
would've
shoot,
got
you like
that.
seeing
They would've
squid
got
shoot
that.
each
They
other.
would've got
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
They
yeah.
would've got that.
What would be
Let's see
that?
squid
It
shoot each
says
other.
squid and characters.
You
Tricky.
said the rest
Trick, you like seeing squid shoot each other.
Okay, in Super
fuck,
Mario
man? What the
Kart, the
fuck?
first game of this, Super Mario Kart, the first game in Nintendo's racing franchise, which character was the shortest?
The shortest character.
The shortest
Toad.
character.
Toad.
No, the babies.
Oh, okay, okay.
They count.
The first game though was the babies in the first game.
No,
in
it's
the first
Toad.
game.
The
It's
first
Toad.
game.
It's not the
Toad's
babies.
the
The babies
Toad.
didn't come out.
Yeah, it's
Toad.
Toad. It's Toad.
Yeah, I know I was
my
right.
shit.
Right, I
But-
said
but
Toad
shit.
too.
Yeah, hell
No,
yeah.
because
the
he was
babies.
thinking mad
I'm
far. I
like,
was
the
like,
babies.
No,
the first
because
game.
He said the Mario Kart question. It's a 3. No, wait a minute. Are you talking about today?
Okay. I don't think I should ask that question, but
Yeah, I
okay,
think you
whatever.
should.
Ask
Answer,
it.
come on, fuck it.
Ask it.
An egg-shaped wind instrument dating back to the ancient times appears in what title?
Nigga, what?
An egg-shaped wind
Say that again?
instrument dates back to.
Dating back to ancient times and appeared in what title? If I say the rest of the title, you gonna.
Well, say it. Because what the fuck? At this point, we don't know. What you...
Y'all gonna get it immediately.
Ocarina of Zelda. Ocarina.
An egg-shaped wind instrument dating back to ancient times and appears in what title?
The only thing I can think of, he said, wind instrument is Zelda. That's the little
Ocarina.
knowledge I got. I don't know.
Ocarina of Time. The rest of the question was
Yeah, that's
back
what I
in
said.
ancient times in the title of what 1998 installment Legend of Zelda franchise?
Yeah, that's what I said.
That's the
Ocarina
only-
of Time.
That's what I said.
Because I'm
Ocarina.
playing the game.
I can't say
now.
the rest of the
They got all
question.
the instruments in it.
Yep, he said it.
Zelda's the only
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
that
yeah.
comes to my mind.
That's what I said. I said Ocarina is.
I got a
ancient.
question
That's the
for
only
right
thing
down,
that's-
right corner guy right there.
This one?
Who, me? Oh no, that's the right corner. Unless it's isn't it mirrored?
Oh, am I
The one in the
am I
blue
right
shirt or
corner
the one in
guy?
the white
It is
shirt?
mirrored. It is mirrored.
Say which
That's what
color
I'm saying,
shirt.
isn't it mirrored?
Down.
What color shirt? Say the
Right.
say the color
so,
shirt.
So his right.
What color they got on?
You.
Yeah,
That's
white shirt.
Oh, Shooky.
Baby.
Shooky.
Yes, sir.
That's only got a question for you.
Drop the question, Bal.
Yes, sir. When you do that, I'll look for another one.
I'll look for another one. Go crazy.
I'm surprised you got no freaky shit going on today.
Yeah.
I'll look for another one.
No
Go fucking-
vagina.
I left it. I left it out.
No, his girl.
I was gonna do.
Miss?
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck. I'll put some shit up here real quick. Stop it.
Yes, white shirt.
Which Twitch game show had the most voted game ever?
Which
Damn.
Twitch game show had the most convoluted game quizzes ever? Quiz game ever.
Oh damn! I want to say.
That's a very specific question
Twitch
about don't you
game
got
show.
that?
You got him back.
Damn.
Twitch game
Jeopardy?
show.
No, Jeopardy. I don't think Jeopardy was on Twitch.
No, Jeopardy wasn't on Twitch.
Not on Twitch.
Was it Shazam?
Wheel of Fortune?
Game Lounge.
Game Loud, duh.
Let's
Duh.
go.
I knew that as soon as I heard Twitch game show, bro. Come on
Let's
now.
go. Jeopardy.
I was thinking mad for.
You
I was
got
thinking
damn host of the day. You supposed to know that, guy.
You're right.
Yeah.
All right.
Jeopardy was funny. I'm not gonna lie.
In the original 1980 edition of Pac-Man, name all the ghosts.
Pinky. No, Pinky.
Clyde. Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde.
Honestly, I just said this to you
Inky,
yesterday. I
Pinky,
did.
and Clyde.
How'd y'all know that?
Cause I
Blinky,
wait. Cause I have
Pinky,
later, bro.
Blinky, and
I have Pinky on my keychain.
Next time, thanks for having me. Of course, A-Cash, have a good one.
Yes,
No.
sir. Appreciate you, bro. Drop a bomb for my guy A-Cash on his.
It was a 2 question, but
Yeah, I
now
said
the
I
second
know
one
it.
was which one is orange?
Me.
Clyde.
You're right.
Damn, I know a lot. They got names.
Yeah, they do got names. It's crazy, actually. It's insane.
They're
My
fucking
My mother
ghosts.
played
The ghost
Pac-Man
got
to
names.
death. Like
They're fucking ghosts.
my mother
What the
played
hell?
Pac-Man. So.
Oh, shimmy Jimmy. Okay.
Shimmy Jimmy go
Which
crazy.
Legend of Zelda game that picks up after Ocarina? Never mind. I don't even want to do
Majora's
it.
Mask.
Yeah, I don't even want to. I don't even want to do it no more.
Bro
Why would I
caught
write this
himself
down?
mid-reading.
Majora's Mask.
I don't even want to read it no
You
more.
sitting back here?
That part.
That's a fact.
Stop.
Stop.
Don't even keep on going.
What was the first? Why would I even put this up here? But anyway, I want to see what y'all
Say
say.
it. I'll let
Actually,
you
no.
say it.
Actually, no. Y'all might fuck it up. But what was the first monster tamer that came out?
Monster Tamer.
Monster tamer.
Like the Monster Hunter games?
No, like
that?
Monster Hunter. You don't tame monsters. You kill them.
Okay, Bob.
Monster Tamer game.
The first monster tamer to come out or
What's
release.
it? What's it? Monster
Pokemon?
Tamer
I don't
game?
Monster tamer game.
Pokemon.
Wait a minute now.
Is it Pokemon or Digimon?
I was just about to say
Oh,
that.
Digimon. Digimon came out
Game
first.
wise, which one came out first?
Digimon came out first.
Pokemon.
I don't know.
Monster Rancher.
I'm sticking with
Monster
Pokemon.
Rancher.
Monster Ranch. I mean, I don't know. It's a good guess.
This nigga bald.
So which I banking on Pokemon?
Pokemon don't have monsters. Digimon got monsters actually.
Pocket monsters. That's the whole thing.
They're
it's
considered.
Digimon.
No, it's considered Pocket Monster.
Pokemon is considered pocket monsters.
So what's the answer?
I say Pokemon.
It's Digimon.
It was
right?
Pokemon.
There you go with Pokemon. Come on, give me that. Give me that.
You guys,
I thought he said Monster Rancher.
Damn.
This nigga Jolly Rancher.
Well, I guess Monster Rancher was probably in between or something,
This
but it wasn't up there.
It's YN today.
He
This
is
nigga said
YN
Monster
in the
Rancher.
fuck.
It's Jolly Rancher. It's a Twitch game. This guy. I'm done with you, Freddy.
How many Metroid games came out?
5.
No,
There's more than that.
Are you in total?
In
12. I don't know. I'm just throwing out random numbers.
What the fuck?
Don't ask me shit. I
There's
don't
4
know. I just
prize.
put out
All right, let me see.
random
Let me see if y'all got that. Let me see.
Alright, Galaxy actually has
There's
a
4
question.
prize.
Alright,
There's
Galaxy,
original.
throw it out there.
There's Super
Put it,
Metroid.
put it in the chat.
There's.
Yeah, Galaxy, put it in the
So
chat.
what's the number?
I'm gonna say 8.
I'm going to say 7 just because I'm guessing 7.
9.
saying
I don't
9.
know.
It says 9. I don't know.
Oh!
I don't know
Oh!
what you.
I
I don't know
said
what was the last
9.
one.
Okay.
Figure.
It's
Baldy
probably
said
a
12.
handheld one.
At first I said 12.
Because they had a
Ashwat or
handheld
Minkyu?
one too.
Mimikyu.
We talked about this already. Why are you bringing up the goat?
What are those things?
Pokemons.
Mimikyu is that weird ass looking
Ah.
Pikachu.
I have a question.
What?
Ashwa or
Sure,
Mimikyu? Who
Mimikyu
has
is
better
that-
stats?
What's
Oshawott
the
is the Sea Otter.
What's the
Mimikyu
Ashwat?
is the Sea Otter that was in Gen 5.
That blue.
That has that
otter.
shell that he attacks
And
with.
then
He don't know.
Mimikyu is that evil looking
This is what
Pikachu.
Mimikyu is. I hate that Pokemon.
What? That's a real thing?
Yeah.
It's an
That's
evil
that
looking
weird
Pikachu.
voodoo doll.
A voodoo doll
What is that actual
Pikachu.
Pokemon?
Yeah.
That's how it looks?
Yup.
Why?
It does electric or something?
No, it's not.
He said why?
Does that Ghost Pikachu?
They don't know your question, so fuck your question. Don't care.
No, Oshawott, Mimikyu. I'm gonna say Mimikyu.
I say Oshawott.
I'm gonna say Mimikyu because he snatched your ass in the dark and beat your ass.
Actually, no, I'm lying. Mimikyu has better stats. Mimikyu has better stats, but Oshawott is just better in my eyes. I'll go fuck.
Oh, so I got that right too. Let's go.
Mimikyu has better stats, but I fuck with Oshawott heavy. I don't care. Fuck her question.
Why the comparison for those two though?
Because me and her got beef with it. Who the cutest Pokemon? It's Oshawott. I'm sorry. Because if I show y'all Mimikyu, y'all gonna be like,
who the cutest Pokemon? Nigga, fuck Mimikyu.
Yes, Oshawott is a sea otter. Stop it.
The YN? Ah, he crossing over.
Yeah.
He crossing over.
Yeah, he crossing over.
He's like, they're losing me. Yeah. Come on to the dark side.
Alright, y'all ready?
You old niggas.
Yep. We got fine wine and AARP ready for his ass. Come on. Come on.
Alright, y'all ready?
Alright, what's the next question?
It's a two-part. Name all the Bowser Jr. siblings.
No clue.
Baby
got
Bowser.
Yeah.
I didn't even know
He
that.
got mad at him. He got like
Baby Bowser.
name all the Bowser Jr. siblings.
Baby Bowser.
There's no Baby Bowser.
Same fucking
Bowser. Oh, you talking about Bowser Jr.?
Yeah, same difference.
Baby Bowser.
Same difference.
You can't say Baby Bowser.
Same shit.
The only person I know out of all
you
of
play
them
Mario
is
World,
They different colors, right? I think.
the nigga that got the blue head. The nigga that got the blue head.
okay.
They smell.
Wait.
Lemmy, Ludwig, Bowser Jr.
That's too much.
Fuck.
He a bad father.
Wendy,
Kids.
which is the
Right, you never
girl.
seen him like that.
The only nigga I know out of all of them is the blue
Iggy.
nigga.
Who's the one that kept fucking with us in Mario Kart? We was pissed off with.
Fucking Ludwig and Iggy.
No, Morton.
Morton.
Oh yes.
Morton, that
Morton was always fucking
Yes,
with us.
Wendy.
That's a hard question. I ain't gonna lie. A lot of people don't know that.
Larry, Wendy, Lemmy,
Yeah.
Iggy, Ludwig.
Larry,
Yes.
Wendy,
Ludwig?
Lemmy, Iggy,
Yes, Ludwig.
Ludwig, Morton, and then Bowser Jr.
And then Bowser Jr. Now who's the youngest?
You found out
Bowser
Bowser got a
Jr.
black baby
Bowser
moms.
Jr. is not the youngest if he is
He was first. He was first. How was he the youngest?
Yeah,
He was first.
first boy.
He's a junior,
Yeah, he was
so
the
he's
first.
At least the first boy.
I'll say Wendy.
Makes sense.
I'm gonna go with.
I'm going
I
with
say
Wendy.
Wendy.
I'm going with Wendy.
I say the girl.
Galaxy, you forgot Roy.
I'm gonna say
girl,
Ludwig.
the baby. She
Who the
went.
youngest?
Wendy, see yourself the fuck
who's
out
the-
of here. Like, get the
no,
fuck out
I
of
was
here.
just thinking, because they had each one at each castle, so it's 1 through 8.
The first one that comes up is Ludwig. Is the first
Well, we know
one.
Bowser Jr. in because he was the firstborn.
Yeah, Bowser Jr. it would be 9. So if he's first, then you go opposite. Who's
If they
first
put
in
it
the
in order
castle?
like that, they probably didn't put it in order like that.
Lemmy.
What game was
say
it?
Speaking of Bowser Jr., the Mario
I'm gonna
movie
say
is about to look
Ludwig.
good, actually.
Yeah.
Galaxy
Yeah,
2.
it does.
Galaxy
It's about to
2.
look
Galaxy
really
2.
good,
I want to see that
actually.
shit.
I like it.
Either Lemmy or Iggy.
Who was it?
It was Roy.
Roy.
Roy's the
With the
youngest.
glasses?
No, Roy is the
cool one
the
with the shades.
biker looking one. Yeah.
Why does all his kids have regular names?
Ah, that's crazy. That's wild.
That's crazy.
Like, nigga, you a turtle. How you came up with
Because
this?
Peach wasn't having it. She was just like, look at you, Bowser, I'm Peach. We got fucked up names. Let's
We
make
gotta
sure our
give him a
kids
future.
have some good names. Give him a future, all right?
Roy is crazy normal.
Larry, like you named yourself
Larry's
Larry,
crazy.
Like,
All right, so what Gothic video game franchise debuted in 1986?
Gothic.
Gothic?
Yeah,
1986
gaming
Gothic.
franchise.
What do you mean Gothic though?
Castlevania.
Like demonic.
Castlevania.
Yeah, somebody
You
said
think it's Castlevania?
I say Castlevania.
Nobody want to
Hell,
take a
fuck
stab
no.
at it?
I don't
Castlevania?
fucking know. No, I wasn't born until 2004. Don't ask me no shit.
I was born before you, so I know.
Born 2004. Don't ask me no shit.
Go home.
What is it then?
Get in your car and take
Castlevania.
yourself and go home.
It's Castlevania.
Take your companion and go home.
Castlevania.
Somebody else.
How the fuck?
Baldoni, let's go, bro.
Let's go, Baldoni.
Yeah,
Don't worry, Baldoni. We're gonna roll up just now, baby. We're gonna roll up.
Yeah.
Speaking of video game consoles, let me throw this one out there that I had. According to market research company NPD Group, which video game console sold the most units in the United States in 2008?
The Wii.
Duh.
You sure?
Yes.
2008.
2008?
So the most no,
Either
PS2.
Because I said,
PS3.
No, PS2.
because I said 2006 and you was saying
No, wait.
PS2.
Hold on. I might agree with you, but I got a
PS2
question.
or
He said sold the
Xbox.
most in
United.
2008.
In the
PS2,
US.
In the
Xbox, or
US, so we're
Wii.
talking about console that sold
Gotta be
in that year.
Yeah.
It gotta
pretty
be
much.
a DS
Either
or
the
something like that.
PS2,
So
the
it gotta be
Xbox, or the
DS.
Wii.
It's that year.
It's that year, not entirely.
Not
right?
entirely.
be
So I'm
DS.
gonna
I'm
go
sticking with the Wii.
I'm gonna pick her.
I said DS.
I'm sticking with
DS.
Oh yeah, DS.
No.
I just forgot about
No.
that. I'm
I
not
say
gonna lie.
PSP. I say
I'm gonna go
PSP.
360.
You gonna go 360?
I'm gonna go 360.
A lot of consoles out here.
I'm going PSP.
What is it?
It was the Wii.
Yes.
I'm sticking with the Wii. I said the Wii first, and then I threw a monkey wrench.
No,
I had to mess. I had to mess you up.
PS2
No, because he said 2002 and I said
Entirely.
2003.
Right, in its entirety.
Right.
Right.
It's entirely
The answer
PS2 for sure.
is the Wii.
I said PSP.
Nintendo DS is my answer. Galaxy Stones. Hollywood said PS2. Baldoni said Xbox. Let's fucking go.
What princess did Mario rescue in Super Mario Land?
Peach.
Daisy.
It's Daisy. It
Daisy
wasn't
wanted
Peach.
Daisy.
It was Daisy.
They wanted us to say Peach.
That's how I. That's how I got it.
I already
Oh my
know,
god!
man.
That's how I put it up there.
Peach. I don't really know
The
the
first
other
thing you say is Peach. No, it was Daisy.
You fight.
I don't
It's
know
wild.
other bitches like that.
It's the same
Wait a
process.
second,
You
isn't
go,
that
you
Luigi's
beat
bitch,
the boss,
That's
and you
what I'm
walk up to
saying.
her.
Wait a
Oh,
second,
Daisy, then she transform into, I'm not here, and just go away.
Whoa.
How many
Isn't that
color of
Luigi's
Pikmin are
bitch?
there?
Huh?
Pikmin
4.
is red, blue.
You said.
If you play Smash Bros. A lot, you can actually see it.
Oh!
Is it
Oh,
four?
yeah,
I think
they
it's
follow
white, yellow, blue, red, purple.
What the fuck are Pikmin?
right.
I dead
Oh,
forgot.
I think it is more than 4. It
There's
might
Seven.
be
I say
6.
7.
Is there a green one?
It might be 6.
You got
man.
fire, you got the
7
fire,
and
you got the
8.
poison one.
Red, blue, and yellow are
You got the strong one. You got the.
Right.
Yeah, red, blue, and yellow are the main three.
Yeah,
Yellow have that.
I think it's
The
five.
plants
Five or
with the
six.
sharp
I say 7.
Yeah.
Because there's a black one.
Yeah, they have the plants like different
Yeah,
ones.
that's what
I'll
I'm
say
saying. The
seven.
plants with the sharp edges.
Because
Yeah.
we can just safely say it's a rainbow.
I'm saying like 5
Yeah.
or 6.
Safely to
I don't really
say
know. I know
rainbow
the
with a
game,
black.
but I don't
That's
really
crazy.
know.
I say
5
5.
Either 5 or 6. I don't know.
It's 6.
Oh.
It's the
Which
rainbow.
one was I missing?
It's the rainbow. Not,
Which one was I missing? The green one?
What colors you
There's
say?
no green one.
Red, yellow, blue,
White.
green, orange.
There's a green one?
You said orange? Actually?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was the one y'all was missing because it's up here. I thought that was the one.
Wait,
Green,
there's a
orange,
green one?
purple.
That was the one you was missing. Was orange?
Yeah,
Yeah,
orange.
orange. Yeah, he was missing orange.
Not 9. That's crazy.
Damn, what the fuck?
That's crazy. I'm
9
not
is
gonna lie to you.
now 9 is crazy, but I can see why she say 9 because if you run out of Pikmins, you can dig up more. But it's just more different
Again,
things.
again.
Yeah,
It
but the
makes
main ones are
Wait,
the ones
but
that y'all said.
There's
It
actually
makes sense,
green?
it makes sense.
Huh?
There's actually a green one.
Yeah, there's actually a green one. Yeah.
Oh.
But if you use all of them,
I don't think it's in the
it dig
game,
back
though,
up
right?
more.
Oh.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Yeah. Inside Pikmin,
No,
I
it's
think 2
Smash
and 3.
He said 6 to follow the main color square.
In Sonic Adventure 2, who's the first boss you fight?
Wait, huh? Sorry, we reading the chat. We're not paying attention to the questions right now.
So Rand said something crazy. CJ, I'm sorry. I said fuck Goku earlier. I thought you were the one coming up with the questions. It wasn't me, Saran. God damn it.
I wrote down a bunch of them. It took me like, damn.
Baldoni said you better be sorry.
You know what? Fuck it. Whatever, gang. Anyway, but in Sonic Adventure 2, who's the first boss you fight?
Is that
Chaos.
E102?
Huh?
No.
E102.
Chaos.
No, it's like a robot.
That had to be nah, Chaos is Sonic Adventure 1, I believe.
That's what you said. Sonic Adventure 1.
Blue robot.
Oh, you said 2.
You said 2 or 1?
So it was 2.
Oh, 2?
Look. Cam said I just got here. Start the whole show over so I don't miss
Damn.
anything.
Cam, what up, Cam? Jump a bomb for my guy, Cam.
The YNs are running the show, Cam.
It's a YN takeover,
We
Cam.
in the back. OG's in the back.
Is that that robot?
Man,
I
said it's a
thought it was
tank.
Robotnik.
Moon pies. We fighting moon pies.
Well, wherever I got it from, it says depends on the player, but it says chaos.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but it says depend on the player, chaos. Let me see. What else
Yeah, you
I have?
asked out now that Cammy player's here. He knew all this shit.
Oh, hell
Ah,
yeah.
damn. All right. Ain't no way.
Kim, you got some competition here.
I don't know if y'all know this one, but these are like, I guess, for if you know back in the day, whatever, y'all played with the Contra.
Robot
Gaming trivia, y'all. Gaming trivia. Come on.
Used while playing Contra, the original Konami code gave you 30 extra of lives, but what's the code that you got to put in?
We all know it.
Up, down, up, down,
left, right,
square.
BH.
It was a code.
Oh.
It was actual code, like the name.
For which game?
Oh.
Contra.
Oh, forget it.
It was a code.
Actual fucking code.
I don't know.
The actual code.
It was a name.
Contra.
It was like letters.
Oh,
I
don't
fucking
know.
Don't ask me shit.
The
A B C D E G.
The Konami code. Please give me the home. Kimmy said give me the home.
Konami.
Kimmy, do you actually know? I want to see if you put it. Put the answer. I want to see if you got it.
Before Bandani, he said it.
The Konami code.
Is that the answer, Kimmy, that you put?
Konami
yes,
code.
under Saran, he said it.
Saran
Where?
said A B C D E G.
And then Cam said his answer.
Yes.
Is that the name of it?
I don't fucking know.
Name.
It says the name is Extra Lives with parentheses. So I don't know if that's like you put that.
No, no. So I think that you read the question wrong. It's what do you do to gain extra lives?
Oh, so you use the
Contra.
Konami code. Okay. Yeah.
You use the Konami code to gain extra lives in Contra. There is no menu.
But they're arguing with you. Cammy said no, it's Konami code. He's sticking to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
so
okay.
It is.
But
Okay.
it's called the I don't know.
No, it's the
I don't know.
It's the Konami code.
Okay.
Konami code is the normal one we know. The up, down, left, right shits.
All right.
But he's saying it's not that. It's the word extra lives.
Oh,
no,
okay.
doing the code gives you extra lives.
But it's
not,
called Konami code.
It's called
I got
Konami
you.
code.
I got you.
Okay.
Not
What?
only said it, but it's called Konami code.
Right.
What Nintendo character was introduced in 2000 in Mario Tennis?
No idea.
What Nintendo?
Which one? Wait, which Mario Tennis? Mario Tennis? Mario Ace
What's
Tennis?
with the red dress?
Not Ace. I don't know if it says. I don't know if it's Ace Tennis, but I wrote down.
Kimmy said Waluigi, please, a hard one.
Damn. You getting
Damn, bro.
Yeah,
It's
Cam-
over.
yeah,
It's
Cam
over.
don't fuck around.
But
Cam don't fuck around.
but the
Good
description.
job, Kimmy.
But
Yeah, Cam. What's up?
Bow-legged Lou. That's my guy. Bow-legged Lou.
But the description was dressed in a purple and black, in purple and black with an upside down L, nigga.
Oh, that's definitely Waluigi.
Like nigga,
The girl with the brown hair.
All right, so actually, you know what? Let me ask you one of these, Cammy. You want a hard one? Because they was mad about the ones I was asking earlier. So let me see if you get it.
Ask the first two questions.
On the 3rd of May.
I want to see if he got this.
Cam,
All right,
listen up, Cam. Listen up.
All right, so in Metal Gear Solid 4, which camo has the following description? 99% camo index when still, but causes life and psyche gauges to decrease at twice the normal rate.
I think Cliff might know some shit like that.
That ass. Not even joking. That ass.
Yeah, you got it.
I want to see if he got it.
He ain't gonna know this. That's too specific.
He said really good.
All right, so in Metal Gear Solid 4, which camo has the following description? 99% camo index when still, but causes life and psyche gauges to decrease at twice the normal rate.
More reaction stuff, bro.
I got you.
You good?
You don't know, bro. It's over. That's way too specific. Who would know that?
Somebody answered it, but I don't know if it's right.
Yeah, I do not remember. I used to know that, but I forgot.
Saran answered it.
Pink
Is
Tiger
that,
Camo.
is that right?
What, man?
Is that
Pink
right?
Tiger
Pink
Camo.
Pink Tiger?
No, it's no, that's not right. No. Soul. It just says soul. I guess the soul camo. The soul camo, I guess.
Soul Camo.
Where's the marker for the bottom?
When I tell you.
Is it back there?
Alright, so cool.
You got more or?
Yeah, I got more for him. I got a lot more for him.
Ask him the second question you just
Yeah.
asked us.
In Call of Duty Black Ops 2, there is a character named Frank Woods. On a certain mission, he is sent to Panama to capture Manuel Noriega, a high-value target. How old is the Woods when he goes to Panama? Damn, that is crazy. That is kind of
very specific.
How old is who?
How old is the Woods? How old is
I'm
Woods?
like, oh yeah, I know
How old
him.
is the character?
He got a
Damn,
podcast.
damn, nigga, old as fuck.
Did they even tell you in the game how old he is? You gotta look that shit up like separately.
I think so. I maybe you do. I don't know.
Yo, what?
Skip. Do not call of duty. That's a CJ question.
Oh shit.
Told you. 42.
Nothing. Damn.
Is it 42, 33?
It's a bro. What?
Y'all shouting out
What
football
is it?
commands? 33, 42.
Oh,
How you gonna ask these questions and you don't know the answers to the damn
One
questions?
Oh, it was 86.
He said over
Why
9,000.
didn't you say that?
No, I was waiting for them to put stuff up. It was 86.
86?
Yeah, it was 86.
And Black Ops 2? Wait, what? What?
The fuck?
It says that his card, if you play the game, if you look at his card, it's like a little glimpse of it. It will say 86. Which, damn, nigga, you that old and hunting zombies? Damn, nigga.
That is very specific.
Lay down, nigga. What you do?
I
Take your
promise you
pills.
that's very specific. He said wrong answers only.
Take your pills, nigga. Take your
50-11.
pills.
50-11. That's the wrong answer right there. 50-11.
What's the third game Mario appeared in?
Boy,
His
what?
own game.
His own game?
Yeah. Super Mario Bros.
There you go. All right. Let me see. Do I have any more? Do you know who Crash Bandicoot's younger sister is called?
Coco.
Okay. All right then. All right,
Coco.
Ask some
I
damn
remember
anime
Coco.
questions, because I don't know fucking answers.
What's the name of Link's horse?
Epona.
Epon. Epon. That's Epon.
Epona.
Epon.
It's an A after that. English
Epon.
language says Epona.
Let's say Epona.
What year did the first Mortal Kombat come out?
1992.
You sure about that?
1994.
The first Mortal Kombat?
What's wrong with you saying you sure about that?
No,
1996.
1992.
96.
Stand down on it?
96.
94.
I don't know.
Baldoni's right.
94. 94.
I don't know.
What's the answer?
Actually, no, it's 92.
Why you playing him like that?
Because you know this games, nigga. I gotta do this. I have to.
Somebody said
92, I
3000
was
BC.
94 was the MK2 Baldoni. 94 was MK2.
Not 300 BC.
And
600
Saran
AC.
and Galaxy said 600 and 300 BC.
That's crazy.
But Jesus didn't get to play them
No,
games.
Galaxy said 600 AC. Damn.
It was before Jesus was even born, goddammit.
How many swords makes up Cloud's sword?
5. I don't know.
14?
Shit.
No.
Damn, nigga, you got that many swords?
7 swords?
6, 7?
5.
6, 7?
I think it's
6,
7.
6,
I
7.
don't know. I'm going with 5.
The year of 3020.
No, it's a lot of swords. It's like 7 swords,
I'm
I
out
think.
I'm going to the
8.
bathroom. I'm taking a
I don't know.
fucking break.
Either 5 or
7
8.
swords?
7.
7.
The Buster sword is 7.
Man
And
said
then
30,
I think
20.
more
I'm getting
after
the
that.
fuck
It's
out
more.
of
Yeah. The original FF7 sword is 7.
I should get
How many swords does B carry?
8? I don't know. I'm just
Killer Bee.
saying.
Killer Bee.
Killer Bee from Naruto. How many swords does Killer Bee from Naruto carry, Chad?
8? I don't know.
Swords.
8?
You sure it's 8?
Ash know that one.
It's 8, definitely.
Ash got that one.
I said 8. That was my first
You
answer.
got that one.
Okay.
I don't
I
even
wrote
know
the
what the
question
fuck
because
I'm
maybe he
talking
wasn't
about.
counting because Sasuke was getting his ass packed up. He was like, I ain't even looking at the swords. Nigga. He
Killer
got
Bee
packed
is
up.
Cammy, so the answer is 0. Hey, come on. Come on, Cam. I see you.
What Star Dragon Ball was on Gohan's head? On his hat?
4.
Sure about that?
Script said 4. I remember 4.
It is the 4-star.
And that's because I keep
Yeah, they said 4. Yup, 4.
I keep one on my keys too.
That's fine.
Period.
Oh, okay. Well, excuse me, nigga. My fault.
I keep one on
I should
my
have never.
keys too.
I should have
Jack.
never put that question, y'all. I should have never put that question. I should have never wrote
Let's
down
go.
that question. I don't even know if y'all know that, but I just put it because it's like more Gen Z. Do y'all know what?
I'm telling you, Saran. I'm telling you, bro.
Do y'all know what? Do y'all know what the movie Among Us? No. Do y'all know what the game
It's not a
Among Us is
movie.
from? I mean, it's based off of.
No.
I
Murders.
forgot the name of the movie. I know you're talking about though.
I don't know what fucking movie that shit
Among
is based
Us is
off. I just
based
know
off
it's a
of
game.
a movie.
Based off
What
an old
movie
movie when
is
the,
Among Us based off of, chat?
When the guy went crazy, I can't remember the
Yeah.
name of the movie though.
What's that? It's a corporate movie where he was just murdering all the fucking people in the corporate shits.
No, that's not it. It's a movie when he was like an actual spaceship. And like he was like,
Oh, okay.
he
No,
got
not
sick.
Despicable Me. No, that's
Oh
not
yeah,
it.
the thing is called
Yeah,
the thing. Yeah,
it's the thing.
The thing.
Yeah, the thing.
Oh, I
It's
never
the-
seen
it
that.
was-
It's that shit with that elastic band, and he was
It
up
was
in
in
space. Yeah, they was in
basically
space
killed
doing
his own- he killed
yeah.
his
Oh, okay. Let's go, Baldoni. Let's go. Galaxy Storm 2.
That was
Let's
actually a
go.
good one.
What is Joker's real name in Persona 5?
Ooh, I knew this one, but I can't remember. I can't remember.
Now you probably know that shit.
I know Joker.
Golden Cross.
I'm done with Saran. Saran is hilarious. Hollywood said the movie where the creature moves the person from person to person. I remember. Yeah. Yeah, Baldoni said me.
Well, since GK here, let me ask the question again. You okay, man?
I don't know.
Right, I can't take you out of frame because you got the little gangster lean right there.
Oh, yeah, my fault. All right, my fault again. I said Cammy. The question was, what is Joker from Persona 5's real name?
Ren Amaya, bro. I'm playing the Persona 5 Royale right now.
Yeah, I forgot you was up there again. You know, get the hell up out of here. But
let's go,
yes,
guys.
it's Ren.
Let's go.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Ren. All right.
Let's go.
Let me see what else do I have.
If you,
I'm a Maya, yeah.
if you don't got no more
I'm a
questions,
panda.
I got a game we can play.
All right. I asked 2 more, then we pick your game. Hold on.
Answers
Okay.
the question.
What is Sega's most successful console to date?
Sega's most successful console
to date.
Genesis, right? Or the Dreamcast?
No, not the Dreamcast. Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis.
There's 2 answers. I'll give y'all that. There's 2 answers.
Sega Genesis.
It's this Genesis and Genesis 32.
DX.
32-bit, right?
PlayStation 6. Damn, bro. Damn, bro. We're not even past the 5.
Yeah, no. So yeah. So it's definitely Genesis, but there's also 32-bit Mega Drive.
I say Sega Genesis.
Genesis, but it's also 32-bit Mega Drive.
So what is it?
So you're banking on.
Same thing.
So you're banking on
Sega Genesis.
Genesis and Mega Drive.
Damn, that was on the money. It's like you said
Genesis
and Mega Drive.
Come on.
Come on.
He's supposed to be asking.
Damn, what the fuck? We're not even in the future. GTA.
Jesus.
Baldonia already said the Master System.
That's like 20, 30 years from now.
Baldonia, I'm with you. That same thing. Master System and Mega Drive.
Yes, that's all the same. Yeah.
What is Sasuke's thunder move called?
Chidori.
No.
That's not
Thunderclap.
Whoa.
Ryuki or something.
No, there's a name. There's a literal name for it.
Yes,
Not
oh.
QB.
Oh, you're right.
Kiruki.
Shit. You're right.
No.
No, it's not Chidori.
Can I say it?
Yes.
No,
It's
not
thunder.
yet. No, not yet.
Yes.
No, not yet.
Thunderclap shit.
Karen, yeah.
It's Kieran.
That's what I said. The Thunderclap shit.
You said Thunderclap, but no, the real name is Kieran.
No, that's we Thunderclap.
He was about to end off.
And Ludacris and
Script the one that got that.
He was about to end. He was about to end. He was gonna end Naruto. Nigga, Orochimaru said, "Nah, nigga, I'm sorry, I can't do that." He was. Okay, but what you getting? You want to play? Oh, you want me to ask one more?
CJ, let's play your game now.
Oh, you want me to ask one more?
Do one more.
No, fuck his game.
You do one more.
Sega's buying it off for Sony. Get your stocks now.
Wait, what did he say? You got.
That one is too easy. That one is too easy.
That was a good one.
Oh, my fault. Sorry. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can get this one. How many ports does the GameCube have?
4.
Controller ports?
Think it's 4?
5.
Controller ports?
Yeah.
5.
No, just ports in general.
Wait.
Oh,
5?
I don't know. I know it has 4.
So you mean like a power port and HDMI port and shit? Like that?
There was no HDMI.
There
5?
was no HDMI.
I can't tell.
There is a box slap on the bottom.
No, that don't act.
5, 6, or 7.
That don't count.
Let me just look for another one.
No, it's
On the actual
5, 6,
system
or
itself,
7.
So if you're saying just regular plug-in ports in the front, 4 controllers, 2
Yeah,
memory
6.
cards,
Oh, yeah, memory
5,
cards.
6, or 7.
8, so it's 8. It's 8. You got 2.
power.
No, it was no. They meant controller. They meant controller because it's 4. But I'm gonna ask one more.
God damn it.
What is the best-selling game of all time on PlayStation 2? And that's it. I'm not doing no more.
Best-selling game for all time,
The
PS2.
best-selling game of all time on P2.
NBA Street Volume 2.
Nah.
God damn it.
Nah.
Nigga said Halo 2.
Saran played too much saying Halo 2.
Was there any Grand Theft?
Baldoni said GTA San Andreas.
You think that, Baldoni?
No, it's not. It's something else.
No,
I think
it's not.
You think that, Baldoni?
I can't remember.
GTA is a big
I'm
title.
going with GTA, but I feel like it's too obvious.
Nah, it's not. I think
Broke
it's
Nation
something else.
Out
I
of
think
Frame
it's,
2.
Yeah, I seen that, so I fixed myself. Y'all think it's what y'all think?
Baldoni might be right.
what is it?
I'm going with Grand Theft. I don't know nothing else to guess.
Vice City.
I'm a Hollywood. I'm a
Vice
Vice
City.
City player too. I love Vice City.
SmackDown versus Raw.
SmackDown versus Raw. Okay,
Yeah,
2007.
What GTA was on PlayStation 1?
GT.
Was it top-down view?
Yeah, top down view.
So which one was the first?
The
Was
first
that
one.
three?
GTA 3.
Resident Evil 4.
That's
Interesting.
That's
PS2.
not. Yeah,
I'm
that's
going with that.
PS2.
What's the
I
answer?
thought the top.
He said
I thought
Resident
the top
Evil
view.
4.
Resident Evil 4, Baldoni says.
That's a good one.
So
That's
which
not
one?
a bad
That's
pick.
not a bad
So what
one.
y'all want to bank on?
I'm banking on San Andreas.
I'm
Because
going-
I'm saying
with-
Silent
the
Hill.
main
I'm going
character
with Grand
CJ,
Theft
I'm
Auto.
CJ,
I'm
why
going
not,
with Grand
right?
Theft Auto.
I'm saying Silent Hill. Silent Hill's
It was
another
San
good one,
Andreas.
too. Silent
San
Hill.
Andreas, let's
Yeah.
go.
San
Fucking
Andreas.
Baldoni.
Put your game up because all that shit up
Alright,
there.
CJ, let's
I
play
wrote
your
down.
game.
All that shit that I wrote down.
We said the OG smoked them tonight.
OGs.
Yeah, okay.
OG
Then
smoked
we
them
smoked
tonight.
y'all. Boom, drop a goddamn bomb for the OGs. Goddamn it, get the goddamn machine. Boom, smoke their ass.
We knew
Goddamn
all
it,
day
give it a clap.
YN.
Come
All
on.
right,
And then smoke their ass.
I ain't even want to play with it. I'm done. Fuck it.
Where the slang came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Come
Whatever.
on now. Come on now.
What's the thing to my dick? What's the
Yeah. What is
Down
it?
bad
So
to my dick.
You go, no,
Down
let
back to
him
my
say
dick.
it. He
Down back to my dick means you're mad poor. You're broke.
You're poor.
Say again?
It means you're poor and you're
No,
broke.
say it.
Down bad to my dick.
Down bad to my dick.
What kind of slang is that, Chad?
No, you were saying it a lot harder earlier. Down back to my dick. What the
You
fuck?
down bad to my dick.
Down back to my dick.
Hold on, Chad. That's one of their slangs. Down bad to my
I don't
dick.
say that.
Which
Don't
means
call
that
me
you're
like
not
that.
broke, you're poor.
Nah,
Yeah,
fuck
you're
that. Don't
poor.
call me like that.
Like poor. You don't got a cent to your name.
That means you can't go to the
Why you
Chinese
just
store
can't say I'm
and
down
get
bad,
order
though?
of fries.
Why you gotta add
You can't
dick
even
to it?
get a fortune cookie.
Because
that's-
down bad means that you trying to get with a female. Like you desperate. Like damn.
That's not what that means, though. What are you
I'm
talking
down
about?
bad.
Yes, it is. If you down.
No, it's not.
Down bad means you broke.
So why every time you see somebody date an ugly ass female, oh he down bad?
I've never heard that.
Nah, I never heard that.
To you, that's
I heard
that's
she
probably
hit.
what that means.
No,
Right,
down back can be too. Down back can be like, oh, I'm down bad, so I'm desperate. I'm gonna.
Right, desperate.
I'm gonna fuck with that girl because I'm
So
down
then
bad.
at
Right,
that
that's
point,
what
it's
down
a
bad is like
phrase.
I'm down bad, like I'm poor, like I have nothing
So
to
what's
my
the
name.
dick part?
But they
Right.
down bad to my dick.
Down bad. So down. Okay, I get it. Down bad to my dick. But I get it. I get it.
I don't get it.
Help me out. Help me out.
Keep
Work
going,
with me.
keep going, keep going.
Down bad to my dick, like he said, right?
Young, remember?
It can be you down bad to your dick, and then you ain't got no drawers. So you really homeless. You really broke.
I
It
just
could
don't
be that,
understand
yeah.
why
You ain't got no
the dick
drawers.
part
Me
is
neither,
thrown.
Galaxy.
Right.
Me
Down bad to
neither.
my dick, you ain't got no drawers.
No
That's
drawers,
how
though.
broke you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
gotta be
crazy
just
work.
Yeah, that could be that
jeans
too.
on your ass, and you gonna be got
See?
yeast infection and all of
Galaxy
that.
Storms.
Galaxy
I never
Storms.
heard all
Galaxy
of them
Storms.
on-
Me
they hopping
fucking
up
neither.
and
I
down.
never heard that shit.
Because girl, you
either.
just turned 20. Of course you ain't heard it.
I never heard of it either. What are you talking about?
What generation is this?
I guess the COVID baby too. See, I think yes. I don't know.
Who's the COVID baby?
I don't know.
I don't even like saying it.
Right. I will never. Well, I don't have a dick.
I
Does
swear
that
to
mean your
day,
dog is
CJ
desperate?
called me talking
Wow.
about, hey yo, I'm down bad to my dick. Hang on, click.
And call me and let me know that he said
Yeah,
that.
I was gonna say not YN, so YN can say it to another
I'm gonna send
YN.
you a clip. This is what the nigga said.
A YN can say it to a YN.
They say
You
I have no money, bro. They say, yo, I got no money.
No,
I'm
they
broke.
say I'm down bad to my dick. That's exactly what they say. They say hard too. They're like, I'm down bad to my dick.
Chat, we did an
I'm down bad to my
amazing
dick,
job
my heart.
holding it down.
My heart.
We did an amazing job, chat, holding it down for the OGs.
They did an amazing job.
No, we say for the OGs. I'm saying we kicked their ass.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
YNs, they did an amazing job. Even Cousin Ash, look, Cousin Ash, poke your head in the camera. Poke your head in the camera.
Yo, what's up,
There
y'all?
we go. There we
I'll
go.
give him some
Cousin
feedback
Ash
from
is
the
here,
side.
and he's big, bro. But after today, he
Yo.
said, "Nah, I'm crossing over." I don't know what the fuck going on with down bad to my dick.
Yo,
And tracking the train.
He's like, nah, I don't know about that part.
Yeah, y'all don't know about that.
Y'all don't like down bad or jacking the train?
Hit the clap button. Give it up for the YNs. For the YN takeover for sure. This was such a dope
Y'all don't like
episode
down
for
bad or
YNs.
jacking the train. This is some bullshit.
No, but that's
Who
crazy.
was saying down back to my dick?
I will say
That's-
this,
Who
though.
was saying
That's
that?
what they
They
say,
gave me
bro.
mad
I
shit to
swear,
clip.
bro.
Yeah,
Yes.
mad shit to click. I was about to drop a bomb. I'm
Hey,
tripping.
listen. You go viral a lot.
Yes.
They fucking love
Yes.
this guy on
Yeah.
TikTok.
Yes.
You be saying wild shit.
Wild shit.
Hey, bro,
And today, this one right
This
here.
nigga here, man.
Yeah, we gonna get his
He gonna be
She
viral
don't
today,
want to be
not
on
me.
YN no more.
Yeah,
She
she,
gave up.
she's like, how many
You all right?
years I gotta take to not be
Yo,
white?
for real, she got a little time to go.
Oh shit,
Yo.
my head hurt. My head is
Have I
Alright,
been
so-
playing Monopoly Go? Okay, I'm just
Oh
chilling.
my god.
So chat, we got one more game for y'all. It's
Yes,
going
yes.
back to the OG's game, but the game we gonna play is Who the Fuck Is That? Y'all know
Oh,
who the
this
fuck
my
is
shit.
that?
Yep,
It's
yep,
our, it's
yep.
y'all favorite shit, so let's jump right into it.
I was gonna do this, but I need to like the layout.
No, we didn't want you to do this.
Nah. This is
Yeah,
OG.
because I was gonna put Leone back up there. That's
No,
what I
no,
wanted to do. I was pow.
This OG shit.
Who is that? Right?
Yeah.
I would know that.
He said, I know that bitch. That's it. I know that. I know that pussy right there. Yo.
Or he gonna put his pelvic in the screen.
Yeah, that's it. Hey, that's it.
Right, or boobs or some shit.
Right. Whose boobs is this? Like,
Right.
Hey man, hey.
Like, it might be Sailor Moon. No, it's Tifa.
Yeah, like, yeah.
God damn it. Okay, fuck it.
You gonna know these boobs when you see it.
All right, so let's get into it, chat. Let's get right into it.
You talking about me with 2 minutes? It's 3 minutes. Damn.
Who's that guy right there?
This guy right here, smooth fellow,
Smooth
with
fellow,
Yardies on the side.
That's the auntie slave.
This queen right here, looking right there
Queen
with
right here,
the melanated Monets on the side, and yours truly. Check your boy out on the
man
car.
himself. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. With Party on the side. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, we know Game Lounge is affiliated with Art Club, Bridge Crew Gaming, Club 6, and Made Mafia. For sure. Check yourselves out. There's a bunch of y'all up here. I gotta make another one. Where I try to like make everybody be in there, but everybody's up here. All of y'all is in there. So trust and believe, we ain't forget about y'all. We also saying thank you for rocking with us every Sunday. What's up, y'all? Let's party. Let's play our silhouette game. Who the fuck is that? In this game, we need to turn on the lights. So let's turn the lights on. Here we go.
The lights.
Ah, flashbang.
Here we go. Let's get into it.
That's Tom and Jerry.
Yup. Immediately off the rip.
It's not.
That definitely is not no fucking Tom and Jerry. Why is you?
Yes, it is.
No, it is not. That is not. Cause how does that look like
Itchy and Scratchy?
Itchy and Scratchy.
No, it could be Tom and Jerry because
no, that's not Tom and Jerry.
Actually, that's one of their logos because
Cat and Mouse Duo.
Well, that's Tom and Jerry Kids.
Kids. No.
They say Cat and Mouse Duo.
So
it could be Tom and Jerry.
That is not Tom and Jerry. Cause no,
I ain't gonna lie, Jerry do got the body. Yeah, it's Jerry, bro.
It's
a rat. How is it?
Oh my God.
How is that an Ayo? It's a rat.
Hit the Ayo button.
Hey, yo.
It's a male, bro. His name is fucking Jerry.
Hold on.
Jerry got
How do we really know?
Jerry got the body.
How do we really know if Jerry? Hold on. How do we know if Jerry is a boy, man? How do we really know Jerry is a boy, man?
In front of Mrs.
I don't mean it like this.
There's a female right in the lights.
Yeah, Jerry got a girlfriend.
Girl, nigga. The female.
He could have been gay.
Oh, get out of here.
Oh, that
Give
makes
me
it
another
worse.
ball.
Hey, yo.
God damn it. Chat. What's
You
happening?
see when his girl got took and he was sad?
Yeah, bro, what's that?
He got
the body.
but you see, he was sad and
Sure.
chased the fucking bag, so it don't matter. He good. You know what I'm saying?
who's that?
No, let's see what chat saying.
Chat says
Tom and Jerry.
Baldoni said Tom and Jerry. The Diggs is in the building.
Yo,
Jumping
Diggs,
ball
what
from
you
out
doing,
the
my boy
Diggs.
Diggs?
Watch CJ in the court like he Trick Daddy and shit. Hell yeah, bro. Hell yeah.
Not Trick Daddy.
Trick Luda Kid.
Disclaimer: Jerry isn't gay. Galaxy Storm says. So let's see.
I'm pretty sure that's them. It can be.
Y'all say Itchy and Scratchy. Y'all also said Tom and Jerry, and yes, indeed, it is Tom and Jerry.
Okay.
That's the way to picture it. You know what? Eat my ass.
Wow. I don't want to jack the
I
train.
always give y'all the easy one first to start y'all asses off. That was easy. It gets harder.
I don't want to jack the train, okay?
That's crazy.
You crazy.
He said Jerry got hit.
Yeah, it's
Jerry
crazy.
might have a little sugar in his tank.
He was like, the only reason why I know because of his.
Yeah, leave my boy Jerry alone.
It's Jerry, my boy.
Jerry get hoes.
All right, here we go.
Crypto.
That is,
That's
Who the
that's
What the
Scooby.
fuck?
That's Scooby.
No, that's
No,
not.
That's Crypto and Superman, bro.
Is that Scooby?
Right.
That's
No.
not Crypto. That's not Crypto.
That is not Crypto.
Crypto has a more built body.
That's
That's
the
not
bird
Crypto.
nigga.
That's Superman.
It's a bird nigga.
That's not Crypto.
It's a
I know that. I know who
That's
that.
Superman and
blue
his
bird ass
dog.
nigga or some shit.
That's
Blue
Superman.
Falcon or some
That's
shit.
Superman and his
Falcon
dog.
is
I know who that is.
And first off, Crypto has
I
a
know
cape.
who that-
But remember,
I
his
can't
cape
remember
comes
his
from
name,
his belt, so it
He
like
got
flaps.
I
So,
know
not
who that is. I can't remember his name. He was also in a Scooby-Doo show.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It gotta be the Falcon.
The Falcon.
Falcon
Some
guy,
Falcon
right,
that-
right.
Space Ghost.
They
It's
said
not
Space Ghost.
It's
Hollywood
not-
said Space Ghost.
It's
Saran
not-
said Scooby.
it's
Galaxy
not
said
Space
it's
Ghost.
from Scooby-Doo
It's
show.
from Scooby-Doo
It's
show,
from the
yes.
Scooby-Doo show.
I know who
Okay.
it is.
Let me help out because there's a hint.
But wasn't Scooby dressed up like
Blue
him?
Hero and Dog Wonder.
Blue Falcon.
Right, it gotta be Blue Falcon.
Blue Falcon.
Some kind of Falcon nigga.
Okay.
I know who it is.
Right,
Blue
who's
Falcon
Scooby-Doo?
And Daffy Duck. How about
Daffy
and Daffy
Duck.
Duck. All right, Daffy
Daffy
Duck.
Daffy
Duck.
Duck?
Daffy
Where
Duck.
where's she a duck at?
Like,
Blue Falcon.
I know who it is though.
GK says.
But didn't
Blue
Scooby
Hero
dress
and
up
Dog
like him?
Wonder.
Wasn't it Scooby that dressed up like him?
Answer is
Like GK said.
I knew
Oh,
it.
yeah,
There we go.
right.
I knew it. I knew it.
And
Dynamite.
Dynamite.
Yeah,
Galaxy.
But I knew Moonwalk.
But that's his dog Wonder. You know
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Superman
yeah.
got, you know,
Dog Wonder.
Crypto.
Hold on.
That's Dynamite.
What the fuck is
Blue
this?
Falcon. I know
What the
my
fuck is this?
shit.
1985? We wasn't even born when this generation happened, man.
The movie came out a couple of years ago.
It
What
really
the hell
did.
wrong with
It
you?
really
Step
did.
your game
It really-
up.
even I knew.
Step your game up.
Shot been hiding under a fucking rock.
Here we
this
go.
whole
Here we
entire
go.
time.
What else we
Shit.
got? What else I got?
What
Who
the
the
hell?
fuck is that?
The Flash?
The Flash?
The Flash?
Who is that?
That's fucking.
The
That
Flash
is
and
fucking
Rockman?
Robin.
The Flash and the Thing?
That is Robin. I'm
And
jacking
Batman?
it.
No.
Robin?
Remember, Batman? No, Robin has a cape.
Who the fuck is that?
Robin has a cape. That can't be Robin.
The Flash
That's
and the
another
Rockman.
game.
Unless it's Nightwing Robin.
You
And I don't
definitely
think
know who
Nightwing
it
Robin
is.
is
Is
not
that
like
The
that.
another
Flash
cape?
and Rockman.
I'm
you
sure
talking
we
about the
all
red
know
tonight?
who that is.
What's the hint?
Oh, fucking.
Well, all right. Let's
Right,
see.
what is the hint?
Let's see what the hint is. Let's see. Let's see what the hint is. Matter of fact, let me see what chat say first.
No.
Johnny Quest.
Johnny Quest. Not a bad answer.
Not a bad
Let's see the
answer.
hint.
Black hero and white sidekick. Damn, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
Johnny
what
Quest.
the fuck? White sidekick?
That's
Black
crazy.
hero, white sidekick. By the
Yep,
way,
Johnny
Johnny
Quest.
Quest was the white guy, and
Yeah.
Haji was the black guy.
Black
henchman.
Haji's the sidekick.
So this
Static
is where...
Shock and Gear.
Static Shock.
I was
and
thinking
Gear.
that, but
Nah,
who has the
Static
cape?
Shock body.
Static Shock.
That's not built. That's not Static Shock. He's
Static
not built
Shock.
like
and
that.
Gear.
It
That's not a
is.
bad.
Static Shock and
That's
Gear.
not.
He's
a
not
bad
built
pick.
like that though. He's not built like
That's
that.
not
He has
bad
a
pick.
cape.
I kind of want to.
Nigga, don't mean they got a fucking Superman has a cape. Stop
No
it.
fucking kid.
Not a
What
bad
the
pick,
fuck you
bro.
trying to
It's not a
say?
bad pick, but I don't agree.
Okay.
It's not a bad pick though.
He's not
I
built
did
like
think
that, though.
too.
He's not built like
He's
that.
diamond.
Let's see what chat say.
Plus, look like he has a hat. Static Shock
Look
don't have
at
a
his
hat.
boots.
Static Shock don't have a hat.
Static Shock. Yo, I got
That's
it.
his
Okay.
dreads, nigga.
My Ash
BT
might be
game.
Yeah, but
right.
one dread in the air, nigga? One dread in the air?
It's silhouette though, so you probably.
Like, nigga got one dread in the air?
Nah, I seen it.
Nigga
Bro,
said, bad
shut the
man.
fuck up. That wasn't it.
Like, what the fuck? Bad man. Yo.
I'm-
Is that really
I
Static
think I'm
Shock?
gonna be mad.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Ash said, Static
His
Shock
dreads
and
on the
Gear.
side. It's
You got
silhouette.
it. You got
Very
it. You got
good.
that, Ash.
So
You
his
got
My
that.
guy Ash. He know his shit.
And
He
Gear.
know his shit.
Yes,
And
Saran,
Gear. That's a
very
whack ass
good.
name.
Saran too.
Android
Saran
18
too.
and Android 7. No.
Oh,
Android
no, that's
18.
the two. Oh, yeah. That's
Android 18 and 17.
You sure?
But 17 built like a female.
That's the,
No, 18.
I agree.
No,
Nah,
with him.
17 is I think it's left.
You sure?
Nah, that can't be him. That can't be him.
The twins from the twins.
17 is on the right.
17
Nah,
is on the
17
left.
too built like a female.
The twins from
17 is on the
Dexter.
left.
Put his hands
I
in the
agree.
pocket.
17 always
Okay,
put his hands in
well,
his pocket.
let's
Let's
see
see a
what the
fucking
hint
OG.
is.
Yeah, Lapis Lazuli. Yeah,
Yeah, it's the
because that's their names. That's
Yeah.
their real name. Yeah, that's them.
Lapis Lazuli is the hint.
Yeah, that's their name.
Let's see if chat got it. Let's see what chat say.
18 and 17. Yep.
BT Gamer said 18 and 17. Galaxy Storm 17 and 18. I see the facial outlines. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see
I
it.
see the hair.
They got the bob.
Right, the hair
The hair in the
immediately.
pose.
Right, the pose. Yeah.
17 always put his hands in his fucking
So I'm
pocket.
guessing
Exactly.
18 is to
Who
the
the
left.
fuck is that? Y'all 100%
Yeah,
right.
18
This
is left.
17 and 18.
Oh, they gave her her
All I can
super
say
outfit.
is
Okay.
Krillin got away.
Yeah, it's his
Yeah,
super
yeah,
outfit.
Krillin got away with
Yeah,
murder.
what? What?
But
Krillin
she let him get away.
Krillin
Yeah.
got away.
Yeah,
But I'm not going front though. Marin was sexy.
Yeah.
Marin?
What? Marin?
Krillin's
I don't know what
girlfriend.
you're saying. What for? You just say yeah.
Blue hair chick.
Yo, Marin was thick.
The blue hair chick.
Marin was sharp.
Yeah.
My son Krillin knocked the bolts off that.
Krillin was pulling some work.
Nah, Krillin got dimensions now.
Yeah, he didn't say the word, but he is sliding on some.
I'll be real with
He
you
knocked
though.
the bolts off her.
If you married to Krillin, who robbing your house?
Nobody.
Nobody. nigga.
Right, she has unlimited
Nobody.
chakra.
You safe.
I said chakra.
You
She has
safe.
unlimited key.
Right.
You gotta get one of them other niggas to come on Earth.
Right.
At that point, it's a planetary
You gotta get
threat.
Goku.
You know what I mean?
Right. And they're not coming for shit that's including the house.
No.
Right.
Unless
You're
it's
not
Dragon
robbing
Ball,
Krillin.
but
That's
yeah.
why you're not doing that.
No.
Right, you gotta get Goku to rob that crib.
Yeah.
Who the hell?
What?
Who
Megan
the
Thee
fuck is
Stallion.
that?
Megan Thee
Megan Thee Stallion
Stallion,
and
yeah.
Cardi B.
Yeah.
Megan Thee
I'm
Stallion
a-
and Cardi B?
I'm a Google that.
That's why.
She
That
the only one that
definitely
do
is
the freaky
because
shit.
I'm a
She the
Google
only
that.
one to do freaky shit.
No, this is
That's
Cardi
Cardi
B
on
and
this
that's
side,
Meg.
Megan on that side.
Right. Yeah.
Megan
This
Thee
is
Stallion.
Cardi B and that's Meg.
That's why.
Whoever over here got the tongue.
That's Cardi.
They both
This
got
is
tongues.
Cardi.
Nah, that tongue is heavy.
Yes, it's from
Right.
WAP.
That
I
tongue is
remember.
heavy.
That's either from the
Yes,
song
bongos.
or
Wait,
WAP.
no, bongos.
Oh, you a
It's from
trick.
bongos. I remember.
That's
It's
WAP.
from bongo.
That's what we
Hollywood
do.
say that's what we doing now.
Right, bro. What the fuck?
This
Let's see
is
what the head
crazy
say. Let's see what the
because
head say.
In the crib.
They don't cook. See, that's why.
Yes,
they don't cook,
it's from
Gobble you and swallow you. Wow.
It's from
I want
WAP.
to see the real
It's
picture.
from
of that
don't
tongue on
cook,
the right.
they don't
WAP.
hide.
I
It's
wanna see
WAP.
that
Gobble
real
you and
picture.
swallow.
It's
But
WAP.
that tongue
I'm
looks
He don't give a fuck
official.
who it is. He want to see the
WAP.
tongue.
I wanna
It's
see the
WAP.
tongue.
Who the fuck is that?
I'm
And
telling you, this is Cardi
Chat.
B and that's Meg.
That
I
tongue
already
is
know.
crazy.
That's Cardi B and that's Meg.
See why Offset is crying in the corner. That tongue is crazy.
For sure.
God
Wow.
damn, bro.
No, wait, don't go.
Thing is,
forward.
I already know who's who.
That's
Not one
Tina
and not
Cow.
two. Not one and not
No,
two.
Method
Fuck
Man
out
and
of here.
Redman.
Yes,
Method Man
yes,
and Redman.
yes,
Mega Man.
yes,
Method
No,
Man and
no,
Redman.
no.
Yes.
No,
But
Method
Method
Man
Man
and
and
Redman.
Redman.
yes.
I go Method Red.
Method Red.
Method Red.
Okay.
I don't know about Method Red.
Okay.
It
Method
definitely
Red.
is.
Didn't they have their own TV show on Bugging?
No.
Wayne Brothers?
What? It was
No,
a TV
Method
show.
Man
They had a movie,
They had a
How
movie.
High.
How High?
Look, got blunt, got
Oh,
weed,
Yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
That's Method Red.
Method Red. Got blunt. Got weed. Get him.
Yes.
Smoke that, puff
But
that,
I got a question,
pass that.
I got a question,
Yeah.
though.
Method Man and Redman chat.
How
That
high?
In the
Fire,
picture
I can't
before
lie.
this one, right?
Yes.
Is that an airbrush tongue? That's a real tongue?
Yeah.
That's the real tongue.
Nigga still about the last slide.
I'll go back for you. I'll go back. Yeah, yeah.
Like I
I'll go
said,
back for you. It's crazy.
thought
Damn.
one and thought two.
Look
Like I
at
said,
that. Look
thought
at
one
the
and thought two.
girth.
Thought
on
one,
that
thought
tongue.
two.
Thought
They
one
got
and
money,
thought two. Fuck that.
They got money,
Yeah,
though.
too
They
much
do
dope.
got
They
money.
got
Give a
money,
fuck
though.
They
about
do got
that.
money.
Look at the girth on the two tongue, son.
What
They
the
got money,
fuck
though.
we on this
Her
now?
genetics is just crazy.
But you know, Big Cardi's tongue is compared to Meg's
Look
tongue.
what she do.
We was
bro.
on blousers. Now we on tongues now. What the fuck is this? Like, yo.
Man,
That's
man.
crazy.
You
'cause
better
was
not answer no
voting for a
fucking
nigga who
questions,
wear
nigga.
blouses.
That's hard.
And now we talking about
That's
women's
hard.
tongue.
Oh my
God.
Don't
God.
answer no fucking
Going
questions.
on.
Kind of nigga that's down bad on his dick. See, y'all using this like we got him. They got it. I don't think they're gonna use Jack in the Trend. Though. I don't think so.
Nah,
I
we're
don't
not
think
doing
so.
that.
They was
I'm
never
not
jacking the
jacking
fucking
nothing.
train from before.
Who's that?
Shaggy and
What the fuck
Scooby.
is this?
Oh, that's ain't that's the people from
Said Shaggy
Devil,
and Scooby?
Devil May Cry? No,
No.
Not standing like that.
Silent Hill?
no, not Silent
Who
Hill.
the fuck is that?
And better be two girls.
Nah,
Two
the nigga,
girls?
homeboy on the
That's
left
good-
look like a
that's-
nigga.
That's a good perception.
Who the fuck is that?
It's a good perception. Who the fuck is that, chat?
Tomb Raider?
GK flashback to yesterday's story, yeah.
But wait though, but why they look so familiar? Like the silhouette look familiar.
Galaxy saw him said that tongue is immaculate. You
feel me? Immaculate?
I'm not the only one. You feel me?
It could be somebody that chat know.
He said Kayo and Lori.
Okay.
That's what Cammy plays.
Well, what's the hint?
Kayo and Lori.
And then
Cam says
Saran,
Kayo and Ori.
Saran
Ori.
said,
Oh, King of Fighters.
Saran
right.
said Resident
Oh,
Evil.
That's
That
how
might make sense.
Crazy.
Capital I.
No, that might make sense. Iori, yes, my bad, Cam. That might make sense.
Giordi.
Not Ryu and Ken, but they're kings in fighting.
Yeah, there you go.
King of Fighters.
Cam got it.
Yeah,
Same with Cam?
Cam
Cam
got
said
it.
Yeah, Cam got it. Yep.
Yeah, Cam got it.
King of Fighters. Yeah, dim
Yep,
nigga.
Cam got it.
Yeah.
Right.
I know that's not a nigga that's posted up like that. Yo, bro, what the fuck?
I get the pose though. He's the other way. That's why I look a little.
It still looks zesty.
Right.
Okay, last one, y'all. Last one.
What the fuck?
That looks like Ryu on the back. Oh wait,
Ryu
no,
and
wait.
Ken?
That's some Samurai Showdown shit.
What the hell?
That's a samurai right there. That nigga right there
You
in the
said
front is a
Samurai Showdown? What the fuck?
What the nigga said Samurai Showdown.
Samurai Showdown?
I'm
Nigga said
not
Shogun.
sure, but that's a samurai. I know who this nigga is.
That's
Samurai
okay.
Shampoo?
He got the two shit here and the sword. That's it. I don't know if
The
I'm
two
right.
shits. Okay.
It may not be Samurai
I
Showdown.
know who you're talking about.
Right.
Well, I don't know
I
who
know
he
who you
talking
talking
about.
about.
I don't know who he talking about. I'm good.
I know who you're
Somebody with
talking
a
about.
ponytail. I can't remember who though.
Somebody with a ponytail.
On this,
It's two dudes.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Two dudes.
It's
Okay.
two dudes.
Shiggy.
That's how with two girls.
on this question, I'm down bad to my dick.
Stop saying that shit.
Be careful. So let's see what chat say.
Is that Terry on Bug? That's
Tekken. Saran said Ryu and Ken.
No.
Cam said this is Ryu and Ken alpha versions, by the way.
Nah, that's not Jin. That can't be
Okay.
Jin.
It do look like it.
Baldoni says Ryu and Ken.
Cammy should
Nah,
know.
my son
Alpha
Jin's
are-
here.
Cammy should know.
Okay.
GK playing on hard difficulty. Oh, shit.
GK playing. That's my
Not
favorite.
Jin. Not Ken, bro. Ken is
So, Samurai Showdown, you say?
It's Ryu and Ken though.
Now it's the duo you think.
Oh shit.
You got it. Right.
Is it really?
It's
Was it Ryu and
Yeah.
The
Ryu?
tie around his head.
The tie around his head. Yeah, yeah. Ken's long hair over.
Yeah.
That's the duo you think.
I thought
He got some long ass hair. What the fuck?
Yeah, Ken hair was long
Yeah,
until
Ken
he
hair
cut
It's
it.
was
not like that no more though. Right?
Yeah,
cut it.
nah.
No, he cut it. It's short hair now. Or
This
short
was
hair.
Alpha time.
Like Cam said, Baldoni, excuse me. Baldoni and Cam said it.
Ken look like a bum now, right? Like a little bit.
Yeah,
bum.
he a hobo. He a hobo.
Even though he got
right
mad
now.
bread. That's crazy.
Great combos, chat. Thank you guys all for playing. Hit the claps, hit the claps. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
He said when the door you think was the clue, I was gonna change my answer to GK and CJ.
That would have been good. That would have been good. All right, chat. It's about that time we try to close out the show. YNs, we're gonna allow you guys to close out the show and kick it over to us.
You ain't talk that much. I'm gonna let you start, my boy.
Why the fuck did I gotta talk? Look, I was talking so much. What the fuck you mean?
Not exactly. You was heavy on the down
bag. Not
bag.
even arguing with each other about it. Drop the
this
bomb
is
up triggers.
All right. Thank you, chat. Thank you for joining us tonight. We love you.
The woman's much, and she's holding it down.
Right.
She's holding it down.
Yeah, we love you, chat. Thank you.
BT Gamer said, GK, do you need help with my game?
I got you, BT. I got you.
Yo, that's crazy. Yo, that's crazy.
All right, but anyway, all right, cool. All right, let me start this up. Shit was funny. It was fun. It was fun.
Super dope.
The slang was wild, but yeah.
The slang was crazy.
Remember, y'all, if somebody tell you I jack in the train, you gotta jack the train.
No.
No, if somebody says down bad on my dick, run.
If somebody say down bad on my dick, swing on them.
Yes.
You gotta make sure.
Why take over? What's the quarter? Yes.
No, we don't
Yeah,
we swallow them out.
it's gonna be a little while before we come
Yeah,
back.
once a quarter. Once a quarter.
Don't worry, they'll be back.
They'll be back.
They'll be back.
You know, it's gonna be a little while.
Old ass man.
So Ransom, man, that
You owe that man groaning like your back hurt. My nigga, come on now. Stop, gang.
Miss Broke Nation, first time on the show. How did you like it?
Yes. I loved it. I like being here.
Dope.
Please return.
Dope.
We
Of
appreciate
course.
we appreciate you.
They want you to return
Here.
so you
Yes.
can calm
Help
me down.
me.
You know
No,
what I'm
yes,
saying?
yes, yes.
Help me.
Some more bullshit.
It be always her fighting for y'all.
Right.
Right.
Like, man, I guess we by ourselves.
Swinging,
man.
man.
Yeah, we by
Right.
ourselves, man. Fuck it, I guess.
Freddie?
Oh shit.
What
It
the
was
way
a
y'all
good stream.
fucking
That was a good
I was
number
fucking
two.
That's a good
goofballs.
stream.
Y'all gotta state y'all ages real
Word.
quick. How old are y'all?
22.
Broke Nation, 22.
I'm 22. My birthday was on Monday last week.
Shout out,
Yeah.
shout out.
Yeah.
Yeah, he gave me that. He gave it.
24.
Yeah, what's your
Yo,
age? Chef?
GK,
Uh-oh.
let me hear something. Drop some bars, bro.
Thank you.
Fuck you and fuck you.
Thank you.
2000?
Birthday
Thank
bars,
you.
birthday bars.
Oh my God.
They said some birthday bars.
They put me on the spot there. That's crazy. But I'm gonna have to say happy birthday.
Thank
to
you.
this right here.
Thank you.
Even though she's still young and she's still a baby, will she
Yeah.
come back to the game lounge? I don't know.
Of course.
Maybe.
Baby.
They trying to put me on the spot. I ain't having that.
But chat, I got the realest YN outfit on.
Let's go, let's go.
Bro say he's 24.
I'm 24.
Yeah, he's not gonna be a YN anytime.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
gonna be.
you crossing the big
It's
bro.
over.
Ash on his way here. I saw
I'm
something.
gonna
Ash is not a YN, goddammit.
I'm gonna look at both y'all.
We got Ash Packet ready for his ass.
Yo, it's ready.
I'm gonna look at
It's
both y'all
ready.
in the future, and I'm gonna tell y'all
You just
motherfuckers.
turned what?
I'm gonna look at both y'all
Next
motherfuckers
time,
and
yeah,
just
yeah.
say y'all motherfuckers be next. So be prepared, motherfucker.
We got some time.
I got 2 more years
We got some
left.
You
time.
gotta say look.
We got some time. We got some time. I know he's
Chat, if y'all want me back, let me
Y'all
know in
talking
the
about-
chat, and you gotta let them know, and I'll come back.
Yeah,
You gotta tell.
definitely put an 8 in the chat if you want Miss Broke Nation to come back. Put an 8 in the chat. 8's my favorite number, by the way.
Yeah.
That's my
Chat
favorite.
number
Yo,
2. Yeah.
You don't gotta.
That'll be straight.
Put an 8 in the chat.
Can I see
Lucky
some
Magic Ball
nines?
8. The Magic Ball 8 is the
Yes,
wisdom number
I'll
of
be
everything
back.
that
I'll
I
be
love.
back.
Yes.
See,
Wisdom
now I want
8
her back.
is the lucky number.
Drop
four.
Drop the
Definitely come back.
drop the H in the chat, y'all.
Cousin Ash, come on in
Come in
here.
here.
Say some
What's up,
things.
y'all? Y'all know I'm here,
They
man.
put
Give
8
my
balls.
feedback. You know,
They got 8s there.
I'm not a YN or I'm not a big bro. I'm just in the middle, man. Give it input.
Nah, you a big bro.
He's a big bro.
I'm in the gray area.
He's a big bro, but he's coming on over. He's coming on over. Come on.
Hold on. Script, stand up real quick. because
They
can't
dropping
see you.
8s.
Talk
They
to
dropping a
people
lot
real
of
quick.
8s in there.
Y'all forgot he was
Hold
back
on.
there. Damn.
Hold on.
He
Let's
was mad
go talk.
quiet.
He's
I
the
forgot
champion.
script
good,
too, yeah.
Vince?
My man Script.
My man's
Good,
dropping a
y'all.
bomb for Script for coming out, hanging out with us. Drop a bomb for Script.
Hey,
Let's go.
the second game lounge champion, y'all. Oh,
sir.
Yes, I'll be
Game
coming
now,
back,
champ.
chat. I'll be
claps,
back,
they
chat.
Oh man, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
And script told this shit, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. They have a stand.
Yeah, had to stand up here. Yeah, come on now, come on.
Yeah,
now. We don't pay for that floor up there. Come on,
Nigga
come
said
on.
Charlie
now.
broke with your questions with giving people migraines. Yeah, some shits is wild.
They definitely were. I thought that they knew that because they knew a bunch of shit. So I thought they knew that.
Nigga said on the 3rd of May.
Nigga said, why the 3rd of May, bro? Hello?
Hold
What's
on.
going on here?
I'm gonna skip me, the queen.
Kick it over to you.
W stream. I had fun. The YN's always giving me a fucking headache, but it was a
Of
good show.
course, of course.
Bigfoot said you can't use something, man.
Where you been all night, Bigfoot?
Right.
Now you wanna pop in? Fuck out of here.
You know what's crazy? He went straight for you, mind you. I was the host. That's crazy.
I'm in the back.
He went over me. Like, that's wild.
Nigga said on the 3rd of May.
Yo,
CJ.
kicking it over to the co-host. We back hosting co-host now.
Yeah.
So, chat, I had an amazing time back here. I need to be back here more often. And out this window is such a
Yeah.
it's such a good view out this window, chat. I mean, I didn't know it was comfortable back here. But as always, we appreciate y'all, chat. Clap it up for chat.
Oh man.
He's fired.
He's so fired.
As always, chat, like I always say, this is not just a podcast. It's a great show. It's family. It's community. And without y'all, we can't do this. We can't make this possible.
Fact.
As always,
We
drop
gonna
a bomb
clock
for us. We
clock it.
definitely gonna clock it because we learn new
We're
words.
gonna use that one.
Yeah,
clock it,
Not down bad. We ain't down bad on our dicks. Not down bad on our dicks. Not at all.
But remember, if somebody tell you jack the trend, you gotta jack the trend.
On that one, I'm gonna kick it over to Mr. 200 here so we can close out
sir.
the show.
You ready?
Yes,
You gotta
indeed.
jack the
All
trend.
right, everybody. YN Takeover number 2. I had a great time. They brought a whole bunch of shenanigans over here, as we knew they would, and they delivered on the fuckery.
Yes. Of course.
So congratulations to you guys. Congratulations to everybody that popped out. We got Script, we got Ash, we got YN number 1, YN number 2. We got the YN. They brought their own queen.
They brought their own queen.
They brought their own queen.
Clap it up. Clap it up.
Baby,
Clap it up for the first time on the show.
First time on the show.
Yes.
And they want you to come back. They want you to come back.
We want you to come back.
That's
We got
sugar. Ooh.
our queen as usual, and we love her. And I always gotta give thanks to my man right here,
Yes,
the
indeed.
DJ.
Yes, Kimmy. Yes,
The world's
yes.
best co-host. And with that being said, appreciate y'all for popping in. Make sure y'all show up next Sunday. And I'm your boy, Golden Crush 200, aka Mr. 200. We out.
Good night, y'all.